This world is a place where the blood of the weak is spilled and only the strong survive. At that moment, a veteran hunter was trying to teach a novice how to use a bow. He told the boy to aim straight, breathe deeply, and release the arrow at the right moment. The string tensed, the arrow was fired, or at least that's what should have happened. The animal fled, and the bow was simply destroyed in Johann's hands. The hunter was completely baffled and asked why he hadn't hit the prey and, above all, how he managed to break the bow like that. Johann replied that the bow seemed a bit fragile, perhaps because it was old. The man shot back immediately, saying he had bought it just 1 week ago. Then he sighed, saying he'd had a bad feeling from the moment that boy decided to learn how to hunt. He also asked why a noble was so insistent on becoming a hunter. According to him, it would be far more useful to learn fencing, but Johann replied that a sword only paid when someone was hired. The hunter didn't understand at all and asked what that meant, so Johann just changed the subject and told him to forget it. Deep down, Johann could only think that he needed money to survive in that rotten world. His name was Johann Eitz, but in his past life he had been called Kim Johann. After dying unexpectedly in an accident, he ended up reincarnating in that new world. Being born a noble seemed like something good at first, but the reality was different. Within the Eitz family, he occupied practically the lowest level of the hierarchy. He inherited no fame, no influence, no wealth. In fact, if he were lucky, he might not be expelled from his home by his own brothers in the future. While walking through the forest, the two of them ended up encountering a wolf pack devouring corpses scattered across the ground. The hunter quickly drove the animals away using arrows, but that only made Johann realize once more what the true problem of that world was. That medieval era was far too cruel. They didn't even know if those bodies belonged to their village, but one thing was certain: the weak died without anyone caring, and Johann understood that perfectly. If he didn't want to become prey, he needed to get money. When he first arrived in that world, he imagined he would awaken some special power or receive a miraculous system, just like in the stories he knew, but none of that existed. So he decided to focus on one single thing: getting rich. With money, he could abandon that miserable territory and live however he wanted. He could become a merchant, a farmer, or anything else. For him, everything came down to money. While thinking about that, the hunter caught his attention and showed him a rare medicinal herb he had found. It was the abinia herb, known for stopping bleeding and helping the body recover. Before the man even finished explaining, Johann snatched the plant from his hand and stashed it in his bag, saying it would certainly be worth a lot of money. Shortly after, the hunter noticed something had fallen from Johann's belongings. It was a small pouch full of herbs. The boy quickly replied that it wasn't his, but the man found that strange. According to him, no one other than themselves ventured that deep into the forest, unless there was someone else there. Shortly after, they heard the desperate scream of a girl calling for help. She had climbed a tree to escape a wolf pack. The hunter immediately recognized the girl. It was Dell, Robert's daughter, but there were far too many wolves around her. The man said it would be impossible to face them alone and suggested retreating to get reinforcements. But before he even finished speaking, Johann took off running toward the monsters. The hunter panicked and asked what he thought he was doing. Those weren't ordinary wolves. They were man-eaters, dangerous predators. Even so, Johann replied that everything was fine. His plan was to draw the animals' attention while rescuing the girl. The hunter was shocked. In his mind, a noble was literally offering himself as bait to save a simple commoner. As he advanced, Johann could only think that he should have taken the hunting training more seriously. After all, there were at least 10 wolves there. On the other hand, he also realized that selling all those pelts would bring in a good sum. Then he went at the animals using completely senseless swordsmanship. It was obvious he didn't know how to wield a sword, and the result came quickly. As soon as one of the wolves lunged, it ended up biting the blade itself and destroyed the sword in an instant. Shortly after, another animal jumped straight for Johann's throat. At the same time, in the Eitz family's territory, specifically in the village of Baltradam, a group was conducting a territorial inspection. The nobles observed the miserable population with contempt as they walked through the poor streets of the region. Among them was the concubine known as Madame Eitz, accompanied by the first son, Philip Eitz, and also the lord of the territory, Gessen Eitz. Gessen was an arrogant drunk who complained, as always, about how the interior was a miserable place. During the inspection, Philip commented that he still hadn't seen any sign of Johann and said he couldn't believe he dared to miss the official visit. Then he asked whether he should send soldiers to look for that useless fool, but Gessen replied that it wasn't worth wasting time on an idiot. He said that if the boy died in some corner just like his mother, nobody would miss him. While walking, the lord ended up noticing an enormous pile of straw near the village entrance and asked irritably what that was. The residents replied that they had covered the traces of Johann's training. That left Gessen even more confused. Training? That worm? But when he saw what was hidden beneath the straw, he was startled. There were several trees completely destroyed by Johann's punches. And at that very moment in the forest, the wolf that seemed to have bitten his throat had actually been blocked by his extremely muscular arm. Then Johann realized something. Using a sword definitely wasn't his style. In the next instant, he punched the wolf away and said he would settle this his own way. Survival belonged to the strong. He had finally understood that. To avoid becoming prey in that cruel era, he needed money, and to get money, he he needed strength. His next punch completely crushed the skull of one of the wolves. Then came another, and another. Johann began destroying all the animals using only his fists, shattering skulls and necks with absurd strength. The hunter was completely shocked and asked what kind of monstrous strength that was, but Johann could only look at the corpses, thinking about how much money that would bring in. He had no choice but to accept that life in that world would never be easy. Being an illegitimate son, he was humiliated and beaten by his own brothers all the time, and that made him quickly understand just how cruel medieval reality was. Even if he were beaten to death, no one would care. That's why Johann learned he could only count on himself, so he began thinking about what he needed to do to survive in that world. Fortunately, he had an enormous advantage compared to the people of that era. In his past life, he had been an exam taker who studied non-stop trying to land a stable job. Thanks to that, he carried knowledge that seemed impossible for the people of that medieval world, and it was precisely using that modern knowledge that he began an absurd training regimen. Johann started studying his own body scientifically. He began eating foods that people normally discarded, even though they were extremely nutritious ingredients, such as nuts, cabbage, beans, and eggs. He also set up an intense exercise routine based on modern knowledge about physical strengthening. In addition, he trained martial arts without rest. The years passed and all that training began producing monstrous results, until, after much effort, Johann reached an absurd level of physical strength, becoming capable of destroying an entire tree with a single punch. With each training session, Johann's body grew even stronger. His musculature already looked like a true wall of steel. Nobody could explain where that absurd strength came from. Perhaps it was a divine blessing, or perhaps simply the result of someone who had surpassed their own limits. After killing the last wolf, he began collecting the bodies, thinking only about how much it would bring in money. Meanwhile, Joseph, Johann's caretaker, rescued the girl and checked if she was injured. Fortunately, Adele had no serious wounds. Even relieved, Joseph still looked at Johann in disbelief and said it had been an absolutely reckless thing to do. After all, he had faced a pack of wild beasts alone without hesitation to save a defenseless girl. But the reality was a little different. In Johann's head, what really mattered was the price of those wolves' hides. After finishing gathering the corpses, he asked Adele if she was alright. The girl replied she hadn't been hurt thanks to him, but shortly after, she mentioned she was sensing a frightening presence nearby. Before the others even understood what she meant, they all turned in the same direction. Then the true leader of the pack appeared. A gigantic alpha wolf emerged slowly from between the trees. It was much larger than all the others combined, and radiated monstrous pressure. Upon seeing it, Joseph panicked and said they needed to flee immediately. According to him, an entire army would be needed to defeat a creature of that level. While staring down the monster, Johann could only think of one thing. He had genuinely believed that this world was just an ordinary medieval era, but now he was discovering that monsters truly existed. The alpha wolf walked slowly around them, as if analyzing its prey before striking. Even so, Johann still found time to apologize to the animal for the wolves he had killed. He had no choice. Wolf hide was worth a lot of money. At the same time, he could clearly sense that this monster could kill him in seconds, but he decided to advance anyway. When the wolf tried to bite him, Johann barely dodged and commented that the alpha's pelt would probably be worth even more. Then he grabbed rocks and dirt from the ground and hurled everything at the creature's eyes. The improvised attack ended up opening a small wound on the monster's face, but instead of attacking immediately, the alpha wolf let out a tremendous howl. The sound was so overwhelming that everyone was stunned on the spot. Johann's vision began to spin, his body lost its strength, and he ended up fainting. While unconscious, he had a strange dream involving two knights fighting in an extremely bizarre way. When he finally woke up, he realized the alpha wolf had disappeared. Everyone was still alive. Even trying to understand what had happened, Johann found no answer. He only knew that monsters like that could appear again at any moment, so he decided to leave the wolf corpses there. He desperately wanted to sell those pelts, but surviving came first. Then the group began making their way back to the village. On the way, Johann realized he could still stand after all of that, and even started thinking positively. Maybe people were looking for Adele at that moment. Maybe saving the girl would earn him some points with her father. Maybe he would even be recognized as the family's successor. But he quickly realized that was impossible. Not a chance. At best, maybe he could become a guard or a knight. At least that way he would never have to worry about food again. But when they finally approached the village, they noticed many people gathered holding torches. Among them were the members of the Eitz family. The first to speak was Philip Eitz, who asked where Johann had been and how he dared disappear on the very day of the territorial inspection. In that instant, Johann remembered. That was right. That blasted inspection was happening on that very day. Before he could explain anything, Gessen Eitz dismounted furiously, bellowing for him to shut his mouth. Even while carrying Adele in his arms, Johann tried to explain that he had faced unavoidable circumstances, but the man didn't want to hear any of it. He ordered him to be quiet, and said he would split his skull in two for ignoring a direct order. While listening to that after nearly dying in the forest, Johann could only think about how utterly miserable life in that world truly was. Even so, he realized he might be able to turn this situation into an opportunity opportunity, so he explained that he hadn't missed the inspection on purpose. He said he was late because he had been protecting the residents of the forest, and this time he actually had witnesses. Adele's father ran to his daughter desperately, relieved to see she was alive. Seizing the moment, Johann pointed to the girl and explained to the father that she had been surrounded by several man-eating wolves. According to him, he had faced all the monsters alone to save her. After that, he apologized for his absence and affirmed he would continue doing everything possible for the safety of the territory. He even took the opportunity to suggest that it would be great to receive a position as a guard. In his head, that had been a perfect presentation. But Gessen simply began to laugh. With mockery, he asked if that was the story of the great future captain of the guard, or some similar nonsense. Then he questioned where the wolf corpses were. After all, he wouldn't believe anything without proof. Johann insisted he was telling the truth, and even mentioned the enormous black wolf that appeared at the end. The village people were frightened upon hearing that, but Gessen didn't believe a single word. On the contrary, he grew even more irritated and asked how his son dared to lie like that. Then he threatened to rip out his mouth. Tired of that humiliation, Johann asked whether his father wanted to settle it in a duel. He said he could prove his abilities personally. Even hating that man, he still recognized him as his father, so he didn't want to fight for real. But there seemed to be no other option. Upon hearing that, Gessen decided to accept. He ordered Johann to grab a sword and said the two of them would duel right then and there. But there was a small problem. No one had ever taught Johann how to properly use a sword. When his father ordered him to draw the weapon, he ended up revealing the broken sword the wolves had destroyed in the forest. Irritated, Gessen ordered Philip to hand the brother another sword. While doing so, Philip quietly approached and urged Johann to beg for mercy. According to him, that was the only way to get out alive. But Johann calmly replied that he saw no reason to flee from the fight. After all, a real man doesn't back down from a battle. Even trying to help him, Philip realized his brother had already made up his mind. So Johann took the new sword and said he hoped to learn quite a bit from that duel. But deep down, he was thinking about something else. Maybe this was better this way. If he showed his true strength before everyone, he would finally be recognized by the family. He would finally prove his worth. And the instant he advanced for the first time against his own father, even Geisen felt fear from the monstrous aura emanating from Johann. But on the very first blow, Johann broke another sword. The shards flew straight at his own face, but even Gessen himself suffered some cuts. Furious, he turned on his son wielding an enormous axe and asked how he dared insult him like that. The villagers began murmuring among themselves that the Lord was fighting in earnest, and that he truly intended to kill his own son. Gessen then asked if Johann knew why he had never taught him to use a sword. According to him, it was because the boy was useless, a worthless worm. He said that with or without a sword, no matter how hard he tried, he would never surpass him. The territory was his alone, and no one could take that away. Meanwhile, Johann was barely dodging the violent axe blows, thinking the old man had lost his mind from all his drinking again. The blood flowing from his earlier wound was already hindering his vision. It was at that moment that Philip suddenly shouted his name. The distraction nearly cost him his life, because an axe blow grazed past his head. By reflex, Johann blocked using the sword's hilt, but the weapon was also destroyed on impact. Then Geisen told the boy to know his place, and swore that if he saw him again, he would crush his skull without mercy. After that, the Lord left, but the villagers remained by Johann's side. Later, Valberg was tending to his wounds while complaining about the outrageous injustice of it all, calling Geisen a pig without honor. Johann asked him to speak more quietly since someone might overhear, but the priest replied he didn't care. After all, he was a man of the Vatican, and a knight should act with honor, not treat his own son that way. Even wounded, Johann said everything was fine because at least he had gotten out alive, but Valberg continued indignant, saying it had been outrageous. Gessen had been wearing full armor, which made everything even more unjust. Johann replied that was simply reality. He had never properly learned to use a sword, but he also hadn't imagined he was that weak. Then Valberg explained that Gessen had participated in many battles and had inherited techniques from his own family. In addition to his enormous experience, it was only natural that an ordinary person would end up losing to him. The priest also mentioned Sir Breach from the neighboring territory, saying he had heard rumors that he had killed 300 soldiers on his own. Surprised, Johann asked if that was really true. In his mind, the man must be monstrously strong. Then he began thinking that perhaps equipment really did matter. After all, after scaring off that great black wolf, he had believed he could defeat his own drunken father. That was when Valberg asked if he was absolutely certain about the black wolf story. Johann replied yes, and said that Joseph and Adele had also seen the creature, so they could confirm everything. In that instant, the priest gripped his cross and began to pray. Confused, Johann asked what was wrong. Then Valberg explained that since ancient times, black wolves had been considered a taboo. The priests called those creatures precursors of death. According to the old stories, they appeared bringing blood, tragedy, and destruction wherever they passed. Even hearing that, Johann replied he didn't believe in those superstitions. Even so, he commented that perhaps the wolf could have been a kind of warning about the duel against his father, but Valberg asked him not to worry too much, because those stories were very old. Perhaps Perhaps God was simply helping someone as kind as him, someone who always put others above himself. Upon hearing that, Johann was left thinking to himself. In his view, he wasn't such a good person. He just wanted to make money and live in peace. Meanwhile, in the neighboring territory of Barony Brits, many people were being massacred by soldiers. Houses were burned, residents were killed without mercy, and it all happened as if it were just another ordinary job. The mercenaries only wanted to receive the promised gold, nothing more. The man commanding that invasion was Karamav. Shortly after the massacre, he received the news that the cleansing of the territory had already been completed. He also received the ring bearing the Brits family seal. Holding the ring, Karamav commented that he had high expectations for Brits, especially after hearing the story that he had defeated 300 soldiers on his own. Even so, the man hadn't withstood even 2 attacks. To Karamav, someone so weak didn't even deserve to be called a toy. Then he began introducing himself arrogantly, declaring himself the sword of the Holy Empire, the herald of his imperial majesty, and the retriever of seals. He declared he would punish all corrupt nobles, exactly as the emperor desired. Those who stood alongside the empire would receive infinite riches, but those who opposed it would die without exception. And the next target would be the Whites' territory. That same night, Johann had the same nightmare again. Once more, he saw the combat between 2 knights amid the flames, but this time, he managed to exchange even more blows during the fight. Even so, in the end, his head was severed and rolled across the ground away from his body. When he woke up in a panic, he realized he had been having that dream repeatedly since the day he encountered the Black Wolf. Then he remembered Valberg's words about black wolves being precursors of death, as if their mere existence were a sign of ill omen. But Johann replied that he didn't believe in such things. To him, they were just old superstitions. Even the priest himself had said those were probably just old stories. Besides, he hadn't done anything against the wolf. Well, thinking about it more carefully, he suddenly remembered that he had actually thrown a rock right into the creature's eyes. Not wanting to think too much about that, Johann decided to do what he knew better than anything else: train. So he went back to punching trees in the middle of the forest, exactly as he did every day. It was at that moment that the rank 2 and rank 3 brothers appeared. They were so irrelevant that nobody even bothered remembering their names. The 2 began mocking Johann, asking if he had already forgotten their father's warning. After all, Gessen had made it quite clear that he shouldn't draw any more attention if he wanted to stay alive. Even so, the 2 kept provoking. They said that despite all that training, Johann still got beaten by them easily. They compared him to a dog that barks but doesn't bite, someone who just kept punching trees without doing anything truly impressive. They also asked if he really thought breaking a trunk was something incredible. To them, that was just a cheap trick. The brothers also said that someone like Johann would never have real strength, and that their father would never choose a piece of trash like him to inherit the territory. At that moment, Johann was holding himself back as hard as he could to keep from losing his patience, but he ended up taking all his rage out on the tree before him, destroying the entire trunk at the base with a single punch. After that, he looked at the 2 brothers and asked if they had said something. He also asked why they didn't repeat that a little closer. The 2 completely lost their nerve and ran away, saying they would tell their father everything. Watching that, Johann wondered how those people managed to live so unoccupied. To him, both of them were complete idiots. Besides, it made no sense to waste time worrying about other people's opinions. But shortly after, Philip, the eldest brother, appeared. Unlike the others, he spoke seriously. He said the brothers were right about one thing: their father truly had no intention of giving Johann any important position. The boy replied he had already suspected that for a long time. Still, considering that Gessen hadn't killed him in that duel, things could have ended much worse. For Johann, life was just like that. If he couldn't live that way, he would find another way to survive. But Philip explained the situation was more complicated than it seemed. According to him, their father was afraid of Johann. His strength was real, and that threatened Gessen. The Lord wanted obedient sons, exactly like Philip, but Johann was different. He insisted on living by his own principles. In Gessen's view, one day Johann would eventually grow strong enough to take his territory. After all, Gessen himself had surpassed his own father the same way in the past. Even hearing all that, Johann replied that it all seemed like nonsense. It was then that Philip handed him some things: common clothes, a longsword, and armor. Then he asked if the brother hadn't been eyeing that equipment for quite some time. Next, he explained that he wasn't like their father. He wasn't the type to discard someone just because the person caused problems. So when he became the new lord in the future, he wanted to appoint Johann as captain of the Guard. Until that day came, he only asked that his brother keep training and, if possible, stop picking fights everywhere. But Johann replied that he was never the one who started the problems. After that, Philip simply showed him a thumbs up as a farewell and left. When left alone, Johann stared at the armor for a few seconds and noticed something strange. That was the exact same armor that appeared in his nightmares. If he wore it, perhaps he would end up dying the same way as in the dream. Even so, for some reason, he felt that that he could overcome that fate. So he put on the breastplate and decided that if he truly wanted to win someday, he would need better equipment. Later, in a tavern in the territory, the residents were drinking, eating, and talking about Johann Eitz. Some commented, impressed, that he had killed 50 wolves on his own and still left all the pelts behind, because a true knight should not be obsessed with money. Others said he had drawn his sword only to save Dell and Joseph, and for that reason he was a pure, virtuous man, and the perfect example of an ideal knight. One of the men even went so far as to say that Johann had more of a knight's spirit than Lord Gezen himself, who was known only as a drunken womanizer. Another replied, asking why that pig still hadn't died. In his opinion, Johann should have taken Gezen's head right then and there. As the conversation continued, Dell's father announced the drinks that night would be on him. A hooded man sitting at the bar asked why. Then the man replied that Johann had saved his daughter, and that for that reason he considered him a true knight of justice. The other customers began looking suspiciously at the hooded figure, because they had never seen that man around there before, but the stranger calmly replied that they seemed quite comfortable mocking their own lord in front of a stranger. Even so, he admitted he had found that whole story extremely interesting, and he asked them to tell him more about Johann. That night, after finishing his training, Johann finally returned to the city. While walking through the streets, he was thinking about what Philip had said earlier. Perhaps he really did want to nominate him as captain of the guard. That seemed incredible. For the first time, he felt he had found a path to follow in life. But then he noticed a man lying in the middle of the road. By his appearance, he seemed completely drunk. Johann approached and commented that if he slept there like that, he would end up catching a cold. Then he asked where his house was so he could take him there. But suddenly, the man leapt up at an absurd speed and put a knife to Johann's throat. In that instant, he began thinking about who that person could be. An assassin sent by Gessen? That didn't make sense. Gessen would probably want to kill him personally. Maybe he had been sent by Madame Eitz. Even in that situation, Johann tried to stay calm and asked what he wanted. Money? If so, he would hand over everything, so he just needed to let him go. But the man replied he already had more money than he needed. Then he said he would ask just one question. If he didn't like the answer, he would cut his throat immediately. At that moment, Johann thought the guy was completely insane. Even so, he remained calm. After all, he had managed to reach the second round of interviews at a huge company before. He could answer this too. Then the man commented that Johann had a body far too well defined to be the son of that pig. The question was so strange that Johann almost couldn't believe it. What kind of perverted question was that? Even so, he calmly replied that sometimes a lion could be born in the lineage of a pig. The man loved the answer. Then he declared that Johann Eitz now belonged to him. Without understanding anything, Johann was left wondering who that man really was. That man was Kegel, the Empire's finest assassin, master of poisons of the Nasos Guild. He had refined his fencing through countless assassinations. His movements resembled those of a serpent, and for that reason he had earned the nickname Venomous Serpent. But even someone like Kegel had his own problems. He had never managed to find a worthy successor to inherit his technique. He searched everywhere, even within the Assassin's Guild, but found only useless individuals. Some even showed potential, but knights always refused to learn the skills of an assassin. More than 30 heirs of knight families had died by Kegel's hands. All of them preferred to die in the name of their own honor. Growing increasingly impatient, he eventually visited the Empire's witch. It was then that he heard a prophecy. The woman said that Kegel, he who granted a peaceful death to all, would find the disciple he sought inside the castle of the Eitz family, a small and forsaken territory in the interior. The son of that drunken traitor would be the perfect successor. Kegel found that ridiculous. He asked if she was really talking about that god-forsaken backwater, where a single gold coin would buy half those lands. The witch coldly replied that if he didn't like the prophecy, he could ask for his money back. But Kegel refused immediately. Tampering with a witch's coins would surely bring a curse, so he decided to believe. The truth was, he had already wasted many years looking for a successor, and he felt his time was running out. Even so, when he finally arrived at the Eitz territory, he still had his doubts. Would the boy really be there? And if he didn't like him, he would kill the kid on the spot. Then he presented himself before Johann and declared that he would become his successor. Either that, or die right there. From that moment on, he would have to learn the way of an assassin. But Johann's reaction was completely unexpected. He asked how much he would have to pay to learn. Kegel replied irritably that he wasn't charging that idiotic kid anything. In that instant, Johann's eyes lit up. He began thinking that learning incredible skills for free was too good to be true. Then he asked why the master had taken so long to appear, since he had been waiting for someone like him his whole life. Even Kegel was left without a response. Even so, he decided to explain that his area of expertise was assassination. Learning those techniques meant throwing away one's honor, destroying the family name, and living in the shadows. But Johann simply replied that he didn't care one bit about honor, shame, or anything of the sort. He just wanted to get stronger, so he asked to be taught. That left Kegel completely taken aback. It was the first time he had ever encountered a boy like that. And the situation got even worse when Johann asked if he had plenty of money. After all, if he was going to become his disciple, he wanted to know if he would also receive an allowance. At that instant, Kegel realized realized that kid was truly one of a kind. Meanwhile, later, Gessen was preparing to leave after the territorial inspection. Philip wished him a safe journey and assured him he would take care of the castle in his absence. But Madame 8 said exactly the same thing. The concubine declared that no matter how hard Philip tried, the castle would end up belonging to her. Philip replied immediately that was ridiculous, because he would be the next lord of the castle. Tired of the argument, Gessen told them both to be quiet. He was fed up with the fighting and said they could do whatever they wanted. It was then that Philip mentioned Johann still hadn't returned and asked what they should do. But Gessen replied he didn't want to waste time talking about that useless person. To him, that weakling was of no importance whatsoever. Even as Philip apologized to his father, he couldn't hide his concern. He kept wondering where Johann was at a time like this. Meanwhile, in a forest near the Eitz castle, Kaigal decided to test the boy's abilities. He handed a sword to Johann, but was already annoyed before the fight even began. He thought that kid was far too reckless. After all, he kept breaking swords. Maybe it would be better to just kill him right away. The two then assumed combat positions. But Johann entered a fighting stance using his fists, not the sword. Confused, Kegel asked what kind of position that was. Then Johann asked if he could fight however he wanted, or if he was required to use a sword. Kegel replied he could use anything, rocks, blades, or his bare fists. In that instant, Johann advanced holding the sword, but attacking with a punch. The first strike completely destroyed Kegel's sword. It was at that moment that all of the assassin's doubts disappeared, because that boy was absurdly strong. Kegel began to feel terrified. Even holding only a broken sword, Johann continued throwing monstrous punches. The air pressure produced by the blows was already enough to push the assassin back. One of the attacks grazed Kegel's nose, drawing blood. In that instant, he felt his own bones and muscles tremble. He was absolutely certain that if he were hit directly by one of those punches, he would be crushed on the spot. It was like facing a real lion. Sensing the danger, Kegel finally decided to use his sword technique, the serpent technique. The movements were fast and unpredictable, very different from anything Johann had ever seen. Unable to react in time, he ended up taking a direct hit from the hilt of Kegel's sword. When Johann fell to the ground, Kegel commented that he had hit him only with the sword's handle. Even so, the boy hadn't fainted, and that was absurd. According to him, if Johann had been born 1,000 years earlier, he probably would have been treated as a legendary hero. The young man thanked him for the compliment, but Kegel quickly said that didn't change the fact that he had a critical weakness. At that rate, he would end up dying sooner or later, no matter how much he trained. Not understanding, Johann asked why he would die. Then Kegel explained that he couldn't control his own strength, and that was exactly what would end up killing him someday. The boy replied that made no sense. After all, it wasn't as if he was hitting himself. Without wasting time, Kegel drew another sword from among the many he carried hidden in his cloak. He said that if Johann was so confident he could face him again, all he needed to do was manage to break his sword. Energized, Johann charged at him like a complete fool. The instant the swords clashed, his weapon shattered immediately. The fragments flew straight at his own face, exactly as had happened before. Then Kegel asked if he had finally understood. The problem was that Johann lost control of his own strength at the moment of impact. If he didn't learn to control that, he would end up killing himself one day. While watching the sword fragments fly, he noticed one of them had been launched directly toward his heart. He only didn't die because the fragment got stuck in the breastplate of his armor. Startled, Johann asked if Kegel had aimed at his heart on purpose. The man replied yes. According to him, that was simple when one truly knew how to use a sword. It was at that moment that Johann finally understood what he needed to learn. Strength alone wasn't enough. He needed to control his strength to survive. After all, he still wanted to become the future captain of the Eitz Guard. In the end, he would be a public servant once again. Kegel replied that if he learned to contain his own power, that could actually happen. Shortly after, he decided to demonstrate. Even with the sword still sheathed, he made a quick and stealthy movement that slipped past Johann's broken sword. In an instant, the boy's armor was cut as if it were nothing. Then Kegel asked if he had noticed that, if he learned to properly control his strength, he would be able to cut through anything, and when he mastered it completely, he wouldn't even be able to imagine how comfortable fighting would become. After that, Kegel said the conversation had gone on long enough and that now the real training would begin. He also warned that it would be extremely difficult and that Johann might even die in the middle of the process. Even so, he asked if he was ready. Without hesitating, Johann replied, "Yes, master." The next morning, he crossed through the village completely wrecked. He was battered all over from the training. Gradually, he was learning to control his strength and also to withstand blows. Although his master was clearly exaggerating a bit, at least now he could already avoid breaking his own sword. When he finally approached home, near the castle gates, he noticed several elves standing there. Confused, he asked who they were. One of the elves immediately told him to leave, saying it was a restricted area. Irritated, Johann asked if the guy even knew who he was talking to. The elf replied he was part of the mercenaries hired directly by his imperial majesty. They were known as the Wolves of Akaton. At that instant, Johann was impressed. He was in need of money, so he asked how much they got paid for their service. The elves laughed and asked if he wanted to become a mercenary too. One One of them replied that their pay was incomparable. They received 2 gold coins per job. Upon hearing that, Johan was stunned. He had never seen even a single gold coin in his life. The mercenaries ended up taking a liking to him and started joking around, saying he was incredibly strong but that muscles alone didn't mean much without skill. While listening to that, Johan started seriously considering a career change. Being a mercenary seemed far better than becoming captain of the guard. In his head, that was practically the life of a freelancer. But before he could keep thinking about it, a far more imposing man appeared, mounted on an enormous warhorse. He wore massive armor, and just looking at him made Johan instinctively reach for his sword. He didn't even want to do that, but his body reacted on its own. One of the female mercenaries immediately asked what kind of rudeness that was, drawing a sword in front of Sir Karamov, but the man himself said it was fine. With a calm voice, Karamov asked who he was. In that instant, Johan bowed and introduced himself as Johan of House Eitz. That man was Karamov, one of the knights of the Holy Emperor's Guard. While staring him down, Johan noticed he was still gripping the sword without even having realized it. He had never felt anything like this before, not even before the Black Wolf. The murderous intent coming off that man was suffocating. It felt as if he were just prey standing before an enormous predator. Without concern, Karamov simply ordered his men to move forward, as they were blocking the road. When the mercenaries passed by Johan, some began to laugh, saying he had nearly soiled himself in fear. They also warned him to be careful next time, because maybe there wouldn't even be a next opportunity. After they moved some distance away, Jane, one of Karamov's knights, asked if it was really alright to just let that young man go. Then Karamov replied he didn't want to cause problems in a place like this. At least not yet. Even after the mercenaries departed, Johan kept thinking about it. What was a knight directly from the Emperor doing in a place like this? It made no sense for someone so important to suddenly appear in the Eitz family's territory. Meanwhile, Philip rushed to the castle entrance to personally receive Sir Karamov. In his mind, it was unbelievable that a figure of that level was inside his own property. As soon as he arrived, he introduced himself politely as Philip Eitz, the future lord of the house. But before he could continue, Madame Eitz had already taken over the situation. With an exaggerated smile, she began lavishing praise on Karamov, saying he was an incredibly handsome man. She also commented that the true future lord of the family would be Johan, not Philip. She continued speaking shamelessly, saying that if she had known beforehand that a man as magnificent as Karamov existed, she would have married him instead of her husband. But the Imperial Knight simply ignored all of it. Showing no reaction, he removed his helmet, walked to the throne of the hall, and sat down as if he owned the place. Then he asked just one thing: where was Gessen? Upon hearing that, Philip tried to maintain his composure and replied that, regardless of Karamov's reputation, it wasn't appropriate to mention the lord by name like that. But before the situation worsened, Madame Eitz immediately interrupted, saying there was absolutely no problem. According to her, Karamov was the greatest knight of the empire and could address the lord however he wished. Shortly after, she said she would personally take care of receiving him and asked if that was all right. While watching all of that, Philip immediately realized what that woman was trying to do. She wanted to use that opportunity to bring Johan closer to someone as influential as Karamov, but the Imperial Knight himself lost patience with both of them. He told them both to be quiet and said to bring him a drink. He would wait inside the castle until Gessen returned. That same night, Johan returned for more training with Kegel. However, his mind was far away. He couldn't stop thinking about Karamov and the overwhelming pressure he had felt when facing that man. Noticing the boy's distraction, Kagel immediately shouted for him to focus on the training. In an instant, he disarmed Johan and pressed the blade to his throat. At the same time, several daggers had been thrown without the boy noticing. Then Kegel explained that if those weapons had been poisoned, he would already be dead. Then he asked why he was so distracted. Johan replied that some knights of the Imperial Guard had recently appeared in the village, and there was something strange about them. That was the Eitz family's land. Even being the Emperor's knights, they shouldn't simply control the people and close the city gates like that. But Kegel asked what exactly he could do about it. After all, Karamov was a knight directly under the Emperor, the continent's strongest warrior, one of the pillars of the Holy Empire's power. Curious, Johan asked if he was stronger than Kegel himself. The old assassin replied that if he ever had to face Karamov, he would hit the brakes immediately, turn around, and flee without thinking twice. Even so, Johan replied that he would only find out who was stronger when they actually fought. In that instant, he received a smack to the head. Kegel told the boy to learn his own place before talking nonsense. At the moment, he still couldn't even properly control his own strength. He was just a kid without even the basics of fencing. After that, Johan finally went back to focusing on the training. He wanted to keep learning. He wanted to get stronger. Noticing the change, Kegel said now he was acting much better. Then the two continued training, and as always, Johan kept taking hit after hit. Even so, little by little he began noticing something strange. He couldn't read Kegel's movements, nor land his own attacks correctly. The worst part was that the old man wasn't even using a real sword. He fought only with the sword's scabbard, with no blade at all. It was at that moment that Johan began to understand the real problem. Swinging the sword with uncontrolled force wasn't enough. enough. He needed to learn to create a flow of force, concentrating his power at specific points on the blade. As he moved the sword over and over, he slowly began to understand what truly controlling his own strength meant, and Keigal noticed it immediately. The sound of Johann's sword began to change. The blows started to sound sharper and more dangerous. For the first time, Keigal even had to dodge some of the attacks. Little by little, Johann was bringing together everything he had learned up to that point. He adjusted his strength, stabilized his movements, and gripped the sword's hilt correctly. Then he delivered a blow, and in that instant, even Keigal felt fear. The attack cut the old assassin's sword clean in half. Excited, Johann shouted that he had done it. He had finally understood how to make it work, and in his view, it didn't even seem that difficult. But this time, Keigal drew his real sword. With a serious look, he said he was done going easy on him. The next stage of training would begin at that very moment. When Johann advanced again, something absurd happened. Without realizing it, he reproduced exactly Keigal's technique, the famous serpent sword. The next blow knocked the old assassin to the ground. Fully energized, Johann began to laugh, saying he had won again. But lying on the ground, all Keigal could think about was what an absurdity that boy was. He hadn't taught him anything beyond strength control. Even so, Johann had perfectly copied the serpent tongue technique entirely on his own. And the worst part was that he had learned it in just 2 days. In fact, he was using the technique in an even more refined manner than its creator. A lifetime's experience as an assassin told Keigal only one thing: unless some miracle occurred, Johann had already become someone he could never defeat. The master of the most feared assassins guild in the empire, the Poison of Nazos, could only whisper to himself that that boy was completely insane. After that, Keigal said his teachings were over. At sunrise, he would be leaving that place. Unable to believe it, Johann asked if he was really going to leave. In his view, he had barely learned the basics. But Keigal replied there was nothing left to teach. Whether he liked it or not, Johann had already become stronger than him. Even so, the old man said he was satisfied. At least his swordsmanship wouldn't disappear from the world. Now the boy could live however he wished, and he had worked hard to get there. Later, while resting at a small campsite in the forest, Johann asked once more if he was really leaving at dawn. Keigal replied yes. He didn't like staying in the same place for too long. Curious, Johann asked if there was any reason he had become an assassin. The old man was silent for a moment before replying that there wasn't. That was simply his nature. Then Johann decided to ask something else. He wanted to know about the ill omens, about the story of the black wolf. He told him that recently he had encountered a strange wolf. After that, he dreamed he was being beheaded, and then he ended up meeting Keigal himself. At first he thought it was a sign of doom, but in the end, it might not have been so bad after all. Keigal said that if he had killed him, that truly would have been a bad sign, but he explained that bad luck can appear in many different forms. Before departing, he decided to give his pupil some important advice. First, Johann needed to find a weapon appropriate for his own strength. According to Keigal, at minimum it would need to be made of Dano steel to withstand the impact of his blows. Dano steel was a metal imbued with magic, something extremely rare. Nowadays, it only existed in the form of legendary relics, because the method of creation had been lost long ago. Therefore, the only way to obtain that metal was by mining ancient ruins. Because of this rarity, weapons made of Danos were practically treasures. Normally, only very experienced dwarven blacksmiths could work with that material. Upon hearing this, Johann asked if a weapon like that must cost a fortune. Then Keigal replied that even saving money for an entire lifetime, he probably still wouldn't be able to buy one. Even so, he explained he wasn't saying that to discourage him. He just wanted Johann to understand that he needed a weapon capable of complementing the absurd situation he was in. Even the color of Dano steel was unusual, so if he ever encountered someone carrying a weapon made of that material, the best course of action would be to flee immediately. People who didn't know their own limits tended to die young. Johann replied he would keep that in mind and asked if the master was really leaving now. Then Keigal said to never forget the next words. He should not face enemies he could not defeat. If a situation was too dangerous, he had to flee without shame, and if he ended up trapped in an unavoidable fight, he should use any method necessary to win. Following that rule, he might have a long life, because he could not die. After that, Keigal left, and those words were branded deeply in Johann's mind. He needed to survive, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in the Eitz family's castle, Madame Eitz continued fawning over Karamov. At one point, he picked up the drink he had been given, complained it tasted like rotten piss, and hurled the bottle against the wall, smashing it. Even so, she simply replied with a smile, asking if he hadn't enjoyed the drink, mentioning that the bottle had been extremely expensive. Karamov replied that was a shame. Then Madame Eitz said that the only alcohol better than that one was stored in Lord Gessen's room. She commented he must be tired and suggested he rest in a comfortable room. She even hinted that Gessen's room would be perfect for him, and implied they could have a wonderful time together. But Karamov simply told her to disappear from his sight. The woman still insisted, saying they didn't have much time before the reception began, and that Lord Gessen would only return late that night. It was then that Karamov finally stood up. He said all right, that he would enjoy himself, and the first thing he did was tear off Madame Eitz's head with his bare hands. As blood spread across the hall, he calmly commented that the best entertainment of all was killing. All of that was witnessed by Philip, who watched from behind a crack in the door. Later, when Johann finally returned to the family's territory, he found the castle and the entire village in flames. At the same time, Gason, who was on his way home, also spotted the fire from a distance. The sun was already beginning to rise when he spurred his horse alongside his men and rode back. As soon as they arrived, some mercenaries mocked him, saying he had arrived too late and only shown up after the mess was already made. They also warned that the Mr. Pig was coming in and commented that Karamov was not a patient man. When he passed through the gates, Gessen saw a horrible scene. His people were dead, massacred. His entire family had been exterminated. Consumed by rage, he asked what Karamov had done, but the man only replied that he was late. Then Gessen asked what the hell this was. It was then that Karamov declared he was guilty of attempted assassination against the emperor and also of high treason. According to him, by direct order of His Majesty, House Eitz would be completely eradicated. Gessen immediately replied that was a sham, false accusations invented merely to execute him, and he declared he would not allow that to happen so easily. Then he advanced with his axe toward Karamov, but the man blocked the attack effortlessly. Shortly after, he ordered the trumpets to sound. His soldiers were to recover the Eitz family seal and eliminate anyone still alive in that territory. The men immediately began the massacre. The village was burned to the ground. Among the last survivors was the priest Valberg, who had been captured by a mercenary. While threatening him, the man asked why it was so difficult to just say where that bastard son of the pig was hiding, saying he wanted to kill him and be done with it. But before he could do anything, Johann appeared. With a single sword stroke, he cut off the mercenary's arm and then killed the man right there. After that, he ran to the priest Valberg and began untying him from the ropes, asking what was happening. The priest replied he didn't fully understand the situation either. He only knew that imperial soldiers were killing everyone in the territory. He also said it was possible that even Lord Gessen had already been killed. And not only that, they were burning the entire village to erase any trace of the massacre. Upon hearing that, Johann realized he needed to return to the castle immediately. But before leaving, he spotted Dell crying in the distance. At least she was still alive. But when he approached, he realized her father was dead, bound to a wooden post. In that instant, Johann remembered how that man had always been kind to him. And not just him, several other people from the village had also treated him well throughout his life. Now they were all dead. Then Johann told Dell she would be in danger if she stayed there alone. He asked the priest Valberg to look after her and get her to safety. After that, he set off alone toward the heart of the flames. But the priest Valberg tried to stop him. He said Johann needed to flee while he still could. Even so, he kept walking toward the castle. When he finally arrived, he was confronted with a horrific sight. His father's head was mounted on a wooden stake, displayed right before the entrance. Nailed to the stake was a notice. According to the message, Duke Gessen had been executed for the crime of treason against the emperor. Anyone who attempted to recover the body without authorization would receive the same punishment. At the bottom of the plaque was a single signature, Karamov. The nearby mercenaries immediately recognized who the young man was. They commented that this was the bastard son of the Eitz family, and even laughed, thinking he had managed to escape, but apparently he had come back just to die. Johann said nothing. In silence, he cut the wooden stake and gently let his father's head fall to the ground. Then he stepped on Karamov's flag without any hesitation. The mercenaries came at him immediately, but nobody there was expecting Johann's monstrous strength. He massacred the men without mercy, cutting through each of them as if they were nothing. While fighting, Johann began questioning himself. Why was he doing this? Why had he come back to the castle? The priest Valberg had been right. He should be fleeing at that moment. If he encountered Karamov, he would die. It was then that, in the middle of the path, he heard Philip's voice. The young man was lying on the ground in his armor, completely wounded and barely clinging to life. Even in that state, he asked why his brother had come back. He said he needed to flee immediately. Even so, he handed his own helmet to Johann. He wanted him to have it before leaving. That was the captain of the guard's helmet. When he held the object in his hands, Johann remembered Kegol's words. He should not face enemies he could not defeat. If the situation was too dangerous, he had to flee without looking back. And that enemy was an imperial knight. Even his master had told him to run. But then Johann also remembered the other part of the lesson. If the fight was unavoidable, he should use everything he had to win. It was at that moment that he made his decision. This was an unavoidable fight, so he put on Philip's helmet and walked to the castle gates. As soon as he opened the doors, the first mercenaries asked what he was doing there, but Johann didn't even bother to respond. He advanced, smashing the men with only his fists, while shouting for Karamov to show himself. In the middle of the massacre, the imperial soldier finally appeared. His Dano steel blade was still stained with blood. Looking at Johann, he commented that the fugitive son of the Eitz family had really survived. He also noticed this was the boy he had seen in front of the castle earlier, Johann Eitz. But Johann replied he had no patience for introductions. He only said for Karamov to think of him as an extremely furious man. Then he called him a son of a bitch. Karamav replied he really should have fled. If he had done that, he might have lived a long life, but apparently he no longer cared about his own life. While speaking, he drew his sword and said that if he wanted to die so badly, then he should come. Johan replied that he didn't even need to say that. From the very beginning, he had been ready for this fight. The combat began exactly as in Johan's nightmares. The difference was that now he felt no fear. One of Johan's first blows was so powerful, it nearly split Karamov's Danos steel sword in two. In that instant, the Imperial Knight smiled, finding it amusing. During the fight, Johan picked up various swords scattered across the ground, but they all broke after just a few blows. Even so, he didn't give up. He kept dodging. He kept pressing forward against the brutal attacks of the Imperial Guard. At one point, one of Karamov's blows destroyed one of the castle's pillars. Taking advantage of the smoke and fire spreading through the place, Johan concealed himself in the shadows. That piqued Karamov's interest. In his mind, that boy was far better than Brits. Suddenly, a corpse was hurled in his direction. Effortlessly, Karamov split the body in two and began to laugh, saying that the eight's bastard was far too entertaining. Then he asked him to keep on providing the entertainment. Shortly after, Johan advanced again using one more sword found on the ground. This time, the blow connected with the bracer of Karamov's armor, breaking part of the Dano steel and drawing blood from the knight. Johan's sword also shattered immediately after, so he simply tossed the pieces aside. The two stood face to face in the midst of fire and blood. For the first time, Karamov felt his body tremble. In his mind, that was impossible. The boy had just broken Dano's steel armor. Ordinary humans could not pierce that metal, so he began wondering who exactly this kid was, and why he was so strong. Without giving him time to think, Johan grabbed another sword and came at him again. The two began exchanging brutal blows, spreading destruction throughout the hall. Karamov couldn't understand where such strength came from. Even so, he kept fighting. His armor was already creaking from the destroyed sections, while Johan attacked as if hammering pure metal. Still, in Karamov's view, the boy was just a brute, relying entirely on strength. The blows were too wide and left several openings, but when he tried to exploit one of them, Johan dodged at the last instant. The attack only destroyed one more sword he was carrying, so he grabbed another one immediately. In Karamov's mind, that only confirmed that the boy didn't know how to fight properly. He couldn't even block a simple thrust. He just swung the sword on instinct, like a wild beast. The knight also realized that Gessen had probably never taught him real swordsmanship. Even so, he remained far too dangerous. So he decided to end the fight quickly. Then, when Johan executed another wide blow that seemed to open an enormous gap, Karamov seized the opportunity to counter, and in a single movement, he severed Johan's head, knocking off his own helmet. At least, that was what Johan thought would happen. Ever since the nightmare, he had been certain his head would be taken in that battle. So in the instant of the attack, he swerved to the side and continued striking without pause, using the serpent technique taught by Kegal. The next blow destroyed the Dano steel sword. The blade began to fragment from within, as if rotting. Karamov gave way for an instant and opened a gap. The cut slashed from arm to chest, tearing through the armor and letting elven blood pour out. He screamed. There was no telling whether it was pain, euphoria, or pure tension from the battle, but the last thing he saw was an enormous fist slamming squarely into his chest. The impact shattered his ribcage on the spot. Coughing up blood, Karamov drove his sword into the ground to keep from collapsing entirely. In that moment, he understood. That was the true technique of Kegal, the serpent assassin's swordsmanship. And then he realized that Johan had been concealing his strength throughout the entire fight. On his knees, spitting blood without end, all Karamov could see was Johan standing before him, looking like a predator ready to kill. Then Johan tore off his helmet and asked why in the hell he had done all of this. Even in that state, Karamov replied it was all for the Imperial Majesty. He said the Holy Empire was more unstable than ever, and that the Emperor had drawn his sword to set the Empire right. A sword called Karamov. He then looked at Johan with genuine admiration. He said that over decades, he had crossed countless battlefields and faced innumerable knights, but had never encountered anyone as strong as him, so he wanted to take him along. According to him, the Emperor needed talents like Johan. He promised endless gold, glory, vast and fertile lands, honor as a knight, and even a sword of the Empire. And for a moment, Johan thought endless gold really did sound good. That was the life he had always dreamed of. Money, power, and recognition. But for some reason, he felt absolutely nothing. So he refused that shit. He said Karamov had killed not only his family, but also innocent residents who had never done anything wrong. But Karamov showed no remorse whatsoever. He asked if he was really rejecting the Emperor's offer over mere peasants. He said that no one cared about their deaths, because they were just commoners. Then he went even further. He asked if Johan's mother wasn't a commoner, and called him a bastard. He said all of them were pathetic worms, and that he could simply leave that past behind. According to Karamov, the strong drink the blood of the weak. That was the true law of the world. But in that instant, Johan simply apologized to his master. He could no longer hold back his strength. The next punch broke Karamov's neck, and even after that, Johan kept punching. He punched until teeth flew out, until the helmet was crushed, until the skull was was reduced to a mass of blood and metal. He kept striking without stop, until his own hands began to bleed. Even as he was dying, Karamav still managed to spit blood and say it was already too late. He said he should have accepted the offer. After all, whoever breaks the Emperor's sword is destined for the worst suffering imaginable. Then, finally, Karamav died. In that world, death was treated as something commonplace. To survive, Johann had always coveted only one thing: money. But now everyone in his territory had been murdered. His family, his neighbors, innocent people, all mutilated and burned. And in that moment, he decided that even if the entire world became his enemy, he would do what needed to be done. No matter what anyone said, he would never regret it. That was how he chose to live from that day forward. Not far away, a surviving messenger finally arrived to inform Karamav's knight, Jane, about everything that had happened. She asked if that was really true. The mercenary replied yes. He said Johann appeared out of nowhere, faced all the soldiers on his own, and single-handedly took Sir Karamav's head. That had been the last sight they had of him. Even so, Jane didn't believe it so easily. She said that if that were true, then Karamav's corpse should be there. She wouldn't believe rumors without proof. The man replied he didn't fully understand what had happened either, but he was certain of what he had seen. Shortly after, another mercenary reported that the search team was already ready. Jane replied she would be there shortly. Later, assembled with the soldiers, she declared the new order was to kill Johann Eitz, a filthy traitor who had abandoned his own lineage and the primary suspect in the death of Sir Karamav. And at that moment, Johann was indeed fleeing. He was still carrying Karamav's body with him. When the mercenaries finally found his trail, Jane ordered them to capture him immediately, and if necessary, they could kill. What mattered was bringing him back at any cost. But all the mercenaries who encountered Johann only encountered death. After that, Jane made it clear that no one should face him alone. She said to treat the hunt as if they were pursuing a living dragon. She ordered all roads around the territory sealed off to prevent any escape. Upon hearing that, some mercenaries began asking whether Karamav was really dead, but Jane only replied she would bring that bastard's head to his majesty. Before leaving for good, Johann still stopped to speak with Philip, who was on the edge of death. With great difficulty, he explained that approximately 500 paces to the northwest of the hunting grounds, there was a hidden stable. He said Johann needed to go there, take the warhorse, and flee. His brother needed to survive. After that, Johann finally reached the stable, but he was already completely exhausted. He had several arrows embedded in his back, and was still carrying Karamav's body. On the way, he thought about hiding the corpse to create confusion among his pursuers, but the search team had organized itself far more quickly than expected. Even so, he decided to keep carrying Karamav's armor, since it still served as an excellent shield. His entire body was in pain. Even so, he kept walking, and then he finally found an enormous warhorse. Johann was deeply grateful to his brother Philip. With that gift, he would finally have a chance to leave alive. While stroking the enormous warhorse, he playfully asked if it wanted a name. Big Boy. The horse responded with a strong neigh, almost as if it had understood. Then Johann smiled for the first time in a long while, and decided it would also be named Philip. Meanwhile, one of the mercenaries from the search team announced he had seen something glinting in the forest. He was certain it was the gleam of Dano's steel. After that, the soldiers began combing every inch of the woods, certain that Johann was still nearby. When they finally entered the forest, they began hearing heavy footsteps approaching, but they weren't human footsteps. Suddenly, the warhorse leapt over the mercenaries at an absurd speed. Johann shielded himself using Karamav's body and his armor as a shield, while he tore through the group at full gallop. After that, he rode through the entire night. He quickly managed to shake off the search team, and when he reached the depths of the Black Forest, he finally decided to stop for a moment. Looking around, he concluded the place was already deep enough. Then he began to bury Karamav. Even hating the man, he said that abandoning a body without burial didn't seem right. Of course, before doing that, he stripped all the armor off him. After all, it seemed extremely valuable. He also took the Dano steel sword. The weapon was light but firm. When he examined it more closely, he noticed several elven runes inscribed on the blade. The words said that was the sword of he who recovers the crests. Johann imagined that referred to the crests of the great families. For now, he decided to take the sword with him. The armor, however, would be buried with the body. It was an enormous waste, but carrying that weight would only slow him down. Perhaps he could come back later to recover it all. After finishing the burial, Johann finally felt the exhaustion hit his body in full. He had deep circles under his eyes, and could barely keep them open. While breathing heavily, he thought about the fact that Karamav was an imperial knight. When news of his death spread, the entire empire would begin hunting Johann. Then he remembered the final curse he had heard from Karamav, the promise that he would suffer the worst death imaginable. But in Johann's mind, his life had been pure suffering, long before killing that man. Now he had no idea what he should do. House Eitz had been destroyed. He hadn't managed to bring even a single gold coin. His body was exhausted, his arms trembled without stop, and all he wanted was to rest for a while. But at that instant, he heard a growl nearby. When he turned his face, he saw an enormous black wolf staring at him. Johann let out a weary sigh and thought that creature had chosen the worst possible moment to appear. In those conditions, he had absolutely no chance. He was wounded, tired, and his muscles were completely rigid. He needed to mount the horse and flee immediately. But then he heard human voices. The mercenaries from the search team had found the area. Now there was a monster in front of him, and an army behind. In Johann's mind, that was the end. But in the next instant, the black wolf lunged forward. Just not toward Johann. The creature attacked the search team directly. The elves were torn apart, crushed, and destroyed by the black wolf with absurd violence. Some didn't even have time to react before being split in two. Confused, Johann realized the wolf had simply ignored his presence. But that didn't matter. It was his chance to escape. So he immediately ran to the horse, took hold of Philip's reins, and rode as far away as possible. During the escape, he began to remember all the people who had helped him. He remembered the priest who taught him to read and write. He remembered Philip, the only brother who truly valued his existence. He also remembered all the training, the people he had saved, and all those who had extended a hand to him at some point in his life. And as he rode farther and farther away, he said goodbye in silence to the Eitz village. After finishing the massacre of the entire search team, the black wolf simply watched Johann ride away into the distance, without pursuing, without doing anything at all. Later, when the sun was already beginning to set again, Johann was still awake. He had made a wide detour through the area but realized that all the exit routes were blocked. In some places, not even the horse could pass. Then he noticed something else. Since escaping, he hadn't eaten properly, hadn't slept, and hadn't managed to truly rest. He also thought about the wolves of Akan, famous for pursuing their prey for 3 straight days without stopping. By that point, he had already lost count of how many times he had come close to death. His body was finished. He no longer had the strength even to raise his sword. Even so, he needed to find some way to escape from there. It was then that he heard the sound of hooves in the distance. Shortly after, he spotted a carriage accompanied by several mercenaries. By the look of it, they were merchants traveling through the region. In that instant, Johann had an idea. Maybe he could disguise himself as a common seller. If he acted as part of that group, maybe he could avoid suspicion and escape the manhunt using them as cover. The owner of the carriage was Eldens, leader of the Katana Trading Company. While observing the knight stopped in the road, one of the guards warned Eldens that there was a heavily armed man just ahead. He said he believed they should prepare for battle. That man was one of the group's mercenaries, Goran Khan, but another mercenary named Gamson didn't seem concerned. He asked why all the fear over a single knight. According to him, if the 9 of them attacked together, that man wouldn't stand a chance. But Goran, who was the group's leader, told him to look more carefully. Unlike them, that knight was completely clad in armor, mounted on a true warhorse, and equipped like an elite soldier. And that wasn't all. Khan then noticed something even worse. The sword at the man's side emitted a purple glow. Danos steel. A sword like that would make their armor feel like butter. If that knight decided to fight in earnest, they could be completely annihilated. Even so, Gamson asked if they weren't exaggerating. The other mercenaries called him an idiot on the spot, telling him to please shut up. Meanwhile, Eldens told everyone to get ready. The moment that man made any suspicious move, they should attack immediately. He himself would observe the situation up close, and when he gave the signal, everyone would attack together. The carriage ended up stopping in the middle of the road, and Eldens himself slowly approached the knight. At the same time, Khan explained the plan to the others. The moment the fight started, they should knock the man off his horse, and then drive their swords into the gaps in his armor. When he got close, Eldens politely greeted the knight and said he was part of the Katana Trading Company. He explained he would like to avoid any unnecessary misunderstanding and asked if he might know his name. Upon hearing that, Johann noticed something strange about Eldan's appearance and began wondering if he was some kind of catman or beastman. At the same time, he also noticed the knights further back already preparing to kill him. Eldans grew nervous, thinking that Johann's current appearance must look far too suspicious. So, to ease the tension, Johann opened his helmet and said that the blessings of the gods be upon them. He then introduced himself and explained he was in such a deplorable state because he had been attacked by bandits. After that, Johann also commented, somewhat casually, that maybe the knights in the back could stop staring at him as if they were about to kill him at any moment. Eldens apologized for the men's rudeness and explained that, as merchants, they always needed to expect the worst. Johann said he understood perfectly, but took the opportunity to make a request. He asked if he could travel with the group to the next city, since he had lost all his money during the attack. In exchange for a little food and a place to sleep, he would protect the carriage during the journey. Upon hearing that, Eldens analyzed the situation more carefully. The man seemed strong, and despite his strange appearance, he didn't seem particularly suspicious, so he decided to accept the arrangement. He explained they were heading to Marseille, and since the journey would be long, it would be better for Johann to introduce himself to the mercenaries. In truth, Johann didn't even know where Marseille was, but replied anyway, thanking him for the help. After that, Eldens passed by Goran's mercenaries and explained that the man was merely an unlucky traveler. He said they would travel together for a while, but still told everyone to stay alert. If anything suspicious happened, they should kill Johann immediately. Even overhearing that, Johann thought the situation was great for him. Now he just needed to get through the patrol without drawing attention. He then set off alongside the mercenaries, leading his horse, horse and covering his helmet with a hood. After some time, the group was stopped by the wolves of Aquitaine patrol. At that moment, Johann realized he had finally reached the checkpoint. If he could get through there, he would be much safer. The problem was, he needed to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention. So Eldons took the lead in the conversation and asked if the wolves of Aquitaine hadn't done business before with the Katana Company. He introduced himself formally and said he would like to speak with the officer in charge. The soldiers knew the Katana Trading Company very well. After all, their main headquarters was in Marseille, the region's largest commercial center. It was a giant company. The responsible officer explained they were simply following orders while searching for a fugitive trader. Then he asked for their cooperation for a few moments. Upon hearing that, Johann realized they had even invented an official excuse just to find him. Shortly after, one of the elves pointed directly at him and asked who the hooded fellow was, ordering him to remove it immediately. Johann replied he had a condition on his face and preferred not to show it. But the wolves of Aquitaine didn't care about that at all. In their minds, either his face was deformed or he was hiding something. The tension immediately heightened, and Johann grew nervous. The two sides stared each other down in silence for a few seconds. Little by little, Johann placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready to react. But before anything worse happened, Eldons interrupted the situation. He asked if they were suspecting the Katana Trading Company and demanded to know where the responsible officer was. Then he threatened to file a complaint directly with the captain of the Marseille branch if they kept interfering. After that, the elves finally decided to let them through. One of them still looked at Johann and commented that he had gotten lucky, you wretch. Upon hearing that, Johann thought with relief that he was finally managing to escape. Later, already during the night, the group stopped mid-journey to set up camp. Goran's mercenaries began organizing the night watch shifts, and then Goran himself approached Johann asking if that was really his name. Shortly after, he said that since there wasn't much to do, Johann could rest. After all, he looked completely done for. Johann thanked him deeply. In his mind, it felt like a dream. He could finally sleep properly. So he lay down extremely happy, but without letting go of his sword for a single moment. And it was a good thing he did, because the wolves of Akita were hidden in the brush watching the entire camp. They had followed the group all the way there and were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. While trying to rest, Johann ended up recalling his past life when he had been part of the army. At that time, he had been commended after a tactical training exercise with the battalion. During the drill, he had successfully executed a defense-in-depth strategy, holding off a large number of enemies with few troops. His performance was so impressive it ended up becoming an example for the other soldiers. As a reward, he received a special commendation and 5 days and 4 nights of leave. Back then, Kim Johann genuinely believed that military life suited him. After all, he had always studied strategies and tactics with dedication. The problem was that after actually joining the army, he realized the reality was awful. The environment was backwards, extremely hierarchical, full of deadly shifts, miserable working conditions, and ridiculous pay. He even tried to get out, but ended up stuck in that life for a long time. Then, in the middle of the night, Johann jolted awake from that nightmare. Still drowsy, he looked at the full moon, but soon noticed an arrow flying straight at him. By pure reflex, he caught it at the last second. The arrow had nearly hit his eye. In that instant, he realized it was the wolves of Arctan again, and he had genuinely believed he was finally safe. Without wasting time, Johann shouted for everyone in the camp that it was an enemy ambush. A few minutes before that alert, Gamson was already complaining to Kan, asking why only he had to kill himself working while that knight slept peacefully. In his view, it would only be fair to put Johann on watch duty too. But Khan simply told him to shut up. Kan replied they would never let someone they barely knew stand guard over the camp. In his view, if everyone slept, that bastard could very well slit each of their throats. He also said that if Gamson wasn't rational and kept acting on impulse like that, he would never last long as a mercenary. But Gamson replied irritably that he became a mercenary precisely because he didn't want to rot away in some forgotten village at the end of the world. But if he had known he would end up working with a bunch of cowards who froze in fear before a single night, he never would have joined that miserable group. At that instant, Kan asked what he was talking about like that. But before the argument could continue, the two heard Johann's desperate shout warning that it was an enemy ambush. In the same instant, a rain of arrows fell over the camp. By reflex, Kan raised his shield and managed to protect Gamson at the last second. After some moments, the barrage finally stopped, creating a small opening. As soon as he noticed that, Gamson took off running in a complete panic, practically crying in fear. In the midst of the chaos, Goran found Kan and asked if they were alright. He had already realized it was an enemy ambush, but wanted to know where Gamson was. Kan replied it was a long story and he'd explain everything later. Then he asked if Eldons was safe. Goran replied he was hiding under the carriage. Shortly after, Johann appeared already wearing his full armor and asked why they hadn't formed a circular defensive line around the carriage. He explained they didn't know from which direction the enemy would attack, and for that very reason, they needed to stay together to fight. But Can didn't appreciate his tone at all. Irritated, he asked who he thought he was to be giving orders. He said their employer wasn't him, and told Johann to stop worrying about strategy and just focus on surviving. Upon hearing that, Johann was indignant and asked how that was supposed to work. While the mercenaries grabbed their shields and organized themselves hastily, Johann told Can he had fought in situations like this before and also asked for a shield, but Eldons replied they barely had enough equipment for their own men and told him to manage on his own. At that moment, Johann clearly realized they still didn't trust him at all. Meanwhile, the wolves of Acten were already advancing toward the camp, but looking more carefully, Johann noticed those men didn't exactly look like organized soldiers. In fact, they looked more like a group of armed bandits. Then Can gave the order for all units to advance. At that instant, Johann asked if he had lost his mind. Instead of protecting the carriage, they were simply rushing toward the enemy. The bandits were numerous, and Goran's mercenaries quickly began running into trouble. Goran himself was knocked to the ground and nearly killed by one of the enemies. It was at that moment that Johann entered the fight. He brandished his Dano steel sword and simply tore through the bandits' front line as if cutting through butter. The blow was so absurd that even Johann himself was startled, wondering what kind of power that sword possessed. When the bandits saw that, they began screaming in desperation that it was a demonic sword. They recognized the blood runes on the blade immediately. Then Johann seized the moment and told everyone to listen closely. He introduced himself as Johann Weitz of House Weitz and asked who those wretches thought they were to dare attack him. In that instant, the mercenaries were shocked to realize he was a noble the entire time. Meanwhile, Johann thought to himself that he had used the Weitz surname, so it probably wouldn't be a problem. The bandits didn't know that noble house exactly, but they were absolutely certain he was someone important. After all, in addition to the armor, he was also carrying a demonic sword. Then Johann pointed the runic sword at them again and issued a final ultimatum. Either they surrendered at that instant, or they would die right there. Faced with that, the bandits completely gave up fighting. One by one, they began dropping their weapons and surrendering. After that, Johann ordered Goran to bind all of them. Anyone who resisted would be killed. While organizing the prisoners, Goran asked Eldons what they would do now. None of them had imagined Johann was a noble. They thought he was just a very well-equipped traveler. But Eldons replied he didn't believe Johann would hold a grudge against them. After all, they had allowed him to travel alongside the caravan, and that had probably been a good thing in his eyes. So Eldons approached Johann and commented that must have been a difficult night. He also said that Johann had helped protect the entire carriage and that he didn't know how he could ever repay the favor. Deep down, Eldons could only think that if he had known from the beginning that he was a noble, he would have handed over a shield immediately. But Johann didn't seem to mind that much. He asked what Eldons meant by repaying him and said the most important thing was that everyone was alive and safe. That even left Eldons a little confused. He had genuinely expected a noble to demand some form of compensation, but then Johann simply commented that next time, it would be good to give him a shield too. In that instant, Eldons quickly agreed, calling him Lord Johann and assuring him that next time he would certainly do so. After that, Johann said he wanted to interrogate the bandits to find out who was behind the attack. Eldons agreed immediately, but commented that now that his true status had been revealed, everyone would feel more comfortable speaking more formally. Even so, Johann replied he didn't mind that sort of thing. Then the bandits began to be brought in one by one for questioning. During the questions, Johann wanted to know who had ordered the attack and why they had decided to attack that caravan. One of the men replied that they were former private soldiers of House Brits, a noble family that had been wiped out a few months earlier. According to him, the house was suddenly attacked under the accusation of plotting treason against the emperor, but the ones who carried out the massacre were the blasted wolves of Akon. The man explained they had tried to resist to the end, but couldn't do anything because that noble executor had fought alongside them. That man's name was the Knight Karamov. While recounting all of this, the bandit put his head to the ground and begged Johann for forgiveness, saying he had committed a crime worthy of death. They had never imagined a noble was traveling in that carriage. After that, the man explained that the imperial army had begun hunting them as rebels, while the northern men treated them as cowardly deserters. In the end, they simply ran out of options and started attacking travelers to survive. Even after hearing the whole story, Johann asked if they had really attacked for that reason alone. The man replied yes, there was no other reason. They had simply found a carriage that seemed to carry a lot of money and decided to attack. Upon hearing that, Eldons was completely outraged, and Johann wondered if that accusation of treason against the emperor wasn't the same excuse Karamov had used to massacre his own family. In the end, there had never been any treason at all. The emperor just needed some pretext to execute nobles and unleash Karamov across the kingdom. That wretch was just a psychopath with a license to kill. And those knights who had ended up becoming bandits were in a situation not unlike his own. They were also victims of powerful people, only at the same time, they had chosen the path of crime, so Johan didn't quite know what to do with them. Then Can asked for the order. He said one word was all it would take and they would beat everything out of those men. But Johan replied he had already gotten everything he needed there. Upon hearing that, Gamson said then they might as well beat the bandits to death anyway. But Can held back the blow and called the mercenary an idiot. He said the men had already surrendered and they had no right to punish them like that, especially someone like Gamson, who had abandoned his own allies and fled. The defeated knights began begging for their lives. They said they would never do anything wrong again and pleaded for mercy. Then Can said they were now under Johan's orders and all he needed to do was command them to be executed. But Johan simply sheathed his sword and ordered them all disarmed before being let go. Unable to believe it, Gamson asked if he was serious. Then Johan told everyone to listen carefully. He said he understood their circumstances. They had probably never learned anything other than fighting and carrying weapons. Even so, robbing carriages was not acceptable. He explained that he too had been forced to learn skills to survive on his own. That was why he was letting them live. But in return, they should learn some useful trade and use it to earn an honest living. The abandoned knights thanked him over and over, saying they would never forget that mercy. As for Johan, he simply walked away with the mercenaries, saying he didn't want to get caught up in any more trouble like that. All he wanted at that moment was to sleep. Meanwhile, the Black Wolf continued watching Johan's every step in silence. Before heading to Marcel, the group decided to stop at a place called Rutsbeck village to rest a little. And frankly, Johan was already done for. He looked like a walking mummy. Anyone who looked at him felt the urge to feed the poor wretch and put him to bed immediately. In the village, Eldons ran into an old acquaintance, the chief of Rutsbeck. He commented it had been months since they last saw each other. The chief was glad to see him again and asked if anything had happened along the way. Then Eldons replied yes. He said they had encountered a group of bandits, and commented that ever since the emperor had lost his mind, the situation in the kingdom had only been getting worse. The chief of Rutsbeck replied in a low voice that he should be careful with that kind of comment. If some imperial faction informant heard it, there would be trouble. Even so, Eldons replied that they had managed to transport everything safely, thanks to the noble traveling with them, an extremely courageous man. Curious, the chief asked about that noble. Then he commented that a few weeks earlier, someone had shown up there pretending to be a noble, but he was nobody, and ended up getting beaten so badly he nearly died. Eldons laughed and said the old man was still as impulsive as ever. Then he explained there was no need to worry, because the man traveling with them was different. He said Johan had protected them all from the bandits without even asking for a reward. The chief of Rutsbeck was immediately suspicious. A noble doing something without wanting anything in return seemed absurd, but knowing Eldons, he knew that Old Fox didn't usually lie. Then he began thinking that with so many bandits spread across the kingdom, having a knight of that level nearby would be great for the village. In such chaotic times, a well-trained warrior was strong enough to take down an entire group of criminals on his own. It would be an enormous help in keeping the place safe. For that reason, the chief said they had arrived at the right time and asked why they didn't stay a few more days. In fact, they could even spend a whole week resting there. But Eldons replied he couldn't accept so much generosity. While speaking, he thought that old bald man was clearly trying to steal his ally. At the same time, the chief of Rutsbeck also thought that fur-coated merchant was getting in the way of his business. And while the two mentally argued over who would get the precious knight, the very noble they were speaking so highly of was sprawled under a tree, bloodied, starving, and looking like any random beggar. It was then that Goran approached him carrying a pouch full of coins. He said they had sold all the bandits' weapons and equipment. It wasn't exactly a fortune, but it helped a great deal. Johan asked if Goran hadn't kept anything for himself, but the mercenary replied it made no sense. After all, it was Johan who had captured the men. So Johan handed the pouch back, saying to use the money to pay off the debt between Goran and his men. In that instant, Goran refused, saying it was too much money. The bandits had surrendered directly to Johan, so everything belonged to him. Even so, Johan took only a few coins and said that was enough as his share. Of course that stung. It wasn't easy at all to hand over money earned with blood and sweat, but compared to the danger of facing the wolves of Akitem alone, spending part of that money to keep that group by his side seemed like a small price. It was a necessary sacrifice. So Johan put his hand on Goran's shoulder and said they were now brothers in battle. Deep down, he thought that might be enough to demonstrate his good faith, and it was. Goran was moved on the spot. In his mind, that noble was too good to be true. Later, already in the tavern, Goran called everyone together and told the mercenaries to listen up. He said Johan had been generous with all of them and had divided the money earned from selling the spoils of war. In that instant, one of the men asked if that was really true. Then the tavern exploded with shouts and celebrations. The mercenaries began bellowing Johan's name, raising cups and calling for drinks. Meanwhile, the man himself was passed out in a corner, sleeping like a mummy. But of course, even in his sleep there was no peace. In the middle of the night, an assassin appeared trying to kill him. Shortly before that, while everyone celebrated in his name, Johan was thinking that the plan had worked out better than expected. Even though he had handed over almost all the money, the mercenaries were happy with him. In the end, he lost silver coins but gained prestige in the group's trust. In a way, he came out ahead. It was then that an old man approached him asking if he was the noble traveling with Eldons. The man said he could take him to the best room in the inn, and explained that all expenses had already been paid by the Katana Association. Upon hearing that, Johann thought that cantankerous old Eldons might not be so bad after all. Since he was dead tired, he accepted on the spot, and followed the man to the room. Meanwhile, in the tavern, Gamson was complaining about not having received any share of the money. Then Goran replied that while the others fought, he had been hiding, so he deserved no share at all. But Gamson retorted that they had deliberately left him out. It was at that moment that he saw Johann, saw that absurd sword the young man carried, and decided what he would do. Later, alone in the room, Johann was finally able to enjoy a hot bath. He practically melted with happiness. Soft bed, hot water, and a roof over his head. Who would have thought that would be so precious? Before becoming a wanderer, he had never noticed how much of a joy it was to sleep in safety, even if it was on an old, uncomfortable bed. Throughout his life, he had thought his routine as a noble was difficult, but now he realized how easy everything had been back then. Then the emperor showed up, burned his lands, and destroyed his entire family. In the end, Johann ended up being one of the only survivors. Even so, he tried to think positively. Maybe just surviving already put him in a better situation than the others. But even he didn't really believe that. In fact, he began to wonder if he shouldn't have accepted Karamav's proposal. His life was completely ruined. If he kept going like that, sooner or later he would be captured by the Imperial Army and executed. So he needed to find another path. Then he remembered something strange. The wolves of Acton had backed off as soon as they realized who Eldons was. That made no sense. A bunch of proud mercenaries wouldn't be scared of a simple merchant. So the commercial association Eldons belonged to must be enormous. When he was a child, Johann had learned at the village market how commercial associations worked. Members shared money, information, and influence beyond the borders of kingdoms, and when an association was powerful enough, it could influence nobles, politicians, and even move entire armies. Since he was being hunted by the Empire, perhaps getting closer to that association was his best chance at surviving, but he left the complicated thoughts for later. At that moment, he just wanted to sleep. So he put on his pajamas, left the sword by the bed, and went out. That was when the assassin appeared. The man tried to take the sword without making noise, but Johann woke up immediately, grabbed the fellow, and asked if he was one of Karamav's henchmen. The assassin still tried to react, but ended up being hurled against the door. Before he could escape, Johann pulled the man back inside the room. In that instant, the intruder realized far too late that he had messed with the wrong person. 5 minutes later, still inside the inn, Gamson appeared along with an accomplice from the village to steal the sword for good. He asked if the man they had sent before could be trusted. The other replied yes. He said Brother Bullen was extremely strong and agile, a real thug from the village. According to him, the plan was perfect. Bullen had certainly already stolen the sword by now, and at that very moment, other men were probably already stealing the horses too. Indeed, one of the bandits had already managed to climb onto Philip. While waiting, the man from the village commented that sword must be worth a fortune. Then Gamson asked if he had ever heard of swords capable of cutting a person in two with a single blow. He said he had seen it with his own eyes. Johann's sword could do exactly that. A weapon of that level wouldn't have an ordinary price. Suddenly, they heard a crash coming from the inn. It was poor Bullen being pulled back into the room while screaming for help. In that instant, Gamson realized something was very wrong. Without thinking twice, he abandoned everyone and ran. Then he went to the man stealing the horse and told him to get ready to flee. He said Brother Bullen was already dead. The two tried to mount the horse in a hurry, but before the animal could even move, something fell right on top of them. It was Johann. He had simply jumped out the inn window. Meanwhile, far from there, in the peripheral region of the Holy Empire's south, soldiers were nailing a warning sign in front of several hanged bodies. The notice said those individuals had stolen goods belonging to a noble, and that, according to an imperial edict, both they and their families had been found guilty. All had been executed at that location by order of the Holy Empire's Emperor, Cardirio Bisalfi. Upon seeing the scene, one of the knights asked what exactly those people had stolen to receive such a cruel punishment. He even thought perhaps they had taken some noble seal or committed a serious crime, but the other knight replied no. They had stolen only a chicken and 3 eggs from a baron's territory. Unable to believe it, the man asked if an entire family had been hanged just because of that. Meanwhile, Eldons was calmly eating his meal when one of his men approached, saying they had a problem. Gamson, from the mercenary group, had been caught trying to steal the knight Johann's belongings. In that instant, Eldons nearly spit out his food and asked how that had happened. The situation was far too complicated. He wanted to convince the knight Johann to trust him, and still intended to accompany him to Marcel. So he ordered Gamson tied up immediately. They needed to act as if they had absolutely no connection to that. The man who received the order was even impressed by Eldon's cold-bloodedness, but inside, he was just trying to keep calm. He thought that with all the experience he had accumulated over the years, he would be able to get through that crisis too. Even so, as a precaution, he began considering ways to do away with that noble before the situation got worse. Meanwhile, in the village council, the chief of the village, Rutzbeck, was closing the meeting and releasing everyone for their meal. But a messenger came running in and announced there was a serious problem in the village. The usual troublemakers had been caught stealing a noble's belongings. Upon hearing that, Rutzbeck exploded with rage, calling the boys blasted useless fools. Then he immediately ordered tribute prepared to offer the noble, along with the slaves held in the village. He also ordered the delinquent's execution to be prepared. The people present were shocked and asked how he could say that about his own sons, but Rutzbeck told everyone to shut up, and even smashed a chair against the table. He asked if no one there understood the gravity of the situation. Had they completely forgotten the imperial edict? They needed to act before that noble made any decision. Only that way would the entire village have a chance to survive. According to the edict, anyone who coveted a noble's possessions would have their tongue cut out, along with their close relatives, or would be hanged. In some places, entire families had already been exterminated because of that. Rutzbeck even cited a case where people died simply for collecting a chicken and 3 eggs as overdue payment. Then he asked the parents present how they thought that noble would react after having his honor tarnished. In his view, the noble would want to punish someone at any cost. He might even order all the village residents to have their wrists cut. Even so, one of the men tried to argue. He said that region belonged to Count Jarpen. No matter how important the knight was, he wasn't part of the count's family. Maybe if they asked for help, but Rutzbeck cut him off immediately. He asked if he really believed nobles cared about commoners. To them, they were just poor lives that had to fend for themselves. He told everyone to wake up to reality. Of course, nobody wanted to see children die, but according to Rutzbeck, his own heart was shattered too. Even so, he believed that if those children didn't die, then the entire village would die in their place. Then he asked forgiveness for sacrificing his own sons, saying he was doing it for everyone's sake. Later, the entire village was gathered. The children remained tied up, crying in fear because they were to be executed. And standing right in front of the tree where it would all happen was Johann, watching that absurd scene. He was thinking the situation had gotten completely out of control. At first, he had imagined those boys were assassins sent by the emperor, but in the end, they were just village kids trying to steal his sword. In fact, maybe it was even his own fault, since the sword drew too much attention and he hadn't been careful enough to conceal it. Shortly after, Rutzbeck approached and asked how the knight was doing, wanting to know if he had been hurt. Johann replied, it was hard to say he was doing well, since in Rutzbeck guests were apparently welcomed with knives pointed at them while they slept, and their belongings stolen as a form of hospitality. Upon hearing that, the village chief got down on his knees and pressed his head to the ground, begging 1,000 pardons. He said all of that was his fault for not having controlled those imbeciles. But in Johann's mind, the scare alone had already been more than enough. So he told Rutzbeck to simply be more careful next time, and said everyone could leave. But suddenly, Rutzbeck drew a knife and declared that precisely for that reason, he himself would cut the children's heads off to restore the knight's honor. In that instant, Johann thought the man had gone mad and immediately told him to stop. But Rutzbeck replied he couldn't do that. According to him, those who had tarnished a noble's honor deserved to die. Then he asked for forgiveness from poor Balin and raised the knife. While the boy's mother cried in desperation watching it all, he prepared to execute his own son. Before the blade could fall, however, Johann asked if he hadn't heard when he said to stop. In that instant, silence swept over the entire village. Not only Rutzbeck, but every single resident froze, staring at the knight. Then Johann asked if they had gone so mad as to kill people over a simple robbery. If they truly wanted to pay for the crime, then they could pay with money. Once again, no one responded. Then Johann realized he needed to rephrase his words. He asked since when honor was worth more than a life, and ordered everyone released immediately. Upon hearing that, all the residents fell to their knees. The village chief Rutzbeck said the knight Johann was truly merciful. In his view, that had been a decision worthy of a truly honorable man. Shortly after, the parents rushed to their children, embracing them while crying with relief. Some told them never to pull such a stunt again. While watching it all, Rutzbeck thought he had never imagined meeting a noble like that. Then he realized what Eldons had said was true. At another time, he might even have skinned that blasted cat for spreading that kind of talk. The children also went to Johann to thank him for his kindness. They said they would never forget what he had done, and swore they would never steal again. They also admitted they had been talked into it by that accursed idiot. But after the emotional hugs, the inevitable part came. The parents began handing out smacks to their sons right then and there. Meanwhile, Gamson seemed completely indifferent to the situation. When Can approached, he even asked if they had only just arrived. In Gamson's mind, joining that group of unlucky mercenaries had been a mistake. But in the next instant, Can pressed a knife to his throat and told him to relax his body, because it would be better for him. Then, without hesitation, he slit his throat. It all happened right in front of Johann. The body fell to the earth, while blood spread across the ground. In that instant, Johann asked what the hell he thought he was doing. But Can replied coldly that, according to the imperial edict of the Holy Empire, anyone who coveted a noble's possessions was to be executed. That irritated Johann even more. He asked if his words hadn't reached anyone's ears, because he had made it clear he didn't want to see blood shed there that day. Just the murderous intent leaking from the night was enough to make everyone around him tense and frightened. Even so, Kan showed no fear. He replied that mercenaries also possessed honor and rules of their own that needed to be respected. In his view, Gamson's actions had violated not only the imperial edict, but also the group's own rules. According to Kan, he had simply protected the mercenaries' honor. Then he handed the knife to Johan himself, saying that if he wanted to punish him, he could do so right then and there. He would accept all consequences. For a few moments, Johan thought about it. In the end, he concluded that perhaps he really shouldn't interfere. Mercenaries also had their own code of honor. So he said it was fine. In addition, he apologized to Kan, admitting he also hadn't considered their position in that situation. Upon hearing that, the people around them were completely shocked. A noble was apologizing. After that, Johan simply told Kan to put the dagger away. Kan thanked him for his understanding, giving a simple sorry to Johan. Shortly after, Goran appeared asking what the hell Kan had just done. He wanted to know if his companion had any idea how reckless that had been, but Kan replied he probably deserved a good beating for that. While watching it all from a distance, Eldens was increasingly impressed with Johan. In his mind, that noble was completely unlike all the others. He was honest and courageous, yet at the same time neither authoritarian nor abusive. Until then, Eldens hadn't even believed someone like that could exist. At that moment, he decided he needed to introduce the knight Johan to the trading company. If he managed to do that, his reputation would soar. So he began thinking of ways to keep Johan by his side no matter what. Sometime later, as the group was leaving the village, Johan examined a gold watch he had received. At first he thought it was extremely valuable, but ended up realizing it was just a broken watch. In addition, he also noticed he now had someone to look after, a boy who wouldn't stop calling him Master Johan. Before their departure, the village chief Rutzbeck explained that was a gift prepared by the village in gratitude. They had set aside some coins, the watch, and a few simple things. In addition, he offered a slave to accompany him. According to Rutzbeck, despite his miserable appearance, the boy understood quite a bit about geography and might end up being useful along the journey. Looking at him, Johan thought he had never seen such a poorly taken care of slave in his life. The boy looked completely worn down. Even so, he accepted the gift with gratitude. While the group prepared to depart, Johan asked that the boy be given something to eat before anything else. Then Rutzbeck told Goiden that the honorable knight had accepted to take him along. But inside, Johan felt somewhat uncomfortable with all of that. He had accepted the boy without thinking much about it, but the idea of personally commanding a slave still felt too strange for someone from the modern era like him. Later, during the next camp stop, Goiden approached bringing Johan's meal. The knight thanked him but said he didn't need to call him master. He could just call him by his name. Even so, Goiden replied politely that he understood and thanked him, saying Lord Johan. After that, Johan asked how someone so good at geography ended up becoming a slave. Goiden replied that wasn't exactly a pleasant story to hear, but Johan said he understood quite a bit about unpleasant stories. Then the boy asked if he too had been through hard things, even being a noble. Johan replied he would tell his own story later, but first he wanted to hear Goiden's. So Goiden began explaining that he was originally a traveling vendor who transported and sold weapons across the eastern region. He worked carrying weapons and equipment produced by the blacksmiths of nearby villages. But at one point, a certain noble began hiring his services to smuggle gold hidden among the merchandise. Upon hearing that, Johan commented that usually led straight to the death penalty. He said Goiden had been very lucky to come out of that alive. Even so, he asked why a weapons trader would get involved in smuggling. Then Goiden replied he desperately needed the money to send to his family. His younger siblings were sick and starving, so he kept making deliveries with hidden gold, until one day the noble himself turned him in. Johan understood immediately what had happened. After being used, the man had simply been discarded to cover the noble's crimes. Then he asked if he had at least tried to request a trial, but Goiden replied he didn't even get that chance. Because of the imperial edict, he didn't even have the right to speak. Upon hearing that, Johan was furious with the emperor. Even so, he tried to ask if at least the money had reached his brothers, but Goiden lowered his head and replied it hadn't. In exchange for escaping execution, almost everything had been taken by the guards as a bribe. After that, he still apologized, as if it were his fault. Johan replied he had nothing to apologize for. At that moment, he could only think about how utterly disgusting that world was, exploiting those without power as if they were criminals, while no one could challenge the atrocities committed by the nobles. The private soldiers of House Brits, for example, survived by stealing. The people of Rutzbeck had been pushed to the point of sacrificing their own sons, and now Goiden had become a slave merely because of a noble's whim. Even feeling angry, Johan realized he couldn't carry all the world's problems on his shoulders. He himself was already being hunted by the Empire, so he told Goiden that since they were now companions, he couldn't die. The two of them would keep living together from that point forward. But the conversation was interrupted when a mercenary came running to the campfire and warned Mr. Johann that a monster had appeared nearby. In that instant, Johann complained there was never a single minute of peace in that place. Then he left Goiden by the fire and went with the mercenaries. When they got near the bushes, Goran pointed ahead and warned the monster was there. The mercenaries remained hidden, but a clear glow coming from the creature in the dark was visible. But in the instant Johann realized what it actually was, he stood up calmly and said everything was fine. They didn't even need to keep their weapons raised. Kan couldn't understand it and asked if he was sure. After all, no matter how strong a knight was, facing monsters required special techniques. Goran explained their mission was only to protect Eldons, so they couldn't take unnecessary risks. But while approaching the creature, Johann already felt that familiar presence. The heavy pressure, the red eyes glowing in the darkness. It was the black wolf known as the Ill Omen. The last time they had encountered each other, the wolf had attacked the wolves of Akaton to protect him. So Johann knew that creature hadn't come to harm him. Then he told the wolf to stop hiding. The creature slowly emerged from the shadows, revealing its enormous, intimidating red eyes. Even so, Johann asked if it had followed him there, and also thanked it for the last time's help, since he had probably only survived thanks to the wolf. From a distance, Goran was impressed and asked if the knight Johann really knew how to handle monsters. Kan replied he had never seen such an absurd scene in his life. The wolf then slowly approached, sniffed Johann, and suddenly sank its jaws around his head. The mercenaries nearly had a heart attack, but quickly realized it was just an expression of affection. Johann ended up completely slobbered and told them not to be so startled. According to him, that little display of affection was just the precursor of death. It was then that Eldons called the creature the Guide of Dawn. Without understanding anything, Johann asked what that was. Then Eldons explained that in the Eastern Empire, there was an ancient song from the Age of Wars. The legend said that on a night lit by moonlight, a warrior gave a name to a wolf called Guide of Dawn. After receiving the name, the wolf would have lowered its head before the warrior, while its blue eyes glowed in the darkness. During the war that tore the continent apart, the animal ran ahead of the battlefield, and everyone shouted its name. In the end, the warrior achieved peace and died a hero, but the wolf cried for 3 days and 3 nights before setting out on a journey to places where order and heroes were needed. Even hearing that whole story, Johann still found it strange, so he asked if Eldons wasn't getting confused, because that wolf's eyes were red and in the south it was known precisely as the Wolf of Ill Omen. But Eldons explained the original legend came from the Eastern Empire, and that when it arrived in the south, it ended up being distorted over time. Many details were lost along the way. In the true version of the story, the Guide of Dawn was a creature that punished evil and served only valiant heroes. Upon hearing that, Johann began wondering if the wolf really was that kind of legendary being, and all of that was happening while the creature kept licking him non-stop. Curious, Eldans asked if he could touch the wolf, but Johann replied he had no idea what would happen. Even so, Eldans tried to approach, and nearly got killed on the spot. After that scare, he decided it was better to keep his distance. In the end, it became clear to everyone that the wolf was absurdly gentle, only with Johann. Then Johann gave the creature a scolding, calling it a bad boy, and saying it couldn't go around trying to eat others like that. It was then that Eldons remembered another detail from the Eastern legends. They said that when someone gave a name to a divine beast that followed them, that creature became their servant. Thinking about that, he began wondering if that backwater southerner could really be a legendary hero. So he asked directly if Johann had already given a name to the Guide of Dawn, but Johann replied he had never had that opportunity. Then Eldans asked why Johann didn't give the wolf a name now. According to the legends, if that were truly real, he might gain something incredible. Upon hearing that, Johann began thinking about what name would suit that creature. The last time he had seen that wolf was precisely on the day he buried that wretch Karamov. So, without thinking too hard, he decided to name the wolf after the same man. In that instant, Eldon's eyes went wide because he knew that name. But what came next was even more startling. The wolf reacted immediately. Its eyes began to glow intensely, and the red aura surrounding it disappeared. Slowly, that sinister color transformed into a brilliant blue. Then a beam of light pierced the sky before everyone's eyes, and in that instant it became clear the legend was true. The wolf before them truly was the Guide of Dawn, the spectral beast who now recognized and obeyed its hero. Seeing that, Johann placed his hand on the wolf's head and said he was counting on it from that point forward, Karamov. Then he turned to Eldons and admitted he had been right. That had truly been incredible. Meanwhile, Eldons was practically reverencing both of them before that scene. He said everything had happened exactly as in the ancient legends. He had never imagined he would witness something so mythical and beautiful right before his own eyes. Then he confessed he had always admired the Guide of Dawn since the first time he heard the stories about it. But now he didn't admire only the wolf. He also admired Johann. In Eldon's view, Johann had protected all of them from the thieves, shown mercy even to enemies, and still been chosen by a divine beast. So he began hailing him as the hero of that chaotic era. The mercenaries and the others present began wondering if Johann truly was a legendary hero, but Johann himself felt uncomfortable with all of that and apologized. He explained he wasn't that kind of hero people imagined. He was just a wanderer from an insignificant family, someone concerned only with surviving, and deep down he was still thinking he was being hunted by the Empire after beating Karamav to death, but he decided to keep that part to himself. Even so, he apologized for ending up disappointing Eldons, but Eldons quickly replied he wasn't disappointed in the least. In fact, he wanted to repay all the kindness he had received from Johann, so he asked if Johann would accept being introduced to the trading association in Marseille. Upon hearing that, Johann asked if that was their destination. After all, he had never heard of that city. It was then that Eldons explained that Marseille was known as the great city of free trade. Almost every city in the region did business passing through there, and above all, it was one of the few places where the emperor's hand barely reached. While being licked non-stop by the now gentle Karamov, Johann replied he had no reason to refuse Eldon's goodwill, and deep down he began thinking that a place beyond the empire's reach must be wonderful. Maybe there he could finally restart his life, perhaps working as a guard for some merchant association, or living a peaceful life for the first time. As the group continued the journey, Eldons began singing cheerfully the song of the Guide of Dawn. As for Johann, he only hoped that when they arrived in Marseille, no one would start spreading strange rumors saying he was a legendary hero. Deep down, he thought it would be too good to be true if that were so. Both in his past life and in this one, he was still just someone trying to protect his own life. Then he remembered the curse Karamav had cast on him before dying, but this time it would be different. In this life, he would press forward step by step, advancing of his own free will. And so, together with his new companions and the wolf named Karamov, Johann set out toward the great city of wealthy merchants, Marseille. Johann felt much more energized when he saw a city of that size with his own weary eyes. Goiden commented that he never imagined he would manage to return to that place someday. And since they had finally arrived in a great merchant city, Johann thought the right thing to do was buy some important supplies. But suddenly, the little dog started barking at people on the street. A young girl quickly approached, excitedly petting him and saying he was unbearably cute, wagging his tail like that. Johann then realized that, to other people, that massive beast looked like nothing more than an adorable little puppy. In truth, the day before entering Marseille, Johann had asked Karamav to wait outside the city. After all, a wolf of that size was practically a monster capable of causing chaos and destruction. But Karamav himself solved the problem by using his power to transform into a small, extremely cute puppy. At the time, Johann asked whether that was also a divine beast ability, while Goiden could only comment on how adorable he was, and really, at that size no one would be frightened. So it wasn't just the young girl who approached. Several people began fawning over little Karamov, who had already stolen a piece of ham from someone. Even so, Johann was uneasy about drawing that much attention, since they were still being hunted, but Goiden asked him to relax and buy a large bag to carry supplies, along with oil and vinegar to maintain their equipment. He also said that from then on he would handle that part himself. Johann then remembered that Goiden was a weapons merchant, but mentioned worriedly that they only had 4 silver coins. Would that really be enough to buy everything? But Goiden took just 1 coin and said he would take care of everything with it. That left Johann completely puzzled. Almost 50 minutes later, Goiden returned carrying everything they needed, and then some. With a single silver coin, he had managed to buy all the necessary supplies. First they got a tactical bag for Johann and a large supply pack for Goiden, which would make carrying things much easier going forward. On top of that, Goiden managed to sell the broken helmet for an absurdly high price, using his unbelievable gift of gab, and as a bonus even received some putty as a freebie. Thanks to that, Johann wouldn't need to use the crest restorer anytime soon, saving it only for real emergencies. They also bought oil, vinegar to preserve their weapons, and various other important supplies. And most impressively, after all the buying and selling, they still came out ahead. That's when Johann began thinking about how much money he could make if he one day went back to recover Karamav's buried armor. After all, if even a completely destroyed helmet had sold for that amount, the armor must be worth a fortune. After that, Johann mentioned that Goiden seemed genuinely happy doing what he was good at. Goiden then admitted that he missed that life deeply. Throughout the entire period he lived as a slave, he never knew when he was going to die. Every day was filled with fear and despair. But after meeting Mr. Johann, all of that disappeared. Now it felt like he had finally reclaimed his own life. For that reason, he thanked him sincerely for everything, saying that even if he hadn't been a slave freed by him, he would still choose to follow him. Hearing that, Johann replied that he was truly glad. He said that from that point on they should continue counting on each other, and then he decided it was time to truly enjoy Marseille. After suffering so much wandering the world, Johann had finally arrived at a real commercial city, and there he began to experience a happiness impossible to compare to the miserable life of a wanderer. Now he could eat good food in a fine tavern, paired with quality beer. As he devoured some incredibly juicy ribs, Johann realized that the dried meat he ate during his travels tasted like shoe leather by comparison. When he lived as a wanderer, he could barely bathe properly and spent entire days itching. But in Marseille, he finally finally managed to bathe in hot water. Before, he didn't even have a decent place to sleep, forced to lie on hard stones. Now he could rest under warm, soft blankets. Johann began saying that life in Marseille was too good. In his mind, he had finally found a place to settle down and live in peace. But despite that happy dream, fate clearly had no intention of letting things stay so calm. The next day, in the central square of Marseille, Johann was relaxing beside Goran, eating a skewer of meat in peace. But soon he overheard some merchants talking about a new group of thieves attacking on the city's outskirts. A woman replied that this time, they had stolen even Mr. Dave's daughter and taken all of the poor woman's goods. People were already beginning to comment that no one knew what bad news they'd hear the next day. After all, it was impossible to live in peace with thieves roaming freely. Goran then commented that there were probably bandits hiding on the outskirts of Marseille, because the city's atmosphere felt far too strange. And it was precisely at that moment that another man appeared, stirring up trouble with an innocent merchant. The fellow was dirty, reeking, completely worn out and wretched, yet he still wore the armor of the Akaton wolves. Johann recognized the man immediately. Apparently that elf had survived, and ended up wandering to Marseille, but the moment the two exchanged glances, they recognized each other at once. The Akaton wolves elf drew his sword on the spot, screaming that Johann was the bastard who had wiped everyone out. Meanwhile, Johann thought desperately about whether that man had really followed his tracks to Marseille, or had simply stopped there by chance. And worse still, fighting in the middle of the city would be an enormous problem. But before he could do anything, the elf charged at him. However, at that very instant, another knight appeared and severed the man's head without hesitation. Afterward, the man calmly commented that he had thought he was dealing with just some random bandit, but in the end it was just someone causing trouble. He then said that with the city's security growing increasingly unstable, every kind of lunatic was showing up. Finally, he asked the travelers if they were all right, and Goran replied that yes, everything was fine now. The man told everyone to stay alert and be careful. After that, he mounted his horse, rode to the middle of the citizens, and announced to everyone not to worry, because he was there. That man was Bradil, commander of the Oak Mercenary Company, and before the entire square, he declared that the 500 men of the Oak Company would completely eradicate the bands of thieves and restore safety to Marseille. Seeing that, Goran commented that it was impressive to see someone so famous up close. Johann then asked if that company was really that well known. That's when Goran explained that the Oak Company was one of the most renowned mercenary organizations in the entire empire. They had most likely been hired precisely because of the recent bandit and thief attacks in the region. As he observed everything, Johann began to think that if that man hadn't appeared to help him before, his identity would likely have been revealed right then and there. And if that happened, the entire empire would begin pursuing him directly. In that case, it would be impossible to continue living in Marseille. In that moment, he was reminded once again of the curse cast by Karamov, and then he realized a bitter truth. No matter how comfortable Marseille seemed, he was still a fugitive. The only way to survive was by building a good relationship with the Katana Company. After all, not even the Emperor dared to move directly against a major trading company, and fortunately, Eldons had taken quite a liking to him. Thanks to that, Johann had finally secured a chance to get closer to the company, but there was one enormous problem with all of this. If they discovered his true identity before he earned Katana's trust, they would likely abandon him immediately. In Johann's mind, this was very clear. If his identity were exposed too soon, he would die without exception. So his objective was simple and direct: find the Katana Company and obtain protection from the Empire. Until he earned their trust, he could not reveal anything at all. But right at that very moment, a Catwoman appeared before him. She introduced herself as Abelka, exclusive attendant of the Katana Company. She said she had heard extremely impressive accounts of his deeds through Mr. Eldons. Because of that, the company would like to form a deep relationship with him, or even with the Ayat's household. She then asked if it would please Johann to accompany her to the Katana Company. Meanwhile, Goiden remained outside trying to control that enormous, utterly uncivilized dog. Johann was escorted to the company's reception room, and in that moment, he had finally arrived at Katana. That place was perhaps his greatest chance to completely change his life. Now all that remained was to hope the conversation went well. Shortly after, the important person who entered the room to receive him was Ion, branch manager of the Katana Company in Marseille. Johann introduced himself politely, saying he was Johann, of the Eitz family, and that it was a pleasure to meet him. The two began talking over tea. During this, Ian explained that the drink was a commercial product from the Mediterranean region, and hoped it was to his liking. But the instant he tasted it, Johann immediately thought it was coffee. He knew that flavor very well, so he asked if the drink was made from roasted seeds. Hearing that, Ion seemed impressed, saying it was rare for someone to recognize it that quickly. But she soon decided to get straight to the main subject. She said she could perfectly imagine the reason for his visit to that place. At that moment, Johann nearly spit out his coffee and began to choke. Desperately, he he thought they might have discovered he was being hunted by the Empire. But Ayan continued saying something completely different. According to her, Johann carried a great ambition within his heart. At least that was what they had heard through Eldons. She commented that he had protected innocents, shown mercy even to surrendered enemies, and still chose to visit Marseille, a city tormented by thieves. Because of that, they believed he possessed the ambition to save Marseille with his own hands. In Johann's mind, that had nothing to do with his real objectives. But reading the situation, he decided it would be better to go along with it anyway. So he replied that she really seemed to have understood his thoughts. Hearing that, Ayan explained that ambition was not a bad thing. On the contrary, to her, ambition was a virtue of those who possessed true qualification. And furthermore, the Katana Company loved to sponsor talented and ambitious people. At that moment, Johann immediately realized what this was about. It was essentially a business proposal. Ayan then revealed that, should the knight Johann desire it, she could even introduce him to the governor of Marseille. That left Johann extremely excited. If he really reached that level of influence, not even the old emperor could easily touch him. It was practically an irrefusable proposal. Even so, before accepting anything, Johann decided to ask what exactly the details of that sponsorship were. Ayan then explained that he would have access to all services offered by Katana. Restaurants, inns, entertainment, and various other benefits could be used freely in the company's name. But, of course, there was a condition. When the company needed it, he would have to fight under the Katana banner. Johann then asked if they wanted him to help eliminate the thieves threatening the city. But Ayan replied that task had already been taken on by the Oak Company. In truth, there was another job they wished to give him. Recently, some merchants had begun to harbor resentment against Katana, accusing the company of monopolizing the market, and the more those complaints grew, the harder the situation became for the company. Therefore, the solution Katana had found was simple. They wanted Johann to eliminate all the dissatisfied merchants, preferably, along with their entire families. After saying that calmly, Ayan simply asked if he accepted the proposal. Johann made a sour face after the meeting, and left with a closed expression. Later, Goiden noticed the heavy atmosphere and asked if the conversation with the company had gone well. Johann remained cold, but replied that it was now time to enjoy life. Not understanding at all, Goiden asked what that meant. In truth, during the meeting, Johann had refused the company's proposal. He knew it was normal for there to be complaints against a company, but he could not accept resolving it through assassination. To him, it made no sense to kill innocents for that reason. So he made it clear that it was better to pretend that proposal had never existed. But Aeon replied that he had passed. All of that was nothing more than a test to determine whether he was worthy of receiving the company's support. She said he was a just knight, and apologized for the lack of courtesy. After that, Johann asked about the stories of monopolizing and the complaints involving the Katana Company. Aeon then explained that the Katana Company had never monopolized any market, nor caused problems for merchants. On the contrary, she said the company always sold quality products at fair prices. She also stated that she still wanted to maintain the condition offered to him. However, she did not expect him to enter combat immediately, since the Oak Company had already set out to subdue the thieves. While that was happening, Johann could simply enjoy Katana's support. She then asked what he thought of the proposal. This time, he accepted without hesitation, and the two shook hands, sealing the deal. In the present, Goiden was still trying to understand what enjoying life meant. Johann then explained that he basically wanted to go out and take advantage of everything. Now that the Katana Company was footing his expenses, he had finally secured the backing of a major company. Even so, deep down, he felt things were going almost too well. True, the thieves were still a problem, but he believed the Oak Company would deal with them soon. After that, Marseille would finally return to peace. The quiet life he had always dreamed of seemed to be right there, directly in front of him. But when he arrived at the main square, he came upon several corpses scattered around the place. He immediately couldn't understand why there were people dead like that in the middle of the city. That's when Gorin approached and explained the situation. Apparently, the thieves in the region were becoming increasingly violent. They had killed merchants' family members and thrown the bodies there as a threat to the entire city. Around the square, merchants were outraged. Some said nothing had been resolved so far, and that the bandits were still attacking normally. Others said the city needed to take responsibility for the situation. In the midst of the confusion, a merchant commented that he had heard rumors that the emperor himself was encouraging the thieves. Some people immediately denied it, saying the emperor would never do such a thing. But others began to complain, saying he was already old, crazy, and completely losing his mind. As he listened to all of this, Johann thought that the Marseille that was finally finding peace was being destroyed again because of the thieves. Irritated, he began to wonder what the mercenaries had been doing all this time. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Ayan was receiving worrying news from Ibelka. They could no longer make contact with the mercenaries of the Oak Company. Furthermore, the day before, the body of a messenger had been found in a forest near Marseille, in a terrible state. That made Aeon realize the situation was far more serious than she had imagined. The Oak Company had military strength comparable to an entire fortress. It made no sense to believe they would lose to simple thieves. This could only mean there was something much larger behind that problem. Without wasting time, she sent Ibelka to immediately bring Suderg, the river mage. They needed his prophecy diplomacy to confirm whether the Oak Company had truly been defeated. Then, at the Epal River, the prophetic sage revealed that they had made a grave mistake. According to him, no matter how much they searched for the Oak Company, nothing would change. But the river had also shown something else important. A boy named Johann had killed the Emperor's hunting hound and fled. He was now trying to hide in Marcel. Even so, Suderg warned that things would not go the way Johann planned. Later, the mage himself finally arrived at Caetana's branch in Marcel. As soon as he entered, Ibelka received him with full courtesy, saying that the Caetana company was very grateful he had answered the summons. But Suderg replied irritably, complaining about the terrible driver they had sent to pick him up. Embarrassed, Ibelka apologized and said she would call Miss Ion immediately. But he replied that there was no need. If the matter was truly urgent, she would find a way to appear herself. After that, he sat calmly and began stroking his beard, commenting that according to the voice of the Epal River, he would find that boy right there. Meanwhile, unaware of any of this, Johann was actually on his way to Katana's branch in Marcel. However, his real objective was to meet the city's governor. After all, he believed he needed to maintain a good relationship with an important figure if he wanted to live the quiet life he so desired. Walking through the corridors, he even thought that he should have asked Eon about what the governor liked. Perhaps it would have been better to bring some kind of gift. But in the middle of the corridor, Karamov suddenly stopped and began growling at a figure standing there. That person was none other than Suderg, who looked at the creature and commented that Karamov was not an appropriate name for a divine beast. At once, Johann found this strange. Not understanding how that old man knew such things, he asked who he was. The man then calmly replied that he was Suderg, the sage of the Epal River, a mage if he preferred to call him that. Johann became completely excited when he heard that. He immediately thought, of course, another world really did have to have magic. He had gone there just to find the governor, but ended up meeting a real mage. That was incredible. He greeted Suderg with great enthusiasm, saying it was a pleasure to meet him and that he had always wanted to meet a mage someday. The reaction even caught Suderg off guard. The old man was a bit flustered before commenting that, for someone being hunted by the Emperor, Johann seemed far too comfortable. Not understanding, Johann asked how he knew that. The mage replied simply that it was magic. According to him, the mysteries of the Epal River allowed one to see both the past and the future. Johann immediately asked whether he intended to turn him in, but Suderg simply asked why he would do that. He then explained that he had no interest whatsoever in mundane political disputes. He was someone who studied the secrets of the Epal River and followed only the voice of the river. Furthermore, he made it clear that if he truly wanted to hand him over, he would do so in secret. There would be no reason to say it directly to his face. The moment he heard that, Johann immediately grabbed the old man's hands and said he wanted to learn more about magic. That made Suderg think the boy was a bit crazy. Normally, knights looked down on mages, calling them cowards and weaklings, but Johann was the complete opposite. The old man was even taken aback by the gleam in his eyes. Without wasting time, Johann began asking question after question. He wanted to know how someone learned magic, whether an ordinary person could use it, whether magic was something one was born with, or something that could be learned. In his mind, that was the perfect chance to learn magic, and finally become a magic swordsman. Suderg then replied that he could teach a few things, since knowledge of destiny cost nothing. However, he thought that just talking would be dull, so he proposed a betting game. If Johann could beat him once, he would answer anything he wanted to know. But Johann admitted he wasn't very good at games, and even asked if they couldn't do arm wrestling instead. At that moment, Suderg imagined his own arm being crushed by the mad Johann and refused immediately. He then explained that the game was not complicated. It was called the Game of Kings, something fun and simple to understand. When the two arrived at the room and Suderg brought out the board in pieces, Johann recognized it immediately. It was Go, basically a game similar to chess, only from the East. Noticing his reaction, Suderg asked if the game seemed complicated. He then said he would go easy, since Johann appeared to be a novice. But inside, Johann thought that luck was truly on his side again. Incredible as it seemed, he had once won a Go competition during his time in the army. Perhaps he wasn't a master, but he was definitely not bad either. Suderg said they would start slowly, but Johann replied excitedly, saying he was counting on him, because he was going to claim all that magical knowledge for himself. But 50 minutes later, the situation had changed considerably. Johann was already tired when he tried to end the game, but Suderg insisted on playing one more round. At that moment, Johann complained that he had already asked for just one more 5 times in a row. The old man simply could not accept what was happening. Unable to believe it, he asked if this was really Johann's first time playing Go. Not even the Sultan of the Eastern Empire had managed to defeat him like this. But Johann replied calmly that it was only because Suderg taught so well. Even so, the mage insisted on another game. He said that if he lost one more time, he would give a gift that would prove useful for the rest of his life. Hearing that, Johann immediately thought it might be a powerful magical item. He accepted on the spot. After more time playing, Johann won again. This time, staring at the defeated board, Suderg asked why someone born noble, and a knight at that, had such a strong interest in magic. Johann replied sincerely that he was being hunted by the Empire and wanted anything that would increase increase his chances of survival. That's when Suder decided to put an end to his expectations right away. He said Johann should abandon the idea of using magic in combat because he could not teach him to do that. Disbelieving, Johann asked if he was serious. The old man then realized that had been Johann's real goal from the very beginning. Even so, since he had promised to answer, he decided to explain everything properly. According to Suderg, there were indeed people capable of using magic in combat, but it was neither simple nor safe. He explained that so-called mages were people who had discovered secrets hidden within nature itself. Some found these secrets in the wind, others in fire. There were even those who discovered the mysteries within steam and sulfur, and there were also some madmen who claimed to have found the mystery of the Black Forest itself. These mysteries were known as spirits. Mages created no power of their own. They merely borrowed the strength of those spirits. Normally, spirits granted their powers without asking for anything in return. The problem was that they were completely unpredictable. Sometimes, without any warning, they would exact a fatal price. For that reason, Soedeg gave Johann a very serious warning. Even if he one day encountered one of these mysteries, he must never go against the will of a spirit. Johann then thought that didn't seem like something worth betting his own life on. No magic swordsman, no legendary secret. It just seemed like yet another exaggerated story from that world. It was at that moment that Ion was finally informed that Suderg was there waiting for her. She came running out, saying that all mages were strange like that. When she entered the room, she noticed that Suderg was tormenting poor Johann at the game of the gods. But then she noticed an important detail. The old mage was asking for one more game, just one more, and that made Eon suspicious. Was he losing at the game of the gods? What kind of person was this Johann? She approached and announced she had arrived, asking whether she shouldn't have been called earlier, since he had come all the way there. She also asked whether he was enjoying himself with Mr. Johann. Suder replied that he was. He said he had been playing a few games with that young knight, but since the manager had arrived, it was a shame, though they would end the game there. The problem was, it was quite obvious that Johann had been winning, and Suderg had only decided to stop because he was losing. Even so, he kept his promise. The mage handed Johann 2 potions and explained that these were the final truth of the Epale River, kept inside 2 bottles. One was called the Water of Wrath, the other, the Water of Blessing. Meanwhile, at the Oak Mercenaries' forward post, Bradel and his men were terrified. A figure resembling a nun was slowly approaching them, but there was something profoundly wrong about that presence. It felt like a demonic spirit, something malevolent, and in that moment they realized this was no ordinary band of thieves. Back in the present, Johann asked what exactly those waters of wrath and blessing were. Suderg then explained that, since ancient times, the Epale River had guarded a deep secret, the mystery of life and death. He said he had spent his entire life trying to protect that secret, but the river had never given a clear answer, until Johann appeared. The mage then revealed the true power of the potions. As long as the person's head was not completely severed, the red bottle would be capable of healing any wound. The green bottle, on the other hand, needed only a single drop to dissolve a person entirely. Johann thanked him immediately. In his mind, this proved that magical items truly existed. Suderg then asked if the reason Ion had summoned him was because of the prophecy. She replied that it was. Recently, a group of thieves had appeared on the outskirts of Marseille, but the number of victims was far too high. The company had then sent the Oak Mercenary Company to resolve the problem, but since then no one had received any news from them. Hearing that, Suderg said that the voice of the river had already proclaimed its prophecy. According to him, to the southeast of Marseille, the oaks would be crushed by a rock of steel, their fates would be reaped from behind the veil, and the flames of the city could not be contained. After that, the mage stated that the company had most likely been completely annihilated. But Ion replied that this made no sense. Experienced mercenaries being defeated by simple thieves was absurd. For that reason, she demanded the immediate convening of the city's emergency council, and she said that Mr. Johann would need to act at once under the company's banner. He replied only that he understood. When the meeting was convened, the pompous nobles of the city of Marseille began to arrive. The first to speak was Baron Anbeck, who officially declared the meeting open in the name of the city of Marseille and His Majesty, the Emperor. As he observed all of this, Johann could only think about how that man's mustache was absolutely absurd. There really was no shortage of strange characters in this Middle Ages. Shortly after, Marseille's own governor appeared, Villaco Trananani. And honestly, in Johann's mind, nothing but odd names had appeared in that city so far. Everyone had a strange name. Villaco Trananani even seemed like some kind of Italian brain rot, repeating in his head on a loop. Even so, Johann realized he needed to get closer to the governor. After all, that man was the most important figure in the city, so making a good impression was essential. Villaco Trananani then said he was glad to see all the influential families gathered there, and sincerely thanked everyone for their presence. Before beginning the meeting, he would like to introduce a new noble to those present. At that moment, Johann became a bit nervous as he noticed all eyes turning toward him. The governor then explained that, under the sponsorship of the Katana Company and the I-8's family, this was Sir Johann. Trying to maintain his composure, he replied that it was a pleasure to meet everyone there, and that he would do his best. Everyone applauded, though many still looked at him with suspicion. It was then then that Ainbeck interrupted the ceremony and asked the governor whether it was true that the hired mercenary group had failed to subdue the thieves. According to him, if they had asked the Holy Empire for help from the start, everything would have been resolved cleanly. But immediately the anti-imperial faction pushed back, saying the blame lay precisely with the emperor. According to them, the empire should take responsibility for the situation and reduce the taxes levied on Marcel. In response, the pro-empire faction told everyone to be quiet, saying they were insulting His Majesty in a sacred place like that. They called it blasphemy. In the middle of all that shouting, poor Johann was nearly going deaf. He thought that he never understood a single thing politicians said, and on top of that, there were many people loyal to the emperor in that room. If they discovered his true identity, things could become very dangerous. But Vilico Trananani asked for silence, please, and at once everyone fell quiet. The katana manager then explained that the governor fully understood the concerns of everyone there. For that reason, he had devised an additional plan. They would form a second suppression force to strike at the bandits from the root. Hearing that, Ainbeck replied that this was exactly what one would expect from the governor's perspicacity. He also said that His Majesty the Emperor, above all else, greatly valued the peace of Marcel, and that, with just one word, he would be ready to send imperial troops. At that moment, Johann thought this was terrible. This time he could truly end up imprisoned and executed. He began hoping that Vilico Trananini would refuse the proposal, and that was exactly what happened. The governor replied that he recognized the numerous contributions made by Mr. Ainbeck, but that this time he would respectfully decline imperial assistance. According to him, His Majesty must be far too occupied with the recent rebellion in the north, and he did not wish to add further burden to that. Therefore, they would organize a new mercenary force, including Mr. Johann. Ainbeck replied that if that was the case, there was nothing more to discuss. Even so, he hoped His Majesty would come to learn of the loyalty demonstrated by the governor. Hearing that, Johann felt a measure of relief, but he also realized that man with the enormous mustache was a pro-emperor figure who could still cause him many problems. They said Marcel was untouchable even by the emperor, but that didn't seem to square very well with what he had heard so far. Shortly after, Vilico Trananani declared the meeting closed. He said council members were invited to a more modest gathering, with some light refreshments prepared especially for them. But Ainbeck and the governor remained to speak with Johann. In his mind, if Vilico Trananani was truly pro-emperor, he would stall as little as possible and flee at the first opportunity. But then he was personally summoned to the governor's office. As soon as he entered, Vilico Trananani asked what family he had said he came from again. Johann replied that he was from the Ates family. The governor then seemed to recognize the name immediately. He said the Ates family was famous for a specialty product from the north, fermented date liquor, a true delicacy. At that moment, Johann began to wonder whether that family actually existed, or whether people in that world just made up anything. Vilico Trananani then commented that, coincidentally, he kept a drink full of nostalgia connected to that very family, the famous fermented date liquor. After that, he offered a cup to Johann, asking why he didn't take the opportunity to remember his homeland. With little choice, Johann accepted the drink and took a sip, saying it was very good, and honestly, he even found it pleasant, despite having no idea it existed. The governor then asked how the Ates family had been faring. After all, he had heard that the emperor's sword had devastated the north recently, a tragedy without precedent. Johann said nothing. Noticing the silence, Vilico Trananani continued. He said that many families had been purged, and that survivors had ended up scattered across the continent, living by robbery and plunder. He then revealed that among the exterminated families, there was one accused of treason and placed directly on the empire's wanted list, the Ates family. Even so, Johann replied coldly that this was the first time he had heard anything of the sort. The governor then smiled faintly and replied that yes, of course. He said he had drawn the conversation out too long. And then he revealed the truth. What Johann had just drunk was not date liquor at all. It was just a cheap whiskey distilled from the region. After that, Vilico Trananani said they could put the games aside now. Johann Ates. The moment Johann rose to his feet, clearly tense, the governor told him to stay calm. He said he had no intention of handing him over to the emperor. Everything he did was for the good of Marcel. According to him, no one could say for certain whether the pro-emperor or anti-emperor faction was truly necessary for society. For that reason, he sought to maintain a balance between the sides to protect that city. But above everything else, the absolute priority in that moment was to exterminate the bandits. He then directly asked Johann to resolve the problem. He said that Johann needed to earn merit and prove that he was someone necessary to society. Otherwise, he would be delivered directly into the emperor's arms. Later, Johann was completely desolate. He had genuinely thought he would arrive in Marcel to live in luxury, but in the end, it felt more like a collar fastened around his neck. Now Vilico Trananani knew his true identity. Perhaps fleeing was the smartest choice, but he didn't want to flee. He didn't want to go back to starving, thirsting, sleepless nights, or falling into ambushes again. He absolutely did not. He then realized a simple truth of that world. There was no such thing as a free lunch. If that was how it was, then he would push down on the accelerator and win the governor's favor in order to finally establish himself in Marcel. But at that moment, Goiden appeared informing him that the suppression force was arriving. They were the companions assembled by Veliko Trananani to assist him, the second bandit extermination force of Marcel. Among them were the Red Iron Mercenary Company, the Order of Saint Hyena, and the Order of Saint Galanto. Goiden explained that these people were no small matter. Everyone was extremely famous in that region. The Order of Saint Galanto was composed mainly of male holy knights, and was also known for its alchemy. The Order of Saint Hyena, composed of female holy knights, had a reputation for hunting even trolls. Meanwhile, the Red Iron Company typically operated in siege warfare, and was composed mainly of experienced, loyal, and honorable dwarves. In addition, the Knights of Count Bartok had also arrived. Elves from Erangs, whose bravery was considered legendary. Hearing that, Johann commented that elves were normally obnoxious, and Goiden himself ended up letting out a laugh without meaning to. Even so, Johann decided he wanted to take a good look at all the people who would fight alongside him from then on. Later, Kumal introduced himself to Eon. He was the captain of the Red Iron Mercenary Company, and Eon thanked him for answering the summons. She then introduced Johann, saying he was a knight affiliated with the Katana Company. Johann replied that he was counting on him, sir, but Kumal said to speak without formalities. Even so, Johann replied that it would be disrespectful to address the force commander casually. That made Kumal smile. He commented that the young man had admirable consideration, but that even speaking informally, no one there would doubt his authority. Shortly after, the priests also introduced themselves. The commander of the Order of Saint Hyena was Valian, while the commander of the Order of Saint Galanto was Agente. Kumal took the opportunity to also thank the religious knights for their help and consideration. As he observed everything, Johann thought that Dwarf was far more decent than he had imagined. He still didn't quite understand why the force leader had insisted so much on the need for a command agreement, but in any case, he had taken a liking to Kumal. The fellow seemed like a genuinely good person, but it was precisely at that moment that the problems appeared. Bartok's knights arrived already acting with arrogance, saying they could handle the mission themselves, and asking why so many extra people had been called. They also declared that Count Bartok never did anything without a reason, so there must be some specific reason all of them had been summoned. One of the knights then looked at Johann and asked if he was the knight fighting under the Katana banner. Johann confirmed, introducing himself as Johann Eitz. The man immediately mocked the surname, saying he had never heard of that family. He also commented that they had no time to waste on insignificant families like his, and warned that if he got in the way on the battlefield, he would show no mercy. Johann simply replied that he would remember that. The knights then went on to insult Kumal himself, calling him a damn little dwarf, and making it clear they would not take orders from a commander like him. Even hearing all of that, Kumal held back considerably and continued trying to act politely. Before leaving, the knights also ordered the branch manager to prepare a grand farewell party for them, and when they rode away, Johann finally understood why Kumal had insisted so strongly on that command agreement. With people like that involved, problems were inevitable. Even so, Johann believed that exterminating that group of bandits would be something simple, even with elves involved, and even though he found them awful, it didn't seem impossible at all. But suddenly, Ibelka appeared and whispered something in the manager's ear. Shortly after, the manager informed Johann that someone wished to meet with him that night. At once he asked if it was the governor again, but Ion replied that it wasn't quite that. So, on the night before the second suppression force's departure, a grand party was taking place in the open grounds near Marcel. The Elven Knights loved that kind of pointless celebration, so the place was full of drink, music, and noise. Meanwhile, Suederg observed everything with evident irritation, going so far as to cover his ears. In the noble customs of that world, refusing a drink offered to you was considered a direct insult, practically equivalent to saying, "I don't trust you," and even knowing that, Suederg continued refusing every drink offered by the knights. Johann meanwhile made his way to Katana's reception room. When he entered, he saw another drink waiting on the table. He immediately thought that at least it wasn't the cheap whiskey Veliko Trananani had used to test him before. A hooded man then spoke to him, saying he was the noble who would be heading out the next day to exterminate the bandit gang. He then asked directly whether he had come in pursuit of money. The question irritated Johann, who responded by asking who he thought he was to say something so offensive right off the bat. It was then that the man removed his hood, revealing his identity. It was Baron Einbeck, a faithful servant of the Holy Empire and the Emperor. Einbeck explained that perhaps Johann didn't know, but Marcel was officially neutral. In practice, however, it acted as an anti-emperor city. He then asked whether Johann now understood why he had sought out specifically him, but Johann replied sincerely that he understood none of it. Politics was too complicated for him. The Baron then said that was fine, because he had expected as much. He then began to explain his worldview. According to him, merchants only needed two things: profit and armed force. And the fact that Katana was sponsoring Johann meant precisely that he possessed force. In other words, he knew how to fight. He then asked again about his surname, saying he had investigated the Eitz family, but could not confirm its existence. At that moment, Johann realized that man had also investigated his past. Einbeck continued saying that the only Eitz family confirmed in the records had been exterminated for betraying the Emperor. From the feudal lord down to the servants, no one had survived. He then asked what exactly a nameless family would have to offer a great company like Katana. In the end, it didn't matter whether he was Ites or Ides, Marcel had only accepted him because of his strength. Johann then asked directly what he was trying to say with all of that. The answer came quickly. The Baron wanted him not to participate in the extermination expedition the next day. Instead, he should use his strength in the name of the Emperor. In exchange, he promised rewards far greater than anything Katana could offer. He said he could enter the core of the empire, receive a knighthood, and even obtain a vast and fertile territory. Johann then asked whether, by following the Baron and the Emperor, he would have glory and prosperity. Einbeck immediately replied that yes, he would. It was then that Johann said coldly that the weak shed blood, while the strong drink that blood. He also said that dying to bandits was simply the natural fate of the weak. That even moved the Baron, who replied excitedly that was exactly how the world worked. To him, the blame always lay with those who got beaten. But shortly after, Johann refused the proposal. He recounted that, months ago, men who claimed to act in the Emperor's name had invaded his territory, massacred his family, and murdered innocent people of his people. After the massacre, they had still made that exact same offer, wanting him to become the Emperor's sword. Of course, he had refused. He then asked the Baron if he knew what the difference had been that time. The person who made the proposal ended up dying at his hands. Without hesitation, Johann had crushed the head of an imperial knight, because the man treated his peasants as if they were insects. At that moment, Einbeck began to suspect the truth. In his mind, there was only one possibility. Could it be that this man was the one responsible for killing Karamov? Johann then slowly rose to his feet and revealed once and for all who he really was. He said that the survivor of the exterminated Eights family was standing right before him, Baron. He then picked up the cup that was on the table, crushed it in his hand, and threw such a powerful punch that it destroyed part of the furniture. With a cold gaze, he made it clear that he would not fight for either the Emperor or Marcel. He fought only for his own life. Before leaving, he also gave the Baron a warning. He had better not say a word to anyone about what he had seen and heard that night, because if it spread, next time he would not step on just a cup or a table. The next thing he crushed would be the Baron's head. But as soon as he stepped out of the room, Johann realized something was wrong. His heart began to burn, his breathing failed, and his body lost its strength. There had been poison in that cup, obviously. And worse still, Einbeck had been expecting that reaction from the very start. Meanwhile, at the camp where the party was still going on, Goiden was completely surrounded by several women from the entertainment troupe, all excessively excited. They asked if he was also part of the mercenary group, said he was too skinny and cute, and complained that it was terribly dull to be surrounded by old men reeking of sweat and alcohol. Then they began teasing him further, asking why he didn't have a bit of fun with them, but Goiden simply panicked and ran away from there, completely red with embarrassment. The girls just laughed, saying what a shame it was, because they had wanted to give him a proper makeover. Even while fleeing from them, Goiden continued searching for Johann. He was already frightened by the whole situation, especially because even Sudurg, who normally seemed so calm, was clearly irritated trying to deal with those loud, obnoxious drunks. That's when he found Johann collapsed in the corridor, bleeding and practically on the verge of death. Later, already recovering a bit of his strength, Johann was washing his face while trying to breathe normally again. Thanks to Goiden's help, he had survived. At that moment, the boy handed him that red potion capable of healing practically anything. Johann thanked him sincerely, saying that if he hadn't found him in time, he would have died right there. But Goiden, all flustered, replied that it was nothing much. He even said he hadn't really known what blessing water was. After that, Johann also thanked Sudurg, because without the potion and his help, he truly would have died. But Sudurg replied coldly that he had no need to thank him. He then began to reprimand the boy, saying that had been an absolutely reckless act. He asked if he knew very well that Einbeck was pro-emperor, and that tangling with someone of that level like that was practically asking to die. He then added dryly that next time he decided to do something that crazy, he should at least die quickly. That way they would save the rest of the blessing water. Even after nearly dying, Johann still replied normally that at least half the potion was left and that from now on he would carry it with him at all times. But Sudurg returned to the main subject. He said that in the end, they had failed to capture the Baron, and that was a huge problem, because they needed him alive to prove the accusations. But Johann explained that when they arrived there, Einbeck had already fled. He had gone to the location together with Goren's mercenary group, but the Baron had only left behind a letter and several documents abandoned during the escape. Detailed records documenting everything that was happening. At once, Sudurg asked whether those documents mentioned the rumor that the Emperor was financing the bandit gang, but Johann replied that they did not. This was something far more serious. Meanwhile, Einbeck rode at full speed, thinking that by now Johann was probably already dead from the poison. In his view, everything was happening exactly according to His Majesty the Emperor's will. After riding for quite some time, he arrived at another settlement belonging to the Empire itself. There, several men were already awaiting his orders. Einbeck then began to face those soldiers while speaking to himself. He said they were not simple bandits, and truly they were not. Those men were mercenaries mercenaries and warriors bought with the gold of the Holy Empire. Extremely trained fighters, considered among the strongest in the empire, all sworn in absolute loyalty to the emperor. For a long time, Einbeck had moved freely through Marseille, studying everything: the city's layouts, its strategies, its strengths and weaknesses. Everything was literally in the palm of his hand. And now, thanks to that, the enemies would die in the midst of chaos without even understanding who was really attacking them. Furthermore, His Majesty had personally dispatched an imperial court mage. The men grew excited at once. An imperial mage was a rare sight, so some began to speculate whether this might be the famous Crimson Flame. But the woman herself stepped forward and replied that being confused with such a common mage was almost laughable. She then introduced herself as Janina, a court mage personally favored by the emperor. Some men asked if she was a serpent woman, since they had never heard of her before, but Janina replied that obviously she was not. She was no vulgar mage who merely manipulated base elements. Her specialty was controlling living weapons. When she opened the first test tube, a dense smoke poured from within it and summoned a gigantic creature. It was a transformed troll completely under her control. Janina explained that this was her beloved troll and that it would fight alongside them in battle. Einbeck then declared that the following day, they would completely destroy Marcel's second extermination force. After that, they would deliver the entirety of Marcel into the emperor's hands. The knights cheered immediately and began crying out, "Long live the Holy Empire." Meanwhile, after reading the letter, Johann sent Goiden to deliver it directly to Governor Villico Trenanani. He also told him not to say anything to anyone else, because the governor needed to see it personally. He then summoned Goran and Kan, saying it was urgent. As he observed all of this, Sueder kept wondering why the Apale River insisted so strongly on saving that knight. Perhaps it was trying to accomplish something through him. Perhaps Johann was the hero of some ancient forgotten prophecy. The following morning, before the gates of Marseille, Kumal had already organized all the forces. The holy orders were praying before the battle as Johann approached on his warhorse, Philip. Goiden then told him to give it everything he had. Johann replied only that they should take good care of Suderg. The mage became a bit irritated and asked whether he really thought this was his first expedition. Even so, Johann ignored the complaint and simply said they were departing. When he drew up beside Kumal and confirmed he was ready, the advance began. But some soldiers broke into a run before the official order was given. It was those idiotic Bartok knights causing trouble again. Irritated, Kumal ordered the other dwarf to sound the trumpet again. Once the sound echoed out once more, he finally gave the official advance order. Meanwhile, Ion commented to Governor Villaco Trananani that the extermination force had finally departed. The governor then asked whether he had truly read the letter sent earlier. Ion confirmed that he had, and explained that the letter had been found in Baron Einbeck's room. The governor replied that this had happened right on the eve of their departure, and inside the Baron's own room, so it was difficult to fully believe in the letter's authenticity, especially considering the possibility of internal rivalries. But Ion stated that the Einbeck house seal was genuine. Furthermore, judging by the letter's contents, everything indicated that the Baron himself was the mastermind behind the whole situation. The manager also mentioned that on top of everything else, Einbeck had fled the city, which made everything even more suspicious. Even so, Villaco Trananani replied that he still could not fully trust that young knight. He also feared that the Katana Trading Company was placing too much confidence in Johann. Ion then replied that the company did not back just anyone, they only trusted someone after that person had proven their true worth. Even so, the governor warned her to remember one thing: if that knight's mistaken actions ended up destroying the city's balance, Katana would share in the responsibility. Hearing that, the manager began to suspect that Villico Trananani might be someone connected to the pro-emperor group. Meanwhile, at the Imperial faction's camp, Einbeck was preparing for the confrontation. He informed them that a messenger had just brought word that the second extermination force had already departed. To him, that meant they would all walk straight into the trap. In his view, Marcel was already practically in His Majesty's hands. All parties involved were already in position, including Mayhem, commander of the Imperial Special Unit, and the Imperial Mage Janina. During the conversation, Mayhem commented that after taking Marcel, the first thing he would do was patrol the city's brothels. Janina immediately replied that was repugnant, but soon after Mayhem noticed that Einbeck seemed strange and asked why he was so pale. The Baron replied there was no cause for concern. He then took the opportunity to ask Lady Janina whether she had received any news about Sir Karamov, perhaps an accident during some expedition, or even a serious injury. The other two began to laugh as soon as they heard that. To them, imagining Karamov seriously injured was impossible. Janina then explained that he was the Empire's strongest swordsman. On top of that, he wore legendary artifacts from head to toe. Alone, he was equivalent to the entire entire core of the Empire's military power. Something happening to someone of that level simply seemed impossible. Even so, Einbeck kept thinking that what the boy had said was probably a lie. A fellow of such insignificant origins could never have accomplished something like that. In the end, he concluded he had done well to have him killed. Later, when Johann arrived beside Kumal, he noticed that Gustav's troops had already cleared the entire area with ease. Several bandits lay dead scattered around the place. Gustav then commented that they had finally shown up and took the opportunity to taunt the dwarves, saying they were too slow, as always. Kumal replied irritably that he was indeed a dwarf, but unlike them, Johann was a noble. After that, he threatened to smash those pointy ears if Gustav kept being disrespectful. Seeing that, Johann thought that elves and dwarves really couldn't get along. Even so, he decided to interrupt the argument and told Captain Kumal that was enough. He then asked Gustav's knights whether any combat had occurred in that area, since all the enemies seemed to have departed after the battle. The knight replied that the brave Gustav and the elven knights had completely cleared the area and also led the main force in pursuing the remaining bandits into the forest. And indeed, some could be seen fleeing into that dark, dense place. The knight then made it clear that all spoils and prisoners belonged to Mr. Gustav. According to him, the group had arrived too late to claim any share of the reward. Kumal replied that they had already been well paid and that the elves were welcome to everything. But Johann felt there was something very wrong with that situation. After all, those supposed bandits had wiped out the Oak mercenaries, a group of over 500 men. But now the battle had been far too easy. Furthermore, that forest was perfect for an ambush. Johann then asked whether the elves had scouted the forest before advancing. The knight replied that they had not, and even asked if he planned to hunt some animal in there. But Johann was convinced that the bandits had deliberately retreated to draw everyone into the forest. To him, that was clearly a trap. Even so, Kumal ordered them to continue advancing, because he didn't want to give those pointy-eared knights a reason to start trouble. But Johann asked them to wait. He said they needed to immediately switch to a defensive formation and concentrate all archers' fire on the forest. Not quite understanding, Kumal asked for the reason. Johann then explained that if enemies were truly hidden there, the terrain would put their army at an enormous disadvantage. For that reason, they needed to confirm the situation before crossing the forest. Kumal replied that even if it were true, they would still only be bandits. But Johann countered immediately, saying they were not simple bandits. Those men had destroyed the Oak mercenaries. They could not treat the enemy as something insignificant. Before the main force advanced any further, they needed to uncover the truth at that very moment. The knight then called Johann crazy. Even Kumal hesitated, saying that if they fired arrows into the forest and nothing was there, they would be humiliated by the elves. But Johann replied that if he could trade his honor for all their lives, he would abandon his honor as many times as necessary. That left Kumal torn, but in the end he accepted Johann's suggestion, and Johann himself thought that this time he had managed to convince someone. The last time, the mercenary group had completely ignored his warnings. Shortly after, Kumal ordered the entire army to shift to a defensive formation. The dwarves raised a barricade of shields while the archers prepared their shots. Then a rain of arrows was unleashed against the forest, and there truly were enemies hiding there. At once, Kumal realized this was indeed an ambush, but what appeared was nothing at all like ordinary bandits. From among the trees emerged something far larger, a gigantic armored minotaur. At that moment, Johann recalled a conversation he'd had when he received Baron Einbeck's letter. He had asked Goran whether he had ever heard of a mercenary company called the Bull's Head, and Can had replied that he had. According to him, that group was extremely famous even among mercenaries themselves. There was even another group made up only of elves called the Arcatan Wolves, but the Bull's Heads were even more expensive and feared. Curious, Johann asked for more details. Can then told him that despite being mercenaries, they were shrouded in mystery. They charged fortunes and didn't accept just any contract. They were said to advance like a stampede of enraged bulls, driving straight through the center of enemy lines in a brutal breakthrough tactic. Hearing that, Johann thought it sounded very similar to the German Blitzkrieg of the Second World War. At the time, Goran had asked whether he really believed they would face people of that level, and Johann replied that they were not dealing with a simple band of thieves, but rather with elite mercenaries of the Emperor himself. But Can said that if that were true, he would recommend an immediate retreat. According to him, facing those men head-on would be suicide, and there was an even worse rumor. They said the Bull's Heads had a minotaur fighting alongside them. That made Johann recall stories he had heard as a child. The hero killer, the monstrous minotaur, with a body like a mountain, absurd strength, and intelligence comparable to a human's. Many warriors and knights had tried to defeat him over the years. They all ended up massacred. Even so, Goran had tried to reassure Johann, saying that the next day they would risk their own lives to ensure his escape, but Johann replied that he had already expected to count on their help. Goran then smiled smiled and said he wanted to see that famous bull's head with his own eyes. Kan replied that the ideal plan would be to flee before that happened. Johan thanked them both for their concern, but said he needed to ask something else of them. And then the thought returned to the present. The moment Kumal's formation fired on the forest, several unarmored, unprotected enemies were immediately killed by the arrows. However, the bulls' heads put on their helmets and began advancing alongside the gigantic minotaur. The dwarves even fired their cannons, but not even that was enough to halt the enemy advance. At that instant, Kumal admitted that Johan had been right. That was indeed the famous Bull's Head Company. As he assessed the situation, Johan realized that their preparations had prevented a complete ambush, but now it had turned into a frontal clash, and if they let the Bull's Heads fully deploy their breakthrough strategy, it would all be over right there. He then told Kumal to prepare everyone for impact, because they would advance head-on. According to Johan, he himself would deal with that attack formation, but Kumal immediately replied that it was far too dangerous to face that alone. Even with Kumal's warning, Johan advanced on his warhorse Philip. Kumal then shouted to the Red Iron Army that the Bull's Head Company dared to test their strength, but would soon discover they would not pass. When Johan entered the battlefield, the Bull's Heads were already prepared to kill him. Some said he must be crazy for wanting his own death so badly. They then charged at him, wielding heavy axes and warhammers, weapons made precisely to crush enemies in frontal combat. But Johan reacted first. With a brutal blow of his warhammer, he completely caved in the head of one of the bull knights, as if crushing a simple tin can. That made the bulls' heads focus all their attention on him. Several warriors began trying to stop Johan, who was destroying precisely their breakthrough formation. But the mercenaries quickly recognized his strategy, so they began to ignore him, sidestepping direct combat and advancing anyway. At the same time, Kumal ordered the dwarves to form a shield wall to absorb the bulls' heads' impact. But the enemy's force was absurd. The heavy axes and warhammers shattered the dwarves' defensive formation almost immediately. Even so, the dwarves kept fighting with everything they had. Kumal himself knocked down one of the bulls' heads using his warhammer. He then activated the dwarven blessing on their weapons, and ordered everyone to bathe their blades in incandescent fire together with enemy blood. Seeing that, Johan realized he no longer needed to worry about the dwarves. They were genuinely strong. Now all that remained was to face the Minotaur directly. Meanwhile, one of the bulls' heads asked who that damned man was who dared to challenge Centurion Numeros without showing any fear. Another replied that he was precisely the knight who had been trying to destroy their formation. A unit commander then asked the Lord Numeros for permission to face him. The Minotaur replied that he granted him the chance. Shortly after, the commander advanced alongside his men, declaring that they would crush and tear that knight apart. But it was all over in seconds. Their heads were completely smashed by Johan's warhammer. After that, Johan calmly walked toward the Minotaur Centurion, thinking that he truly existed. He then realized that the story Kan had told was true. Stopping before him, Johan asked whether he was the mercenaries' leader, but Numeros simply told him to get off his horse. He said that when he cut him to pieces, the poor animal might end up getting hurt too. He admitted he had taken a liking to Philip's bearing, so he preferred not to kill him. The Bull's Head warriors did not interfere. They simply formed a circle around the two, watching the duel. Some even commented that the poor knight would leave nothing but scraps after facing the chief. Johan then dismounted, saying he also didn't want Philip to get hurt. But before the fight began, he still taunted the Minotaur. He said that if he won, he'd make a burger out of his meat. He called Numeros a walking McDonald's. Confused, the Minotaur asked what on earth McWhat was. But shortly after he charged at Johan wielding his gigantic war axe. By a hair, Johan managed to dodge the first blow. In truth, at that moment, all he could do was evade. He could find no opening. The Minotaur's axe was enormous, and the difference in reach between the two was absurd. To use his warhammer, Johan would need to close the distance far too much. And if that axe even grazed him, he would be split in two instantly. In that instant, he even thought he should have brought the crest-restoring sword. As he kept attacking relentlessly, Numeros complained that this was no real fight. He said just dodging was no fun and asked Johan to give him a battle worthy of a knight. But it was precisely at that moment that Johan found an opening. He slid through the Minotaur's legs and said he had finally found a gap. He then struck with all his warhammer's force directly into Numeros's sensitive area. The surrounding knights nearly felt the pain just from watching. Numeros himself screamed desperately, clutching his groin. And at that instant, Johan was already preparing to finish off the Bull's Head leader once and for all. Meanwhile, across the rest of the battlefield, the war raged frantically. The dwarves were still managing to hold their own against the Bull's Heads. But then, finally, the holy orders began to act. Agante and the entire order of Saint Galanto picked up their potions and drank everything at once. The moment the liquid went down, they entered a complete frenzy. They were utterly beside themselves, their bodies supercharged by the power of alchemy. Their eyes blazed, their muscles expanded, and they advanced like true monsters on the battlefield. The Bull's Heads recognized this immediately. They were the paladins of Galanto. To them, those men were not ordinary humans. They were war monsters. The Galanto faction began beating the Bull's Heads relentlessly, knocking them down one after another. They advanced unstoppably, deeply, killing any enemy that appeared before them. But during the fight, Agante ended up in danger. A massive warhammer was about to crush him. When Valiant appeared, she attacked the enemy mid-air, interrupting the blow before it landed on her brother. Her strike killed the opponent on the spot. She then helped Agante to his feet and reminded him there were still people who needed his help. Agante replied that yes. To him, the screams were praises. The blood renewed the holy water, and the light would continue to guide them in that battle alongside his sister. Even so, the Bull's Head Company refused to retreat. Many still believed that Lord Numeros would kill that night on his own, and then rejoin the rest of the troops to turn the battle around. But the reality was different. While everyone was thinking that, Johann was already removing the defeated Minotaur's helmet. With the enemy lying on the ground, he asked whether that hero killer had any last words before dying. At that moment, everyone fell silent. The Bull's Head warriors removed their own helmets in respect for their defeated leader. Numeros then asked for forgiveness for his insolence, and said that killing him would bring no honor to the knight, because he was not a pure-blooded Minotaur. Johann found this strange and asked what he meant. Numeros then explained that he was only half-blood. He did not possess the same strength or the same intelligence as a true pure-blooded Minotaur. Therefore, defeating him would not be a great feat. But Johann replied that he didn't care about that. He then told the Bull's Head's bugler to inform the front line that they had lost the battle. Numeros said they were finished anyway. But Johann made it clear that it was not yet over for him. The Minotaur would survive as a witness and would tell only the truth about everything that had happened. Shortly after, the Bull's Head's front line received the signal from the rear through the bugle. Their centurion had been defeated by a single knight. Kumal took immediate advantage of this. He asked the little bulls what they would do now, since their leader was being dispatched. He then ordered his bugler to sound the victory march, because this was the first great victory of that war. Meanwhile, at the Katana branch in Marseille, Ion was informing the governor that they had received good news. The extermination force had finally achieved its first victory. The governor replied that he had already heard something about this, and believed that Count Bartok's elven knights had been responsible for the feat. But Ion explained that was not the case. In fact, they had lost contact with the elves. The governor was surprised and asked what that meant. In his view, elven knights would never lose to simple bandits. Ion then recalled Mr. Johann's words. As he had suspected from the very beginning, this was not the work of common thieves, but rather a mercenary company concealing its true identity. She then handed over a freshly arrived document. When the governor read the report, he realized the leader of the Bull's Head Company had confessed everything. They had been acting under Baron Einbeck's orders. The governor immediately recognized the Minotaur's name and asked whether this meant he had been captured alive. After that, he was even more astonished and wanted to know who was capable of doing something so outrageous. But Ion already knew perfectly well who had done it. Johann had not only defeated the enemies, but had also forced the surrender of every last one of them on the battlefield. When Johann returned to the camp, Goiden ran toward him to embrace his master, but they ended up holding the boy back before he could leap on him. Soiderg then commented that he had truly worked hard in that battle. Johann replied that everyone had gone through a long journey and told them to rest, but Goiden was already too excited. He recounted the whole story of the fight and began wildly exaggerating, saying that the master swung his mace going wham, bam, bam, knocking down 50 men at once, then pow, boom, crash, bash. Johann told him to stop exaggerating like that, but deep down he was loving every bit of those praises. Kumal then joined the conversation, saying the boy wasn't even exaggerating that much. According to him, all of it was true. The Red Iron Mercenary Company believed that Lord Johann deserved every compliment he was receiving. The dwarf explained that the way Johann charged at the enemies was glorious. His courage set the hearts of the warriors ablaze and would serve as an example for all dwarves going forward. Johann replied that he was greatly flattered, and deep down he began to think that if everyone was speaking so highly of him, then Vilico Trinini would certainly hear of his deeds. Perhaps he would now see him in a different light. It was at that moment that Valiant appeared at the tent's entrance. She said that Johann's strength alone was already impressive, but what had truly shocked her were the tactics he had used during the battle. Agante wished that the blessing of Saint Hyena be at his side. He then said that the blessing of Galanto would also guide Johann in that battle. Valiant then explained that if it hadn't been for Johann, all of them would have marched straight into an ambush without realizing it. According to her, there are few knights who can excel in both strategy and tactics, and beyond his intelligence on the battlefield, she was also deeply impressed by the character he had shown. After all, he had even spared the enemy commander's life. Johann replied that, after fighting the man, he realized he wasn't everything he seemed, and besides, there was no real necessity to kill him. But Valiant disagreed. She explained that the Minotauro possessed overwhelming combat strength and could easily have exterminated many people there. Even had he shown intent to surrender, any ordinary knight would have taken his head for the glory of killing the famous hero killer. But Johann had not done that. To her, respecting an adversary's life was an extremely rare virtue. Johann tried to deflect and replied that he had only kept the enemy alive because it was necessary. He also said that this kind of praise made him uncomfortable. At that moment, both paladins thought he was far too humble. Suderg then commented that Johann didn't even realize how many people that half blood had massacred on the battlefield. According to him, when humility goes too far, even those offering the praise start to feel uncomfortable. After that, Johan ended up accepting their gratitude. Kumal then said that the situation now made sense. The enemies were also mercenaries, so that would finally be a worthy battle. He explained that once they reorganized their troops, they would crush Einbeck's gang the right way. But at that moment, a messenger from Gustav appeared, completely covered in blood. Kumal looked at the man's condition and commented that by his appearance, this was definitely not good news. Desperately, the messenger asked that reinforcements be sent immediately because they had been attacked by a troll. Meanwhile, inside the dark forest covered by a heavy mist, Gustav's knights were pursuing the supposed bandits who were serving only as bait. The enemies were so weak that they were killed easily. Gustav himself complained that it was so dull it didn't even get his blood pumping. Even so, he made it clear he had never expected a truly honorable battle. While discussing collecting the spoils after the fight, the knights advanced even deeper into the forest. Gustav then announced that from that moment on, they would pursue every fleeing enemy until every last one was exterminated. He also ordered that any valuable objects found along the way be collected, but warned that any soldier caught hiding loot for himself would be severely punished. The troops pressed on, but Gustav himself ended up falling behind, saying they could rest a bit, catch their breath, and check their equipment. He commented that he hadn't imagined a forest like this existed so close to Marcel. At the same time, he felt that place was perfect for ambushes and bandit hideouts, like a sewer rat's den. But a short while later, one of his soldiers came running back, completely covered in blood and wounds, begging for help. Before he could explain anything properly, something gigantic crushed the man before everyone's eyes. It was then that Gustav's knights finally saw the creature, a troll. The messenger explained everything desperately. They had fallen into a trap set by those bastards. The bandits had simply vanished, and shortly after, the troll appeared in the middle of the troops. Johan immediately realized this was indeed a trap, but found it strange that there was a troll there, because there had been no mention of it in Einbeck's letter. The messenger then said that 3 of Bartok's knights were still trapped inside, and pleaded for someone to save their men. Kumal asked what the others thought of the situation. The paladins replied that it was not part of their creed to abandon people in danger, even the impure, but that they would follow Kumal's decision. Johan then asked exactly what kind of creature a troll was. Valian explained that she had faced one before, and decided to be completely honest. Without divine help, humans simply could not face that creature head-on. According to her, the troll's skin was harder than stone, its muscles like cables of steel, and its entire body so resilient that most attacks caused no real damage. Furthermore, the monstrous strength generated by its colossal size was something far beyond what humans could withstand. But worst of all was the regeneration. Even when someone managed to pierce that absurd skin and open a wound, it healed almost instantly. Meanwhile, poor Gustav was inside dealing with that monstrosity. The messenger kept pleading, saying they had no time to argue and asking for help immediately. Johan then asked what their decision would be. Valian replied that she would follow Kumal's judgment, but she also made it clear that even running at full speed, the elves would likely have found their eternal rest before they arrived. The messenger grew desperate hearing that. Kumal then asked the elven soldier to listen carefully. He said he was sorry, but that he could not send a rescue group at that moment. The main mission was not yet finished. Furthermore, even if they ran there now, there was absolutely no guarantee they would make it out alive. They needed a better plan before acting. But before the discussion could continue, Johan simply said that he would go. Kumal replied that it was not something to be taken lightly, since they were dealing with a troll, but even so said that, with brave warriors like them there, it wouldn't be such a serious problem if he stepped away for a moment, and so ended up agreeing to organize a rescue group. He then reiterated that going at that instant would be useless, because they would probably already be dead, and it would only put more people in danger. Johan refused that idea, and said that if there was still a chance someone was alive, he couldn't stand by and watch them die, and that if even one person was still alive, the rescue would be worth it. That left the paladins deeply moved, and Kumal commented again that Johan always surprised them, then confirmed the formation of the rescue group. Meanwhile, Goiden praised Johan's nobility, but Sudarg replied that his objectives were quite easy to understand. Johan himself reflected that the elven knights weren't all that weak, and could probably hold out for a time, which might make a rescue possible, and also thought he could still earn a good reward from it, trying to make the most of the situation. On the other side, at the pro-Empire faction's tent, Mayhem reported that scouts had confirmed the elven knights had fallen into the trap, and that if they were completely eliminated, it would damage the relationship between Marcel's government and Erang's. Janina replied that it was still too early to celebrate, since the expedition's main force had not yet been drawn in, and also commented that the Bull's Head mercenary company had surrendered despite the investment made in them. Einbeck explained they were merely a disposable piece within the plan, while Janina expressed suspicion and asked whether it had been fabricated, but he showed her a letter bearing another emblem. problem, and said he had a larger plan in motion. At that moment, Einbeck asked about Janina's troll, noting its weakness to fire, but she replied with confidence that there was no cause for concern, since she had not placed a troll in the swamp by accident. She explained that the moisture in the region made fire practically useless, and that even torches would barely work there, ensuring that enemies would end up lost in the darkness. Meanwhile, Johann advanced with the search party, and noticed they were being guided by a special torch carried by Valian, who was using a sacred technique called Hyena's Fire. She explained that this was a technique passed down by the monastery, normally used to exterminate monsters. Johann then asked whether this was what had defeated the troll before, and Valian confirmed it, explaining that the sacred fire could interrupt a troll's regeneration, being different from ordinary fire because it did not go out with water and burned until it consumed everything it touched, like a purifying flame. Johann mentally compared it to something like white phosphorus, and praised their skills, highlighting the magic, swordsmanship, and endurance to keep up with horses on the move. Valian replied that it came from daily training and divine grace. Johann then felt more at ease, realizing that their group was reliable, though he still thought it was far too small for a mission of that level, and decided that the main objective would be simply to distract the troll and rescue the elven knights, believing they were probably already in flight or in hiding. Meanwhile, Gustav was trying to maintain order in the fight, shouting for them not to hide and to hold formation, trying to press the creature, but was caught off guard when he stumbled into something and realized it was the elves' horses fleeing through the swamp. Hearing the screams, Johann realized he was wrong to assume they weren't fighting, and Valian replied that this was actually good news, because it meant there were still survivors. She then stated that with that amount of flame it would not be possible to defeat the troll, and that they needed to prepare a stronger fire. Johann agreed and said she could prepare the fire while he advanced to buy time, but Valian tried to stop him, saying that was not what she had meant, though he had already moved forward along with the group. Faced with this, Valian ordered the other sisters of the order to concentrate and prepare a more powerful hyena's fire. She knelt, drove her sword into the ground, and invoked Saint Hyena, while the other women of the order channeled energy into the magic. On the battlefield, the troll kept crushing the elves, while Gustav managed to dodge some attacks and even land hits on the creature with his rapier, but the wounds simply regenerated in a matter of seconds, leaving him increasingly frustrated. The troll roared powerfully, and the situation worsened as the soldiers began to lose morale and exhaustion took hold of the group. Lohan, unable to continue, dropped his sword and admitted he couldn't go on, while the creature advanced brutally, and he asked his master Gustav to flee, showing that the combat was reaching a critical point of despair. Gustav said he would not abandon anyone, even with the troll's danger. When the troll spotted that Lohan was easy prey, it advanced directly to attack him, but midway through the motion, something struck the creature with an absurd force, and lodged in its jaw, holding its mouth open and piercing its neck, causing the troll to spit a great deal of blood and recoil in shock. The elves couldn't understand who could have launched a weapon with such force as to pierce the troll's thick skin, until they realized that the one who had arrived was Johann, holding spears and advancing alongside his horse Philip, and he told Gustav not to stand there and to take advantage of the moment to fall back, since it was time to flee. Meanwhile, at the Katana branch, the governor was looking at a letter bearing the Oak Mercenary Company's seal, which said that Marcel's gate should be opened at midnight, and manager Eon stated that this was clearly Einbeck's work, since the Oak Company had been the first force sent to eliminate the bandits, but had been annihilated by the Emperor's elite mercenaries, and so Einbeck would have used the seal of the deceased Bradil to create a forged letter as part of a plan to bring down Marcel's last defense. The governor understood the situation and agreed that it was a cleverly calculated ruse, and decided that even if there were still survivors, it made no sense to act that night, leaving it for the following morning, and reinforced that he had already instructed the guard that no one was to pass through Marcel's walls during the night. Meanwhile, at the camp, Goiden was praying for Johann's protection, worried about the mission against the troll, and Sudarg commented that he didn't need to worry so much, since Johann's master had mastered special techniques related to the Epale River, including the Water of Wrath and the Water of Blessing, with the Water of Wrath capable of being applied to weapons to deal fatal damage, and that this was what had allowed him to wound the troll before, opening a breach in the combat. But Johann didn't even remember the Water of Wrath anymore, and had done it solely through his own strength, and yet he realized he had still managed to pierce the troll's skin, even though the creature retained its regenerative capacity. In the middle of the fight, the elven knights advanced trying to finish the job, but Gustav tried to stop them and ordered a retreat, already seeing it was suicide to continue, while Lohan insisted that if the human could wound the troll, so could they, and ended up being brutally struck and flung against a tree by the monster. Johann then made it clear that he had come back to save them, not to argue, while the troll pulled out the spear lodged in its jaw and regenerated rapidly. He charged forward on Philip to draw the creature's attention and try to open space for the knights to flee, since he had no intention of facing a troll in direct combat, and seized a gap to hurl another spear, striking the monster's thigh in an attempt to limit its mobility, but was caught off guard when the troll knocked him off his horse, grabbed his body and prepared to slam him into the ground. At the same time, in Marcel, A guard spotted a group of men in the distance bearing the Oak Mercenary Company's standard and was shocked, unable to understand how that was possible since they had believed them exterminated. So the general alarm was sounded on the walls, and everyone was called to reinforce the gate's defenses. The branch manager said that meant they had finally arrived and that she would send a message to confirm the commander's identity, while someone approached saying that would not be necessary. The person who had entered the office was none other than Bradell himself, who appeared saying that if they were looking for the commander, he had come in person. Aeon was surprised and asked if they hadn't died, but Bradell replied asking for forgiveness and spoke with devotion to the Sacred Empire and to gold, making it clear that everything was part of a larger game of interests. The governor questioned whether they had been bought from the very beginning, and Bradell confirmed that from that moment on, Marcel would be seized by the Oak Mercenary Company under the Empire's command. In the midst of that tension, Johann was flung forcefully against the ground and ended up falling into the swamp water, while the elves believed he had died. Under the Oak banner, the mercenaries were already readying arrows and torches, and one of them commented that Marcel's defenders were doing exactly what Einbeck had predicted, insisting that no matter the cost, they would enter the city. Meanwhile, Marcel's guards tried to resist, but the mercenaries had already found gaps and secret paths for infiltration, and it was through one of these that Bradell managed to enter the city directly. He declared that the Empire had no need for people who betrayed for a few silver coins and ordered his men to take control of Marcel while the guard was distracted, with the plan to capture the captains and force the governor's surrender. In the present, Bradell faced the governor and told him not to act as though he had control of the situation, stating that the city was already practically taken. The manager questioned how he could say that after attacking Marcel, but Bradell replied coldly that they should accept reality and choose the winning side in order not to lose everything. He revealed that the guard captain had already been captured and that the rest were surrendering, making it clear there was not much left to do. He then placed a document on the table, demanding the signing of an order for the entire expeditionary force to cease combat and surrender to the enemy, along with an oath of loyalty to the emperor, stating that in this way they would avoid further bloodshed and suffering. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the elven knights came upon Johann's body and saw the troll approaching again, ready to finish everyone off. Gustav stepped forward and ordered the others to flee, saying he would buy time, even against his soldiers' wishes. They hesitated to leave him, but ultimately obeyed. He advanced with his rapier and faced the troll head-on, accepting that he probably would not survive, and asking for an honorable death in combat. Meanwhile, Johann was unconscious, floating in the swamp water, recalling the words of his master Kagail, who had taught him not to fight enemies impossible to defeat and to always flee when necessary, but also to kill without hesitation when needed. In the midst of his unconsciousness, he felt he was dying, reflecting on his difficult life and accepting the end, until something in the depths of the water pulled him back, like an impulse of life. At that moment, he broke through the despair and thought that if he could not escape death, he needed to kill death, and with that violent thought of survival, he gathered his strength and punched his own heart, forcing his body back to consciousness and fighting against the threshold of death. Johann came back to life as if he had overcome death itself, rising before the troll that was still trying to attack Gustav, and at that instant he charged forward with force and drove another spear, this time piercing the creature's wrist, which roared in pain as blood spread, and Gustav watched Johann rise completely consumed by fury, realizing he was no longer fighting like an ordinary person, while Johann made it clear amid the combat that the elves were getting in the way, and that they should get out of there immediately, speaking in anger that he had never liked them. Meanwhile, previously at Einbeck's tent alongside the Empire's men, word arrived that the city of Marcel had fallen, and Einbeck reacted with satisfaction, declaring that everything had happened exactly as planned, and that the outcome was entirely under his control, while Janina replied that at first she thought it was idiotic, and felt he was just showing off, but admitted he had his uses, and Einbeck reinforced that Eon and Velako Trenene would be executed regardless, even after the disaster had ended, since to him merchants were irrelevant, and could not interfere with imperial politics, so he intended to eliminate the entire anti-empire union, and completely purify the city, spreading the notion that money could never purchase honor or noble lineage. And Janina proposed a toast to the glory of the Holy Empire, joined by all, while Mayhem affirmed he would bring the news to the emperor, and Einbeck encouraged him to report everything, saying the conquest of Marcel was accomplished by his own hands. Shortly after, Mayhem withdrew through the forest, thinking about how arrogant Einbeck was, and determined not to let him take all the credit. And at that moment he noticed a warhorse standing in the middle of the woods, mounting it and calling the animal Philip, ordering it to advance. But the horse did not react as expected, standing firm as a wall, and it was then that Mayhem heard a growl and came face to face with Karamav, of the group known as the Dawn's Guide, who threatened him with death. Back in combat, Gustav noticed that even with the elves' interference, the troll had endured countless cuts and piercings without showing real pain before, but had reacted with genuine pain when struck by a human spear, so he decided to observe Johann's fight. While the troll advanced against him, and Johann, even with dwindling strength, launched 3 spears that struck its shoulder, torso, and leg, but but the creature broke everything with its tough skin, taking no fatal damage and trusting in its own regeneration until Johann pushed forward entirely, closed the distance, and began attacking with his bare fists, landing blows so powerful that he made the troll spit blood, continuing the sequence of punches until the creature tried to retaliate, but its arm was destroyed in the impact. Without retreating, Johann seized the troll's jaw, landed a brutal knee strike, and made the creature bite its own face before falling into the swamp, while rain fell on the elves watching in terror at his power, and Gustav warned that they needed to flee before the enemies recovered. But Johann climbed atop the troll's chest, grabbed its teeth, and pulled with force until he ripped off the jaw, making the skull split open and sink into the swamp water, then stating that in this manner the creature would not be able to regenerate. Meanwhile, the elves' horses fled alongside Philip, and Mayhem ended up being grabbed by the collar by Karamov, held in place while he asked what was happening, unable to understand the situation, only realizing he was being overpowered and likely being carried along with the horses in the chaos of the forest. Meanwhile, Lohan was in critical condition. Even after the victory, he was severely wounded and already showing signs of weakness, and in a moment of emotional farewell, he asked his master Gustav whether he would have an honorable death and whether he could at least tell his father how he had fought, as if accepting the end with dignity. The atmosphere became heavy and deeply emotional, but Johann looked at the situation and thought it would be an enormous waste to use a potion of that level on an NPC, but even so decided to act, telling Lohan to drink the liquid, saying directly and bluntly for him to drink up and stop complaining, since it would ease the pain, and so Lohan obeyed and took the potion while closing his eyes, with Gustav already believing he was departing in peace, thanking Johann profoundly for what he had done, as if he had saved a brother. But Johann remained silent, simply waiting for the potion to take effect, and then Lohan came back to life, completely recovering his strength as if he had returned from the dead, fully healed, which astonished everyone, and Johann commented coldly and curiously on the sensation of being reborn, explaining that this was the water of blessing, a miraculous elixir from the sage Sudurg, drawn from the Ipael River, and capable of saving anyone as long as they were not truly dead. With that, Gustav was deeply grateful, and even embraced Johann, saying he had saved his brother and calling him one of the most honorable knights he had ever known, and although Johann accepted the praise, he himself thought that in practice it was the elixir that did all the work, while the elves reinforced the narrative that it was he who had saved their comrade, causing Bartok's soldiers to acknowledge him with respect and oaths of loyalty. Johann felt uncomfortable with all that adoration, finding it embarrassing and even excessive, while Gustav declared that from that moment on, they would be as sworn brothers, and that anyone who insulted Johann would have to face his fury, which only left Johann even more awkward, though he replied that it was a great honor, privately thinking he would rather have money than titles. At that point, Goiden came running back to Sudurg's tent to report what had happened, saying that Johann had faced the troll and killed it, and the mage initially replied calmly, saying he had already anticipated something of the sort given the combination of Hyena's firepower and the Ipael River's mystery, even if on a small scale, but Goiden corrected him, saying that he had used neither fire nor magic, merely killing the troll with his bare hands, which left the mage surprised and doubtful. When Valian examined the troll's body, she confirmed the damage was absurd, muscles and ligaments completely torn, bones shattered, organs destroyed, and the jaw ripped off, indicating an abnormal physical strength capable of preventing the creature's regeneration, while still leaving the body relatively preserved, which made everything even more impressive, as Valian explained that trolls were normally reduced to ashes in purification expeditions, making that result even more unbelievable. Faced with this, the title of Troll Slayer was attributed to Johann, along with permission to keep the creature's body, since its skin and blood could be sold for high value, and Johann immediately thought of money and also realized that he had finally received an achievement in that new world, something he had never obtained in his previous life, understanding that there was a system of rewards for deeds in this place. Meanwhile, a new alarm arose with someone shouting about a monster following the horses, but Valian quickly realized that it was probably just Johann's horse bringing the others back, trying to calm the elves by saying not to panic, since it was probably just his little puppy returning with the animals. Then Valian saw the complete form of the giant wolf, the true Dawn's Guide, and immediately realized it had nothing of a little puppy about it, as intended before, because the creature's size and presence made it clear it was something far more dangerous than it had seemed. Later, Johann was explaining the entire situation while interrogating Mayhem, asking if he was just an ordinary traveler, and claiming the wolf would have attacked him without reason, but Mayhem replied that yes, insisting on that version, except Johann didn't believe it for a moment, and said it was an absurd lie, since that region was clearly a battlefield between disguised bandits and Marcel's forces, making it clear that he was not buying that story of innocence. At that moment, Gustav approached to deal with Mayhem and acted in an extremely aggressive manner, driving a knife into his hand and warning him coldly to tell the truth, making it clear he was in a terrible mood and would not hesitate to cut off his fingers one by one if he kept lying. And under pressure, Mayhem ended up revealing the truth, introducing himself as Lieutenant Mayhem, member of the Imperial Army's Special Operations Unit. Hearing Hearing that, Gustav confirmed to Johann that he had been right and that the man was an important piece, practically a gold mine of information, since he was directly linked to Baron Anbeck's command, which completely changed his value as a prisoner. While Johann quickly understood that capturing Mayhem could end that war at once, so he asked Gustav to carry out a surprise attack before Anbeck noticed, using the mobile troops to swiftly finish the expedition, and Gustav accepted immediately, calling Johann an honorable brother and confirming their forces were under joint command. Some hours later, Gustav and the Elven Knights advanced against Anbeck's disguised enemy base, destroying the camp with ease and eliminating the bandits along the way, since they had no chance at all against the coordinated assault, while Jaina, upon sensing the chaos, panicked and even wondered whether the troll had been defeated, but chose not to wait and confirm it, fleeing quickly to save her own life. The attack continued to the main tent, where the knights informed him that there was Johann's present, and he, before entering, recalled everything Anbeck had done, primarily the deaths of innocents and the manipulation of the war, and so entered with resolve, treating it as a final reckoning, calling for Anbeck as if they had finally met again to bring everything to an end. The following morning, the camp was already being reorganized after the victory, and Agante reported that the bandit group had been completely eliminated, so they would begin withdrawal, while Valian said farewell to Johann with respect, saying it had been an honor to fight by his side, and Johann replied simply that the honor was his, also acknowledging the Elven Knight's efforts before going on his way alongside them. Einbeck, now captured, followed along as a prisoner in humiliation, still trying to understand how he remained alive, recalling the poison he believed he had used on Johann, the tears of Nazos, and wondering whether he should have used an even larger dose, but mainly asking himself who those elves were who had interfered with his plans, since none of it made sense within the strategy he had considered perfect. Some months earlier, in a flashback to the Ates family's territory at Gezen Castle, Einbeck had already been treated with contempt by Baron Gezen Ates himself, who had thrown a bottle of wine at him while demanding an explanation about war funds, and Einbeck had tried to manipulate the situation by using a blank parchment and the family seal as a symbol of loyalty to the Empire, promising rewards and a count's title in the name of the old Auvergne house, even knowing that lineage had already fallen decades ago. Even so, Gessen saw through the manipulation, grew furious with the attempted credit theft, and directly threatened Einbeck, but still yielded the seal on the parchment before expelling him, making it clear that if his deeds were stolen again he would cut out Einbeck's tongue and throw it to the dogs, while Einbeck departed maintaining the facade of loyalty to the Empire, even as all of this began to reveal the true nature of his plan. Einbeck then forged that document and handed it to Karamov, who upon analyzing the contents realized that the northern families who had fought for the Emperor would be accused of treason and used as part of a major purge, and commented that it was quite a clever plan, dangerous as it was. Einbeck replied with suspicion, saying he sensed poison in his words, but Karamov retorted that he was merely impressed, even while finding the scheme repugnant, as it was a well-crafted strategy for someone from the Auvergne family, while Einbeck warned him to be careful with what he said, and asserted that he didn't understand what had truly happened in the north, reminding him that it wasn't a matter of feigning nobility, since there had been massacres of women and children, and yet people still spoke of honor. At that moment Karamov lost his patience, seized Einbeck by the throat, and questioned how he dared speak of honor using the family's own name, stating that he had sworn to be the Emperor's sword, and acted only according to sacred orders, where the Emperor's honor stood above all lives on the continent, while Einbeck was someone who survived through dirty tricks and betrayals, completely different from that. After releasing him, Karamov threatened that if he insulted the Majesty's orders again, he would pull out his veins and fill a chalice with them, making clear the level of fanaticism and violence that sustained his loyalty. In the present, Einbeck recalled this with anger and thought that all of it was Karamov's fault, the man who called himself the Emperor's sword but had never truly achieved great deeds, while Einbeck himself believed he would in the end be the only one to win, since he still had cards hidden up his sleeve. Meanwhile, as the troops advanced, Marcel was alerted by guards that the city had been taken by traitorous mercenaries, something completely unexpected, and Einbeck reacted with a sinister laugh, taunting everyone and declaring they hadn't seen that coming, saying that Johann's family had lost the war even after winning the battle. Kummel realized they had been deceived and confirmed that Marcel's rear guard had been broken, while Suderg reflected on fate, as if questioning the Epale River's role, and Gustav assessed the situation, saying that entering the city was dangerous and perhaps it was better to retreat, but Johann refused the idea, saying it was too early to give up and that he would face it directly. Einbeck, for his part, believed everything was under control and declared that Bradil had captured Governor Veliko Trananeni and would bring the surrender document, already planning to demand Johann's body for torture before delivering him to the Empire, and then discarding him once he had no more use, feeding his personal vendetta further. When the gates opened, Einbeck rushed in believing he would see Bradil, but instead came face to face with Veliko Trananeni himself, who stated that everything had been resolved and publicly thanked Johann Eitzes, recognizing his role in the city's defense. The governor explained that all of this had been made possible control thanks to the actions of the mercenaries Kan and Goron, but both declared that they had merely followed Johan's orders, revealing that before their departure he had already foreseen the enemy infiltration and ordered them to protect the governor. It was then revealed that Bradil had already been eliminated in the process, and the mercenaries highlighted that the Oak Company no longer posed any threat, while the governor reinforced that Einbeck should accept his defeat and answer for his crimes, being taken under arrest while he tried to resist and shouted. In the end, the Empire's banner was removed from the location as part of the strategic deception used to fool the enemies, and the operation concluded with confirmation that the bandits and traitors had been completely subdued. The second extermination force's mission was completed, and after that, bards began spreading the story everywhere, composing songs and poems that extolled the deeds of the operation, and especially of Johann, who ended up being placed as the central figure of the entire victory, treated as a hero in virtually every version of the story. Johann and the others were received into the city with applause and petals being thrown, as he paraded on his warhorse Philip, hailed as the Troll Slayer, and treated as an honorable knight, even without showing much emotional reaction beyond a more pragmatic demeanor toward all that adoration. Meanwhile, Kan observed the situation from a distance, and commented that Marcel, which had previously been filled with corpses and chaos, now seemed to be at peace thanks to Johann, while Goran asked whether they should leave without saying goodbye to him, but Kan replied directly that mercenaries only get in the way when they stay in peaceful places, noting that there were no longer children dying because of bandits, and even so insisted they needed to depart to keep earning money, since there was no work in a stabilized city. Later, Johann was having coffee with Eon in a calmer moment after the battle, while already showing practical concern about payment, and Eon then handed over the mission's reward report, along with the spoils division, informing him that the extermination mission had yielded 40 silver coins, plus 30 silver coins and 130 copper coins, as compensation for the Oak mercenaries. Hearing the numbers, Johann was surprised and even let his hand tremble while holding his coffee, realizing this was far more money than he had expected, especially compared to previous missions. And Eon then continued explaining the monster spoil sales, where the troll's skin had fetched 10 gold coins and 60 silver, while parts such as blood, tendons, and special flesh brought in an additional 25 gold coins and 100 silver. With a total value of 35 gold coins, 230 silver, and 130 copper, Johann ended up genuinely satisfied, realizing he had obtained a considerable fortune from that war mission, even beginning to think that perhaps he could finally put an end to his wandering life in that world, since for the first time the risk had been converted into truly significant real wealth. Later, the entire troop was drinking heavily. Johann, Gustav, and all the rest were enjoying the drinks while they could finally relax. Johann even said he had drunk enough, but Gustav simply refilled his goblet and told him to stop being a coward. In fact, it had already been a week since the end of the Battle of Marseille. For the first time in a long while, they were living simple, peaceful days, and it was precisely because of this that Johann began to think. Perhaps it was for this kind of life that he had been fighting until now. Shortly after, Gustav raised his cup and started a toast. First, to his brother Johann, who bravely defeated the troll. Then, to Miss Valian, who saved her fellow soldiers. And also to the great sage Sudurg. Meanwhile, Sudurg himself observed it all in silence, thinking about how much the elves had changed. Then Gustav raised his cup even higher and shouted for everyone's health. While Johann and Sudurg ate quietly together, he kept recounting the entire story of the battle, exaggerating every possible detail. He claimed that the damned troll tried to crush him with an arm the size of a tree trunk. According to him, at the exact moment he was prepared for an honorable death, Johann appeared and began tearing the troll apart. The entire swamp would have been stained with blood, while his friend stood atop the creature's corpse. And then, in Gustav's invented version, Johann supposedly said an incredible line, "Who's the troll killer now?" But in reality, Johann had merely commented that he thought the beast was dead. Even so, the girls loved Gustav's exaggerated story. After that, Sudurg said that now Johann needed to be honest with him. After all, what he had done this time was extraordinary. That incident would not only affect Marcel, but the entire empire. So he asked what Johann truly desired: wealth, glory, power. But Johann replied that he only wanted to live peacefully in Marcel, and in truth, he was already living exactly that. The mage simply laughed and said that seemed strange coming from someone who had killed a troll with his bare hands. Johann replied that he had nearly died in that fight. After that, Sudurg mentioned the mystery of the Apile River. He had given that to Johann, but it ended up being used on a completely random person. So he asked if Johann really thought the elixir had been given to be used that way. When he learned that one of the elves had been saved with the elixir, he had sincerely thought it would have been less of a waste to give it to a pig to drink. But Johann replied that he couldn't simply let someone die in front of him. If there was a way to save them, then he had to save them. Besides, he also figured that saving those guys would earn him some credit with the locals. In the end, Sudurg simply called him an insolent brat, but admitted he was glad he had come back safely. Even so, one thing still bothered the old sage. When he saw that boy reflected in the waters of the Ipale River for the first time, he had been certain of something. anything. Johannites would never be able to settle in Marseille. The prophecies of the Epale River never failed. Perhaps Johann had changed his own destiny by his own strength. Or perhaps not. Then Johann picked up the empty vial and asked, without any shame, that since the elixir had been used for a good cause, couldn't he receive just a little more? Suitor replied that he still didn't think it had been used for something quite that good. Even so, he took the empty vial and said Johann could come by his room later to pick up more. But before that, he asked if they shouldn't go rescue the manager Eon. It was then that Johann noticed the poor woman being carried around by the completely drunk elves. In that moment, he could only think that even elves, when they drink too much, become animals. So he asked the elves if he might have a dance with Miss Eon. The elves agreed immediately and even started teasing him, saying they hadn't imagined she was his type of woman. Shortly after, the two began dancing in the hall. At first, they only pretended to follow the music while they talked. She thanked him for saving her life and said she hoped it wouldn't cause any misunderstanding because of it. But Johann replied that she didn't need to think about that now. She just needed to follow the rhythm. Then he pulled her into a real dance and mentioned that a song ends quickly. After that, they could simply slip away naturally. But at that moment, the manager Ion didn't want things to end with just one dance. She drew even closer to him and said they could dance for real. Johann had no idea how long this peaceful life would last. In truth, no one knew. But for now at least, he decided to simply let life follow its own rhythm and enjoy it while he could. Just live going with the flow. The next morning, Johann woke up wrecked by a hangover, covered in scratches and bite marks all over his body. The situation seemed far too suspicious. He didn't even remember how much he had drunk, and when he noticed several fur balls scattered across the bed, he began to wonder what the hell had happened the night before. He truly didn't remember a thing. When he reached the desk in his room, he found a vial of holy water alongside a letter left by Sudarg. In the letter, the sage wrote that the secret of the Epile River, kept for thousands of years, was inside that bottle, so it would be best to use it wisely this time. He also mentioned that since Johann seemed busy having an intense moment the previous night, he had simply decided to leave the letter there, and he also wrote that if he remembered the game of the gods, he should return to the Epale River. He would always be welcome there. It was then that Johann began to vaguely recall what had happened the night before. It seemed he had spent the entire night playing around. Since he was still suffering from the drink, he decided to take a small sip of the holy water, and the hangover disappeared completely. But when he looked out the window, he noticed something strange. Black smoke was rising into the sky, and fire was consuming all of Marseille. Everywhere, the citizens wore desperate expressions. Then, when he reached the main square of the city, Johann found Anbeck, and with him were the other traitors, trapped inside cages and completely drenched in oil. Governor Villako Trananani then addressed the citizens of Marseille and the city's visitors. He said he was dishonored and deeply disappointed in himself. He offered his sincere apologies for the administrative negligence of Marseille's government. According to him, a shadow of chaos had temporarily fallen over the city. It had been revealed that certain nobles, acting under the emperor's orders, had committed treason. They had attempted to seize properties, destroy the city's security, and even take complete control of Marseille, and that was completely unacceptable. For that reason, Villako Trananani promised before everyone that he would present a formal protest to the emperor. Furthermore, he declared that traitors were still hiding somewhere in the city. Some of them had not yet been captured, so he issued a clear warning. Any remaining traitors would have 3 days to leave Marseille. Should they remain after that deadline, they would suffer the exact same fate as those standing before the people now. Shortly after, Villako Trananani lit a torch and cast the flames onto the trail of oil spread across the ground. The fire raced quickly until it reached the cages where Anbeck and the other imprisoned traitors were held. In desperation, Anbeck began to beg for mercy. He tried to escape, tried to flee the flames, but ended up being completely consumed by the fire. And with him, his memories, his ambitions, and his entire life began to vanish in vain. In his final moments, he remembered his mother, the happy times he had lived by her side. He wanted to return to that time, but life was far too fleeting. As the traitors' screams echoed through the square, Villako Trananani issued one more warning to the public. He said that if any traitor was present there, that person needed to remember one thing. For the governor of Marseille, Villako Trananani, both favors and grudges would always be properly repaid. Shortly after, one of the governor's subordinates approached Johann and informed him that Villako Trananani wished to speak with him privately. As he walked to the governor's office, Johann wondered what that man's true intentions were. When he arrived, Villako Trananani sincerely thanked him for his efforts during the Battle of Marseille. His demeanor was completely different from their previous conversation. This time, the governor had even prepared an extremely high-quality whiskey and offered him a glass. Even carrying terrible memories involving alcohol, Johann knew he simply couldn't refuse, so he accepted at least the first glass. While pouring the drink, Villako asked how his stay in Marseille was going. Johann replied replied that he had no complaints. The governor then remarked that it was probably because Marcel was far more peaceful than before, but he quickly changed the subject entirely. He said that the situation on the front lines was extremely important. Confused, Johann asked which front lines he was talking about, and then came the answer. The war that was about to begin between Marcel and the emperor. Barely believing what he heard, Johann asked if he was really talking about war. But Vilico continued as if it were inevitable. He said that Johann's strategy and strength were unmatched. Moreover, he possessed strategic thinking worthy of a commander and a charisma capable of influencing anyone. For that reason, he needed to make full use of those abilities. So he asked if it wasn't precisely for his own ambition that he had come to Marcel, and he declared that he wanted to make Johann the vanguard of the war to come. But Johann replied honestly that he had chosen a stable, simple life over battles. He had no intention of leading an army against the emperor. Only, Vilico lost his patience. He told him to stop talking nonsense, and began to explain Marcel's reality. The city was the largest on the continent, a place where pro-emperor and anti-emperor factions waged endless conflicts for their own interests. But the emperor's ambition had completely shattered that balance. Furthermore, countless massacres had already taken place in the north. One of them, in fact, in the territory of the whites. As long as the emperor lived, the peace Johann spoke of would never exist. So he asked if now Johann finally understood why they needed to prepare for war. Johann remained silent while Vilico poured himself more whiskey and downed the entire glass at once. The governor then said that when people start dying, money stops mattering. Perhaps he himself could never become emperor, but he had enough power to create one. Then he looked directly at Johann and told him to follow him, because he would make him an emperor. Later, everyone was already preparing weapons, luggage, and provisions. Meanwhile, Johann was extremely pleased with his new armor. The pauldron had cost 3.5 gold coins, the bracer as well. The elbow guard cost 1 more coin, while the gauntlet came to another 3. In total, he had spent 11 gold coins on custom-made equipment, and he sincerely hoped that expense had been worth it. It was then that Goiden approached and informed him that everyone was ready to depart. As always, Johann mounted his enormous warhorse, Philip. Before leaving Marcel, he paid his respects to Vilico. Then he set out with the troops. Along the way, Goiden asked where exactly they were going with so many soldiers. Were they marching off to war? Hearing that, Johann remembered the conversation he had with Vilico. He remembered the governor saying he would make him an emperor, but he had already made his answer clear. He had no desire to become an emperor. At that point, Vilico had asked why. After all, it was an opportunity to gain wealth, glory, and direct support from Marcel. But Johann replied that he had learned the hard way, from a very young age, that money was necessary to survive in this world. But observing Vilico, he had come to realize something else. A person couldn't live by money alone. Even so, Vilico had replied that the current empire had already plunged into chaos, impossible to contain. It was only a matter of time before a great war began. Even if he fled the battlefield, in the end it would be impossible to avoid the fight. Because of that, he asked how Johann intended to live in such a chaotic time. So Johann replied to Goiden that he was heading toward a place full of romance and adventure. His plan to settle in Marcel had been destroyed by Vilico, but he decided to press on regardless. Now, he would keep traveling toward a world full of adventures and romance. Meanwhile, far from there, in the territory of Count Jaffrin, inside Bosom Castle, they were talking about none other than him, about the knight who killed a troll in Marcel, Johann Eitz. Count Jaffrin himself remarked that word of Johann's feat had already spread quite far. According to him, the boy might be nothing more than an arrogant young man full of boasts, or someone who truly possessed that absurd level of power, and he intended to find out the moment he saw that boy's face. 5 days after leaving Marcel, Johann was already completely covered in sweat and dust. Because of this, insects had started appearing around him constantly, while chewing a hard piece of bread that felt like a rock. He even thought it could easily be used as a weapon. All of this was familiar to him. The real problem was the strong, penetrating smell of the furry animals around him. This was because he was traveling alongside some beast warrior mercenaries, and no matter how hard he tried, Johann simply couldn't get used to their smell, because it wasn't a human smell. Even through the hardship, he kept enduring the journey. At that moment, he had no other choice but to shake off the dust and press forward, and with him he carried a letter bearing the official seal of Marcel. One day before their departure, Ion had asked if he was still looking for mercenaries. According to her, the timing was perfect, because Aquitana was just about to present a group to him. When the manager appeared, Johann finally saw the team of fierce individuals he had been expecting. Only, among them, some seemed intense and brutal even by mercenary standards. The manager then asked them to introduce themselves first. The hyena girl introduced herself as Dyke, saying she was a mercenary of Aquitana and commander of Squad 10. Then came the weasel woman. Her name was Shuka, and before she even continued, she warned everyone not to laugh at her name. Only that ended up making the situation even more awkward, because she kept insisting on it several times, asking what exactly the problem was with the name Shuka. Shortly after, Johann also introduced himself, and explained that he intended to hire them that very day. He asked to counter down on them from that point forward. The mercenaries then began whispering among themselves, surprised. They asked if he wasn't the very knight from the rumors who had killed a troll. They found it incredible, but at the same time didn't understand why someone so strong would need to hire mercenaries. So Johann explained that in remote regions, it was common to encounter bandits, and when that happened, numbers always gave an advantage in combat. After hearing that, they replied that they were ready to accompany him. And so, Johann officially closed his mercenary contract with Aquitania. As the lead mercenaries began mobilizing their groups, the manager remarked that he was really leaving Marcel the next day. She said it was a shame, because now that they were starting to grow closer, he was already leaving. Right after, she decided to give him a gift. Drawing quite close, she stood on her tiptoes to place a necklace around his neck. It was the emblem of the troll killer, a gift from Aquitania. After that, she asked what his destination would be. Johann grew a little nervous at the question, and she quickly noticed that he had decided to travel without a specific destination. Even so, she said that perhaps that was even better. After all, a letter had just arrived for him. According to her, perhaps it was best to set off to find the person who was looking for him. At that moment, Goiden asked what that paper was that Johann was carrying. So Johann replied that he hadn't shown it to anyone yet. He explained it was a letter received while still in Marcel, saying that someone wanted to meet him after hearing about the troll he had killed. Hearing that, Goiden asked if that was a letter from Count Jaffrin. Johann was surprised by the reaction and asked if he was famous. Goiden replied that he was very famous, especially in the southern territories. According to him, Count Jaffrin had earned great merit during campaigns to subjugate monsters. Like Johann, he had also killed trolls in the past and had built all of his fame and wealth from that. Furthermore, Goiden explained that Jaffrin was the only one in the region capable of granting a knighthood ceremony. The knighthood ceremony was a ritual where someone who already held the title would formally recognize another person and elevate them officially to the status of knight. It functioned both as a guarantee and as a kind of sponsorship. It gave the individual a rapid path to advancement, along with solid backing and immediate recognition. When he heard the explanation, Johann realized that Count Jaffrin was essentially trying to hand him an enormous promotion. It was something far more significant than he had imagined at first. If he managed his image carefully, he might actually receive the knighthood ceremony, and if that happened, he would gain both money and an official title. As they continued traveling, Dyke reported that there was a checkpoint up ahead. The problem was that she could also smell a very strong scent of blood coming from there. Hearing that, Johann immediately issued orders to the group. Only those responsible for protecting the carriage and Goiden would remain in the rear. Everyone else was to maintain maximum vigilance. When they finally drew close to the location, it was clear that the soldiers there had already intended to kill and rob them from the start. Even so, the guard in charge stopped them first, saying they would conduct an inspection and demanding identification. So Johann introduced himself and asked what exactly they were doing there. The guard replied by first asking if he was a knight. Then he claimed they were simply carrying out a routine inspection. Only, while that was happening, the beast women were already noticing suspicious movements hidden in the bushes around the road. The first guard kept talking, saying they had merely received orders to control that area. But since Johann was a knight, perhaps everything could be resolved if he just handed over a little gift. But Johann calmly replied that he was a guest of Count Jaffrin. He then asked what exactly the situation was there. He also demanded to know who they were and under what authority they were conducting these inspections. According to him, without clear information, he had no intention of cooperating. It was at that moment that the ambush began. Archers hidden in the bushes suddenly appeared, aiming their crossbows at the group. The first guard lost his patience and told Johann to shut up and hand over the money, calling him a worthless knight while trying to humiliate him in front of his own men. Then he asked about his family, saying that if he had enough money, they might spare his life. After all, as he himself had said before, this was just an inspection, so there was no need to take it personally. But Johann replied coldly that if they truly wanted to shed blood, he wouldn't stop them. Even so, for the sake of their subordinates, it might be better to avoid a massacre. The guard mocked him, saying Johann seemed like a dog that wouldn't let go of the bone until the very end. He also asked if he really thought they were inexperienced, as if they had never faced important knights before. Shortly after, all the archers fired their crossbows at once. But before the hail of bolts could strike the group, Johann called for Karamav. The creature advanced violently across the field, tearing apart all the enemies hidden among the bushes before they even understood what was happening. At the same time, Dyke was the first to launch a direct attack. With a brutal blow of her spiked flail, she completely crushed the first guard's skull. Then Shuka advanced right behind, using her dual dagger techniques to swiftly cut the throats of the other enemies. After that, Dyke shouted to the beastmen that it was time to hunt, and then the mercenaries charged the enemies without hesitation, tearing them all apart. While watching it all, Johann ended up remembering when he had been pursued by the Arctier wolves. Back then, the monsters attacked in groups all day long without letting up. While desperately fleeing the encirclement, he had only survived by hiding inside a caravan. It was at that moment in the past that Johann had realized he could never break through that kind of blockade alone. But now the situation was different. Now he had allies. And because Because of that, in just 30 minutes, everything was settled. With a single order from him, the entire ambush had been destroyed. After the battle, Johann praised the group's work, saying everyone had done very well. Meanwhile, the Beastman mercenaries began looting the bodies scattered on the ground. But Dike and Shuka soon discovered where that putrid smell of blood was coming from. They were the bodies of citizens from that place, tossed and piled up like garbage. Among them, a knight who was barely alive answered Johann's question about who those people were. Apparently, they were deserters. They had previously been attacking Count Jaffrin's bosom castle, but the situation had suddenly changed and everything had spun out of control, so they ended up fleeing from there. Johann was puzzled and asked what he meant by attacking the Count's castle. The knight was confused and asked if he really didn't know. Count Jaffrin was at war at that very moment, so Johann asked exactly who he was fighting. The knight replied that it was deserters from the Abner family, but Johann had never heard of that place, so he asked for more details. The guard explained that the Abner family had surrounded the Jaffrin castle with an enormous force, but because of a terrible commander, the soldiers' morale had collapsed completely, and many had died in droves. Moreover, supplies had been cut off, hunger had begun to spread, and many soldiers, exhausted from enduring it all, had deserted just like them. After that, they had taken to plundering people to survive. Before dying, the man asked the gods to forgive him. When he finally died, Johann closed his eyes and remarked that the man should ask forgiveness, not from the gods, but from the people he had killed. Later, at a camp along the way, Goiden asked what they would do from there. To reach Jaffrin, they would need to cross an entire battlefield, so he also questioned whether the Count had already invited Johann, knowing that this war was happening. Johann realized that did make sense. If he participated in the war and achieved great feats, there was a strong chance he would receive the knighthood ceremony from the Jaffrins. The problem was that he didn't even know if he could get inside the castle first. In his mind, what mattered most was finding Count Jaffrin before deciding anything about war or reward. Only the battlefield was completely blocking the way. While gazing at the crackling campfire in the night, Johann ended up recalling Villico's words. Even if he tried to flee the battlefields, he would never be able to escape war. There were conflicts everywhere, no matter where he went. Perhaps Villico had truly been right. At that moment, Dike reported that an enormous group of merchants was passing nearby. Johann replied to let them pass, but quickly noticed the group was massive. From a higher vantage point, he could see dozens and dozens of caravans crossing the road. The line was so long that no one could see the end of it. Even so, Johann thought that was natural, since a war had started. They were probably heading to Jaffrin or to Abner. He then recalled that in the past, he had managed to cross dangerous territories by joining the merchants alongside the Eldons, so perhaps he could do the same now and enter the Jaffrin castle without major problems. Shortly after, Johann instructed Dike and Shuka to watch the rear while he approached the caravans, but as soon as they drew near, the convoy's knights reacted with considerable hostility. They saw no crest or banner accompanying the group, and therefore didn't believe Johann was truly a knight. Shuka and Dike were instantly furious and started asking if those men wanted to die talking like that. But before the situation worsened, the merchant Doris appeared and told everyone to calm down. He asked if those knights were blind, because Johann's crest was famous. According to him, this man was a troll killer. He then apologized for the rudeness, explaining that the knights under his command were too ignorant to recognize him. Then he asked if he was Lord Johann. He then introduced himself as Doris, of the Argon Trading Company, and said he would like to offer a small banquet as an apology. Later, already at Doris's camp, everyone had gathered to eat together. The mercenaries were drinking and chatting among themselves, while Doris and Johann remained in the main tent. Inside the tent there was a dance with extremely beautiful women, along with a banquet that was supposed to be simple but was in fact filled with fine food. Johann thanked him for the invitation, and felt relieved to notice there apparently was no poison in the food. Even so, he figured it wouldn't be a problem, since he still had holy water in case something went wrong. As the conversation progressed, he planned to ask Doris where the caravan was headed. Whatever the destination, building a good relationship at that moment would be extremely useful. So Doris asked if it was true that Johann had defeated a troll with his bare hands. But before anyone could answer, another voice suddenly appeared, asking what they had there. It was Can. He asked if Johann still remembered him. Johann replied that of course he did, calling him a friend, and saying he was sad he hadn't been able to say goodbye before. Can was also glad to see him again. Doris then asked if the two already knew each other. Johann replied that yes, they did. They had fought together in battle before. He even offered Can another drink. But even drunk, the mercenary could still speak seriously when he wanted, so he asked Johann if he still remembered Gamson, that boy who talked too much and ended up having his throat cut. Then Can told Johann that this Doris was someone far more noble than Lord Gamson. According to him, he swore that Doris would treat Johann far better than his former employer. He would even give him exceptional treatment. Johann understood perfectly the hidden message behind that and replied yes, of course. Doris did seem far more noble than Gamson. He even remarked that Can's loyalty to his employer was impressive. As thanks, Johann handed him 2 gold coins. Can was startled, thinking that was far too much money. After that, Johann said he would like to have a more candid conversation with Doris. After all, he was such a noble person, wasn't he? So he asked if Can could excuse them. The mercenary went back to pretending he was drunk and replied, of course, wishing the two a great conversation. As soon as he stepped out of the tent, however, he stopped acting immediately. Then Johan remarked that he never imagined Can would speak so highly of someone in that way. He said Doris truly seemed to have a very noble character. The merchant replied, laughing, that he was just a simple, ordinary human. It was then that Johan said that in that case, it would only be fair to return the gesture. He said he would also share an extremely valuable piece of information with him. Shortly after, he leaned close to the merchant's ear and revealed that Gamson was in fact a traitorous son of a bitch. The moment he heard that, Doris desperately tried to call the guards, but Johan seized him by the neck in a brutal chokehold. The girls began screaming in desperation. The banquet guests fell into a panic and chaos overtook the tent. Meanwhile, Doris was already nearly foaming at the mouth when a knight finally appeared. It was his personal bodyguard, but the man had barely stepped in before taking a punch to the head, crumpling to the ground with a massive lump. Then another knight appeared, the second commander of the division, and he took a beating just the same without managing to react properly. Then the third commander entered, and he got hit the same way. While all of that was happening, Doris was already turning purple, suffocating and trying to understand how the situation had spiraled so completely out of control. 1 week earlier, the Argon Trading Company had held a meeting at a camp. On that occasion, they asked what Doris wanted to present, since he was the one who had called all the merchants together for that gathering. Some even remarked that it seemed like he had made an enormous profit. Doris replied that no one should be so hasty, and asked them to hear his proposal first. According to him, he had an extremely tempting idea. Until that point, they had been supporting House Abner by providing supplies. So one of the merchants asked if he was talking about war supplies, and questioned whether they were really going to deal with Abner in the middle of a crisis. Doris replied that the man's information was far too outdated. He said no one survived as a merchant being so behind the times, so he explained that at that moment, Houses Abner and Jaffrin were at war. Bosom Castle was completely surrounded, and the commander of Abner's forces was Sir Stefan, the youngest young master of the family. Their plan would be to sell war materials directly to Sir Stefan, but the other merchants thought that was madness. According to them, Stefan was a complete idiot, a man far too stupid to do serious business. Doris, however, replied that was exactly why they should negotiate with him. After all, they could take advantage of his stupidity without difficulty. According to the merchant, the boy wouldn't even have the intelligence to notice he was being deceived. Then they asked what exactly his plan was. Doris explained that Stefan's mother, the Countess, was still alive. Therefore, they could negotiate with both the young master and her at the same time, and since the Countess was far wealthier, they could squeeze out up to double the money. Another merchant said that Doris had completely lost his mind. After all, if that were considered an insult, they would all lose their heads. But Doris told everyone to shut up and keep listening. He explained that the Countess had an extremely talented daughter named Lady Ulrike, considered the next head of House Abner. They said she was beautiful, intelligent, and incredibly powerful. Furthermore, apparently she didn't have a good relationship with her own mother. This was because the Countess always favored only her own useless son. According to Doris, there was no logical reason to choose Stefan as heir when Ulrike was clearly far more competent. So he concluded that the Countess was probably trying to accumulate military achievements in her son's name to officially make him the family's next successor. The other merchants gradually began to agree. In practice, they would be supplying Stefan, but whoever would officially pay for everything was the Countess herself. And for the sake of House Abner's honor, she would agree to pay any price. After hearing everything, the merchants finally grew excited about the plan. So Doris announced that now that everyone understood the situation, they would head straight for Abner. But some days later, on the road, he happened to encounter Johan carrying the troll killer emblem. Doris already knew that Johan had been invited by the Jaffrins, and since he was heading precisely to Abner, he saw there a perfect opportunity. If he captured Johan and handed him over as a hostage to House Abner, he would earn an enormous profit and also help secure their victory. After completely destroying the tent and beating up everyone who appeared, Johan had heard the whole story. Then, with Doris kneeling before him, he asked if that was really the man's great plan. In Johan's view, the whole thing was simply ridiculous. Doris quickly replied that it all must have been a huge misunderstanding. According to him, they were simply trying to offer appropriate hospitality to Lord Johan and had no other intention whatsoever. But Johan asked Can and Goran to repeat one more time what they had overheard. So Goran confirmed without hesitation that Doris's orders were to capture Johan, kidnap him, and hand him over to House Abner. In addition, they also had orders to attack and kill the rest of his group. Doris was desperate and asked how they dared betray him like that, since they had been paid precisely to do just that. Then Johan pointed out that he had essentially just confessed everything himself. It was at that moment he realized that those people had been working on Abner's side all along. Johan then pressed further on Doris, saying that the merchant had completely dishonored the laws of hospitality. Furthermore, he had gravely insulted a noble. Then he asked if he knew what the punishment was for insulting a knight. In Doris's mind, horrible images began to surface. He was already imagining being tortured tortured, having his eyes gouged out, his tongue cut off, and his nose mutilated. Desperate, he begged Johann to spare his life. So Johann asked if, should he be spared, he would obey any order given from that point forward. Meanwhile, Goran asked what the next step would be. If they went to the Jaffrin castle alongside that caravan, they would probably be treated as Abner allies and stopped from entering. And even if they managed to sneak in disguised among the merchants, they still wouldn't be able to make direct contact with Count Jaffrin. A heavy silence fell for a few moments. Then Johann finally smiled and said he had just thought of a method. The next day, as soon as the sun rose, they would advance directly against the troops surrounding Jaffrin. Goran was alarmed and asked if he really intended to confront Abner's forces that way. In his mind, that was practically walking straight into the lion's mouth. Even without anyone fully understanding Johann's true intentions, the group continued their journey alongside Doris's merchants. 3 days later, they finally arrived at the front lines of Abner's army. Meanwhile, inside the enemy army's main tent, Commander Stefan Abner was exploding with rage upon learning that 10 soldiers had deserted in just one night. He considered it unacceptable and ordered all squad leaders to be brought to him immediately. But one of the generals tried to warn him that the soldiers' morale was already extremely low. Many men had deserted up to that point, and if they started punishing the leaders, the situation would only deteriorate further. Stefan replied that it was precisely for that reason he wanted to launch a swift attack once and for all, before the situation spiraled completely out of control. But the general immediately pushed back, saying that attacking a fortress without proper preparation was pure foolishness. Moreover, the commander wasn't even considering the proper use of siege weapons. Stefan, irritated, began acting arrogantly and asked why the general spoke in such a pompous manner. Then he questioned whether he was perhaps a son of House Abner, to act as if he were in charge of everything. The general was overcome with fury. In his view, that incompetent piece of garbage should never have been given command of the army. While complaining about the stress caused by the situation, Stefan had no idea that all of this had started a few days earlier, when Johann, on the road to Jaffrin, had encountered a group of bandit knights. They were precisely deserters from Abner's own army. House Abner had assembled an enormous force to destroy Count Jaffrin's bosom castle once and for all. But the army's commander was a complete idiot. With no hope of victory and no confidence in the leadership, many soldiers had abandoned the camp, deserted, and ended up becoming bandits. Later, every single one of them was completely massacred by Johann's group. It was then that a soldier entered the commander's tent to report that an enormous quantity of supplies had just arrived. Several merchants had appeared at the front lines. Stefan was immediately satisfied and said he would buy all the supplies to prevent anything from reaching the Jaffrins. And of course, the money would all come straight out of his own mother's pocket. The general could only think, irritated, that that boy really believed money appeared out of thin air. Shortly after, another soldier reported that a knight by the name of Johann Eitz was requesting an audience with the commander. Stefan replied that he had never heard of that family. Later, Johann entered the tent, presenting the letter he carried and formally identifying himself as a guest of Count Jaffrin. The commander then asked if the merchant beside him was his traveling companion. Doris stayed completely silent while Johann confirmed that yes, he was. Then he displayed the passage documents bearing the official seal of House Abner. Stefan then asked if that meant he had authorization from the Abner side. It was then that Johann calmly revealed that the merchant beside him had attempted to kidnap him and hand him over as a hostage to House Abner itself. But before that happened, he had resolved the situation himself and taken possession of all the caravan's supplies. Hearing that, the general immediately realized the situation was extremely dangerous. In his mind, Stefan wouldn't have the intelligence to handle this properly. Even so, the commander ended up saying something that positively surprised the general. This was because the general himself had been discreetly whispering the correct response to him. Stefan declared that, since they were at war, they would not allow those supplies to reach the enemy. So Johann calmly replied that they could simply purchase the entire cargo at a fair price. After all, he would have no problem arriving at Count Jaffrin's castle empty-handed. Stefan replied that in that case, the matter could be easily resolved, but the general quickly reminded him that the army was practically out of money at that moment, so the commander changed his stance completely and rejected the proposal. He said he didn't even know if the story about the merchant trying to kidnap Johann was true. Then he asked how exactly he intended to prove that. Johann simply looked at Doris and told him to step forward, and the merchant obeyed immediately and confirmed that he had truly attempted to do all of that. Only, Stefan told him to stop lying and immediately ordered the merchant to be arrested. To him, it was obvious that the man was being threatened into giving that testimony. Furthermore, he declared he had never heard of any knight named Eitz. Even so, since the war was an urgent situation, he decided he would take both the merchant and all the supplies, leaving those supposed lies to be dealt with later. The general felt a little more relieved hearing that, but then Johann asked if that meant Stefan was daring to insult his honor as a knight. Immediately, Stefan clearly felt the pressure caused by Johann's presence, but still rose furiously, drawing his sword and asking how he dared speak like that. According to him, Johann should never have opened his mouth without his permission. After that, he threatened to gouge out his his eyes for staring directly at someone of his station. But Johann showed no fear whatsoever. Then, suddenly, the entire tent began to shake. Screams echoed from outside, and in that instant, Johann realized that everything was happening exactly as he had planned. Calmly, he warned Stefan that those words would carry great consequences from that point forward. The general immediately ordered all guards to deal with him. Several soldiers tried to advance and stop Johann, but it was useless. The man seemed like a wall, a true beast on the battlefield. From the very beginning, he had already known that Stefan was arrogant, like a typical young noble master, so he understood exactly how to provoke someone of that type, and as expected, it had been extremely easy. The perfect justification for the attack had already been created, so Johann simply retaliated in self-defense. With a single brutal move, he hurled both the general and the merchant Doris out of the tent. The general then screamed for the guards to protect Stefan at any cost, but it was already too late. When they realized what had happened, Stefan himself was already on his knees, completely subdued before Johann. The soldiers couldn't advance because the young noble was being used as a hostage. Even trembling, Stefan still asked if he really intended to kill him there. Johann replied coldly that someone who draws their sword first needs to be prepared to stake their own life. It was at that moment that the soldiers finally recognized who he was, the legendary troll killer. Surprised, Stefan asked if he really was the troll killer of Marcel. One of the soldiers then showed respect for Johann's achievements and asked him to lower his sword, but the knight simply retorted by asking who would restore his honor after being insulted in that manner. Then Johann raised his sword once more, while Stefan, desperate, told his men not to provoke that monster any further. Johann then calmly explained the entire situation. He said that Stefan had not only attempted to steal his precious supplies, but had also insulted his honor as a knight by calling him a liar. And worse still, he had been the first to draw his sword, which under the knight's code was the equivalent of challenging someone to a duel. Therefore, according to him, it would even be shameful to refuse that duel and not fight for his own life. But at that moment, all of Stefan's arrogance had vanished. Desperate, he began to beg for forgiveness, saying it was all his fault and pleading to be spared. The general observed it all, completely furious. In his mind, Stefan was an idiot. After all, by apologizing that way, he was practically admitting before everyone that he had truly been wrong. So Johann asked if he would accept any condition in exchange for his life. Without thinking twice, Stefan answered yes, repeating several times that it was all his fault. After that, Johann looked at everyone inside the tent and asked if they had heard that answer very clearly. Since he had won the duel, he now had the right to make a demand. And his demand was simple. He would take Stefan with him as a prisoner. Alarmed, Stefan asked if he had lost his mind and if he really intended to take him prisoner. Then he even tried to threaten him, asking if he wasn't afraid of House Abner. But Johann replied that he was simply accepting his proposal. After all, Stefan himself had said he would accept anything to survive, so he asked if he was already going back on his own word. With no way out, Stefan looked desperately at the general and the soldiers, hoping someone would do something. The general wanted to draw his sword at that instant, but knew he couldn't. In the end, he simply asked Stefan to cooperate, because there was no possible way to resolve that situation by force. Several hours later, at the main gates of Bosom Castle, the guards spotted Johann approaching calmly. The dwarves who were standing guard froze completely when they realized that Stefan Abner, commander of House Abner's forces, had been captured by the knight, and it really was him, completely bound, being brought as a prisoner before everyone. In that instant, the dwarves finally understood that Johann was no traitor, no enemy. On the contrary, he had practically ended the war single-handedly by capturing the enemy commander. Unable to believe what they were seeing, they immediately opened the castle gates. Meanwhile, one of the dwarves couldn't hide his astonishment and wondered who this monstrous knight was, capable of ending an entire war on his own. Inside the castle, the news spread rapidly. Everyone asked if it was true that Stefan had really been captured, and wanted to know who the knight was who had defeated that arrogant commander. Hearing so many insults directed at himself and so much praise for Johann, Stefan was furious. Screaming with rage, he threatened everyone around him and reminded them he was the son of the powerful House Abner. After that, he demanded that his bindings be removed immediately, and indeed, they ended up untying him. But Johann simply watched it all calmly and asked why he was still so confident, given that he was now nothing but a prisoner. Later, the knight finally met personally with Jaffrin, the count and lord of Bosom Castle, and the very person who had invited Johann there. When Jaffrin spoke to Stefan, the young man tried to call him uncle, but the count immediately cut him off and told him not to address him that way in public. Here, he should address him by his proper title. So Stefan corrected himself and greeted Count Jaffrin, remarking that it had been quite a while since they last met. But the count didn't seem even slightly pleased to see him. On the contrary, he asked if he wasn't the same man who had been attacking Bosom Castle not long ago. He then mocked the situation, saying it was unbelievable to see someone so arrogant now appear as a prisoner in such a pathetic state. Even so, Jaffrin declared that, considering the relationship between the two families, Bosom Castle would treat Stefan as a guest and not as an enemy. Stefan had already started thanking him for his excellency's generosity, but Count Jaffrin immediately interrupted. He explained that even though he would be be treated with respect inside the castle, he was still a prisoner of war since he had been captured by Mr. Eights. Because of that, he would have to serve Johann until his situation was resolved. But Stefan didn't accept that easily. Outraged, he reminded them that he was a member of House Abner and said he could not be treated that way by someone from an inferior family. At that moment, Frieren lost his patience. He asked what exactly Stefan expected him to do: violate the customs of war and steal the spoils earned by an honorable knight. Calling the nephew a stupid boy, the Count added that he couldn't bring so much shame to House Abner and told him to start acting like a true noble. After being scolded in front of everyone, Stefan completely lowered his head. Then he replied that he understood, accidentally calling the Count uncle by impulse first, but quickly correcting himself and asking Count Jaffrin's pardon. In that moment, Johann had ended up acquiring something extremely valuable for any knight in times of war: a noble ransom. It was an old medieval custom where a captured noble came to be considered the personal property of the knight who defeated them. To recover their freedom, the family needed to pay an enormous sum as ransom. In practice, Stefan was now essentially an official hostage of Johann. Shortly after, the young noble was escorted away nearly in tears, while Jaffrin finally turned his attention back to Johann. With a curious expression, he remarked that he was finally meeting in person the famous troll killer of Marseille, so Johann replied politely that it was an honor to meet him. Now it was his turn to make a good impression, and he had apparently succeeded. Jaffrin then suggested they continue talking while walking through the castle, so he could better introduce his home. Later, already at the top of a great tower, Jaffrin asked directly if Johann knew why he had been called to Bosom Castle. Johann replied that at first he had thought the Count wanted his help to end the war, but apparently that wasn't it. After all, that fortress seemed practically impossible to conquer. The walls were solid, the soldiers disciplined, and the knights extremely well trained. Hearing that, Jaffrin replied that if that was true, then that war had never really been a great problem for him. In reality, he had invited Johann purely out of curiosity. Then he revealed something unexpected. When he was younger, he too had killed a troll. However, due to his own recklessness, he had lost a very precious knight during the battle. That memory was still extremely painful for him. In that instant, Johann realized the Count was telling the truth. The armor he wore on his chest clearly appeared to be made of troll leather. After that, Jaffrin confessed that when he heard the rumors about a man who had defeated a troll using nothing but his fists, he believed it was a lie. In fact, he had wanted to find that knight in person just to teach him a lesson. Hearing that, Johann grew worried immediately. For a moment, he thought he might have gotten himself into serious trouble, but then Jaffrin stared at him for a few seconds, while the surrounding soldiers watched in silence. Then, suddenly, he gave Johann a strong, friendly slap on the shoulder and burst out laughing. The Count remarked that he truly did seem to be as powerful as they said. After all, he had not only captured a hostile merchant who had been manipulating the war's supplies, but had also defeated and captured the enemy commander, Stefan. Furthermore, the mere fact that he had managed to reach the castle was already bringing that war closer to its end. Hearing that, Johann humbly replied that he was being praised too much. While inside, he felt an enormous sense of relief. Taking advantage of the good mood, he decided to try and make an even better impression. So he offered the merchant Doris as a gift to the Count, as a token of respect. But Jaffrin's reaction was immediate. Indignant, he asked how Johann could even think he would accept taking away another man's rightfully earned honor. He then declared that he would buy the entire caravan at an extremely generous price, and officially recognize all of Johann's achievements. After that, he also told the knight to pay attention to what he was hearing, because he would never accept such a gift. Instead, he said he would arrange the finest possible treatment for him inside the castle. A great banquet, a luxurious room, and every comfort available. While he was there, he would be treated like a king, so that he could rest both body and mind after so many impressive feats. Then he asked once more if he had understood all of that clearly. Johann replied immediately that yes, sir, and thanked him sincerely for the hospitality. While accompanying the Count, he found himself thinking that Jaffrin's personality was a bit too aggressive. Even so, he seemed to be an honorable and fair person. And given that he was already being pursued by the Empire, forming alliances with powerful people like him would be extremely useful. Meanwhile, far away from there, in the main castle of House Abner, the situation was completely different. As soon as she received the news, Countess Abner was so furious that she knocked her own wine cup to the floor and demanded the report be repeated immediately. She asked, completely outraged, if her son Stefan had truly been captured and taken to the enemy's base. Then she demanded to know who the knight was who had dared do that to the heir of House Abner. The commander nervously replied that he had never heard of that man before. According to him, the one responsible was a knight named Johann Eitz. The countess's shriek of rage was so loud it could be heard from outside the castle. Without realizing it, Johann had just made yet another powerful enemy. Shortly after, the countess demanded to know exactly how everything had happened. So the general explained that Johann had appeared accompanied by a traitorous merchant in an extremely complicated situation. They had tried to warn Stefan, but he had ended up saying things he shouldn't have. Moreover, he had drawn his sword first, violating the knight's code of conduct. Because of that, he had been defeated in a legitimate duel. But as soon as she heard heard that, the Countess exploded in rage once more. She asked how that man dared speak that way about her son. According to her, Stefan had impeccable conduct and was perfectly familiar with the rules of chivalry. Overcome by fury, she immediately ordered the guards to arrest all those incompetents who had returned alive. Desperate, the general pleaded for them to be spared, affirming that everyone had done everything possible to protect Stefan. But before the guards could advance, someone stopped them with a whip. It was Lady Ulrike herself, the eldest daughter of House Abner and the true heir to the family. Completely cold, she declared that Stefan had clearly been defeated due to his own incompetence. According to her, he had made a foolish mistake on his own, so there was no reason to hold those soldiers responsible for his failure. The Countess said that her brother had been captured and taken hostage, and asked what else she could do in that situation. But Ulrike replied that all of this was her fault from the very beginning. After all, it was the Countess herself who had placed Stefan in command of the siege. In practice, she had only wanted to pad his military record to make him more relevant within the family. Furthermore, they had all the absurd costs to mobilize the army, the extra losses caused by Stefan during the campaign, and now they still had to deal with the fact that he had been captured. So Ulrike asked exactly how she intended to resolve that situation. The Countess was indignant and asked how she dared hold her responsible for all of this. But Ulrike replied coldly, telling her to rest for a while, because from now on, the one who would handle the entire situation was herself, Ulrike Abner, the next matriarch of the family. Meanwhile, the effects of the war struck each side in entirely different ways. In some places, people were extremely upset, still suffering from the consequences of the conflict. But inside Jaffrin's castle, the mood was completely calm. In fact, Johann had just received what was practically a treasure, a heavy chest full of silver coins, along with a few gold ones. When he saw it, Johann thought that not even a full year of working in Ides would have had him handling that much money. But one of the dwarves warned that it might still be too early to celebrate. After all, Johann still needed to receive the ransom payment for Stefan. That made Johann think back to the many fantasy novels he had read in his past life, particularly the stories about knights captured in battle. When someone managed to capture an important knight and bring them back alive, they received a fortune in ransom. On the other hand, when they were captured, they ended up losing an absurd amount of money. And the greater the risk, the greater the reward. But Johann hadn't captured just any knight. He had captured Stefan, the young master of an extremely wealthy family. The ransom payment for him would likely be enormous. Later, Jaffrin asked if Johann had liked the gifts he received. Among them was a silver shield with the troll killer emblem inlaid on it, a sword with the same emblem and a golden hilt, along with an elven chainmail of extremely high quality. And there was also Donan, a horse with monster blood mixed into his lineage. Johann didn't even know how to thank him for all of it. Jaffrin replied simply that he was glad he liked the gifts. Then he mentioned that a noble wanted to meet him very much, and suggested he take advantage of the opportunity. Johann immediately thought that connections with nobles were always useful, so he replied it would be an honor. But when he got there, he discovered that the person who wanted to see him was none other than that damn Stefan. Stefan slammed the table furiously, and said that as soon as he returned to Abner, he would challenge Johann to a duel. Johann provoked him immediately, asking why he didn't do it right now. Was it because this wasn't his house? Or because his mother wasn't there to protect him? Stefan told him to shut up, and declared that he was a member of the pure lineage of Abner, someone naturally superior. Johann replied with a mocking tone, saying yes, of course, before asking how much his family would pay for the ransom. But Stefan replied that he wouldn't speak to someone inferior like him. That only made Johann sigh in disappointment, so he walked over to the fireplace, picked up a poker still hot from the flames, and came back holding the glowing iron. Then he said that perhaps that would help Stefan speak a bit more agreeably. At that instant, Stefan panicked and asked what he was doing. He said that Johann still wanted to receive the ransom money, didn't he? But Johann replied that maybe he didn't care all that much about it. Maybe it would be better to heat things up a little. And before the poker even came close to his face, Stefan crumbled completely and started talking. He said he was probably worth around 100 imperial gold coins, maybe even 200. Johann almost fell off his chair hearing that. He asked if that wasn't ridiculously expensive, because it was more money than he had seen in his entire life. Meanwhile, Stefan thought to himself that he had always heard Johann was an honest knight, but looking at that scene, he started to wonder what kind of honest knight threatened someone with a glowing poker. Johann calmly sat back down at the table and said that it was so much better when Stefan answered politely. After that, Stefan began to explain the whole origin of the war. The daughters of the two houses were supposed to marry each other, and Johann discovered that same-sex marriage was something completely normal in that world. After all, noble marriages were treated far more as political alliances and bonds of power than as romance. After the marriage, each side would typically adopt a child to ensure heirs or simply keep lovers, so no one saw any problem with it. The true reason for the war was something else entirely. The greedy Countess Abner had demanded an entire silver mine as a condition for accepting the marriage, using it as a dowry for her daughter. But when Jaffrin refused the absurd demand, she decided to start a war over it. Good lord, now Johann was finally beginning to understand the entire situation. That was why Joffrin had been so generous towards Stefan despite everything. In the end, they were still family. This was nothing more than a dispute among great nobles, an absurd war driven by pride, money, and power. It was then that a servant entered the hall bringing the wine Stefan had requested. As expected, Stefan treated the poor man poorly for no reason, complaining about the delay and speaking to him as if he were garbage. But before Stefan even reached for the cup to drink, Johann calmly interrupted and asked why the servant didn't take a sip first. And that's all for this work today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like on the video. It helps us a lot. We'll bring new parts of the works we cover as quickly as possible. I hope you'll look forward to them, and see you next time.